This guy sold his soul and his body to 2 women, and his life was over. This guy's life is completely wrecked. When he gets home, his dad's sitting in a corner, miserable because he's out of work. His family's broke. His sister tells him there isn't even food to eat tonight. The reason for all this? Their mom's in the hospital sick, and a family friend stole their money and vanished off the face of the earth. Out of hope, our protagonist Chul Kang went online to find a quick way to make cash, and he found one. When he showed up at the location, he discovered he could sell his body and his soul to these 2 women. What they actually wanted was dead simple. Check this out. The day before, the protagonist answered dozens of questions. All of these right here. In the end, he got teleported to another world, and it was smack in the middle of a medieval war. This isn't a dream, and it isn't some game world. He instantly gets flooded with the body's entire memory. In this world, they're at war. The kid has a family, and he's out there fighting in the war for money. Kang accepts reality and fights like a complete animal to survive. His job was to get inside the siege tower and then breach the walls. He's one of the mercenaries hired to do exactly that. There was no asking to leave, so he followed orders, fought shoulder to shoulder with warriors, and the real protagonist had served in the army for 3 years. He didn't freeze up. This lunatic was able to tear through enemies and go straight for the wall commander. Those heavy armored soldiers are slow, so he moved fast and threw the man clean off the wall. The fall is brutal. Of course, the commander didn't survive. Believe it, that same loser from before was so eaten up with frustration over his life that he unleashed all of it right there, screaming for everyone to attack. He tore through dozens of soldiers. In the end, the enemy castle fell, and the king met the same fate as the French kings. After the victory, the mercenaries were gathered up. When they were told to stand ready, Parsons was the only one who actually understood military command. The general heard about the kid's performance, even in his very first war, and offered him a position in the army. But the protagonist carried this world's memories, and he decided to turn it down. He's just a commoner, and all he wants is cash reward. Walking away from there with his payout, the protagonist needed to figure out what the hell that was. What world is this? What body is this? Calmer now, he thinks. A coward like him killing soldiers in battle. That's insane. But Parsons' body collapses, and our real MC wakes back up in his own room. He remembers everything, like it was a dream. But then a gold coin he'd received earlier rolls across the floor of his room. No doubt about it, he really was in another world. He went to a place that buys gold, and they paid $1,000 for the coin. Serious money, and that's great news. But the adrenaline wouldn't drain out of his body. His hands are still shaking just remembering the battle. His phone rings. A woman's voice tells him to come to an address. It's about what happened yesterday. At the building, this girl already knew his name and told him she'd take him to the right floor. And it's not just you guys with the dirty thoughts. The MC also thought the girl looked like a succubus. Figured maybe he'd get lucky. But then the girl says she'd never wear something like that, and shock hits him. Wait, how did she just answer that? No way. The girl can read his thoughts, and the look on her face said exactly that. The girl told him a gold coin is worth $1,400, and that he'd sold his short. She also confirmed she can read his mind and his memories. Now he needed to go in. This was her boss. Now only one thought runs through the MC's mind. If the employee can read minds, what the hell can the boss do? The woman is extremely polite and introduces herself as the company's CEO. The woman tells him to sit down, saying she has been expecting him. Chul Kang thinks she looks less like a CEO and more like a celebrity. The woman says she is flattered by the thought, confirming that she can read his mind as well. She introduces herself as Woo Sin Hee, the company's administrator and CEO. The protagonist says it is an honor, then cuts straight to the point, asking if he truly sold his soul in some kind of pact. The woman confirms he is not wrong, and Chul Kang realizes his experience was real. She explains that, in a way, he did, but what he just completed was merely the tutorial. She tells him he is now level 1, and that is all the information she can provide for the moment, but he can use what he learned for new jobs. Confused, Chul Kang asks what she means and questions if he was chosen by chance. The woman asks if they look like a company that would grant such an opportunity for no reason. She then reveals she knows that Chul Kang's best friend stole his identity and ran up massive debts in his name. Shortly after, his mother suffered a terrible accident and has been in a coma ever since. So on top of his own debt, he now carries the burden of his mother's medical bills and all the damage his friend caused. The woman then asks if her information is correct. Tense, the protagonist demands to know what she wants. The woman hesitates. MC wonders why they use his family as leverage to get to him. She catches his suspicion and tells him to relax, guaranteeing his family remains untouched. He asks Woo Sun Hee again exactly what she wants from him. She states that for now, she needs to raise his level. Chul Kang asks if they want him back in the fantasy world. She confirms it. He points out that the tutorial and levels make it all feel like a game. She agrees that is the best way to process it. After all, they do not want him collapsing under the guilt of having blood on his hands. Chul Kang breaks down the facts. In that alternate dimension, he takes on missions, earns rewards for success, and levels up. Woo Sun-hee confirms he has it exactly right. He presses further, asking if the contract covers the rules. She says yes. The protagonist questions how he can just put his head down and follow orders without knowing who he makes the deal with. He argues that blind trust is completely irrational without knowing the contractor's motives or identity. She replies that it might be, but he misses the point. She praises his sharp tongue and claims the ambiguities in the contract exist to protect him, not screw him over. Woo Sun-hee explains that giving him raw context right now is like giving a child sex education by forcing them to watch adult content. She then drops concepts like avatar possession, parallel universes, divergent reality, and people crossing dimensions to execute a client's mission. She asks if any of that makes sense to him. He just thinks back to the young mercenary and the request from Parsons. It is an F level, the absolute lowest rank. He remembers that simply surviving in the territory qualifies him for the minimum requirements in mission completion. Woo Sun-hee adds that his heavy participation in the castle loot earns him extra pay. Going even further, he earns the recognition of 2 of the highest levels, qualifying him for a massive bonus reward. Woo Sun-hee seems certain people kill for a contract with her, but it is a hard pill for the protagonist to swallow. He figures his only option is to trust she tells the truth. If it is all real, then he appears completely real to the other people. The woman notes that beneath his insolence, he actually possesses a fragile mindset. It makes sense. That exact mindset is the reason they established the contract. She wraps up by saying the absolute most gratifying part is the reward for a successful mission. Every single gold coin equals 1,600,000 won. Payouts vary wildly depending on the client, making it entirely possible to become a millionaire overnight. The protagonist asks about the penalties. He needs to know what happens if he fails a mission or dies. She explains the character dies, but he survives in the real world. This brings Chul Kang some relief. However, she warns him against using that loophole as a free pass to cause chaos in the fictional world. She points out he hates the idea of someone trashing his own life without permission. Chul Kang admits the logic checks out. She adds that the ultimate downside to failing a mission is losing a level. He asks if that is the only penalty. Instead of a straight answer, she brings up the Parsons tutorial, asking about his reward percentage. He answers 1%. She counters by asking what happens if it hits 100%. The math hits him. He gets 100 million won. Woo Sun-hee explains that high risk brings high return. The reward scales directly with the client's level, just like the percentage earned from chaining successful missions. She makes it clear her highest level clients do whatever it takes to preserve their ranks. The protagonist locks onto the prospect of earning 100 million won. He realizes a higher level means an even bigger payout. The possibility fires him up. He takes a second to process the stakes and reaches a firm conclusion. Chul Kang has a crisis of conscience, realizing he just killed people for money, and the guilt is crushing. Woo Sun-hee tells him self-loathing is pointless. She reframes his actions, explaining that because of him, his clients get to survive and go home safe. The protagonist doesn't understand, but the woman insists that in an era where money talks, earning it is survival, a basic instinct. She explains this is a new way of life, recently arranged, and he only has to participate if he is interested. Woo Sun-hee makes it clear he is free to go home. They will not force him into anything. After a moment of thought, the protagonist asks what he must do next. In response, Woo Sun-hee just smiles, telling him he can find out for himself. A moment later, he is transported back to the parallel reality. The transition leaves him dizzy, wondering if he has made a terrible mistake. He opens his eyes to find himself clad in armor as an adversary lunges at him. An axe swings for his head and the protagonist screams in terror, but the blade smashes into the wall right beside him, leaving him frozen in a mix of fear and shame. The man who attacked him just smiles, leaving the protagonist completely baffled by what just happened. The man tells him to be more careful. He just triggered a trap. Only then does the protagonist see the truth. The man was not attacking him. He was saving him. The axe blocked an arrow that was about to pierce him. A wave of shame washes over the MC. The man explains he just saved his life, noting that in this labyrinth, the arrow was likely poisoned. The protagonist finally gets his bearings and realizes he is part of a group of 4 Sampat mercenaries, and the man with the axe is their leader. Suddenly, the group shouts a warning, as the leader triggers a trap of his own, and a heavy stone tied to a rope swings down and smacks him. The protagonist wonders how a guild leader could make such a clumsy mistake. He then starts to recall that these men are here to help him find someone, but the details are hazy. Just then, a system window appears. It informs him that he is inhabiting the character Urival Pilshin, age 24. His mission, explore the labyrinth and find Leopold, the son of Raleigh. He recognizes the status window, and his conversation with the woman from the company floods back to him. She had explained that when he crosses into the other dimension, he acts in the client's place, but his appearance remains the same. Everyone around him will mistake him for the character, and he must treat this world as if it is real. The protagonist worries this might be just like the last time, that he might have to kill someone again. In this situation, he questions what to do, convinced that if he proves incapable, the mission will fail. He thinks he may have returned too hastily, that he should have thought more carefully before signing the contract. But then the thought of his family steals his resolve. His new companions ask what he is thinking about, wondering if a lack of sleep has made his legs weak. He decides to do whatever is necessary and tells them he is fine. He understands one thing with absolute clarity. He has to complete the mission and return, no matter what happens. Uraval Pilshin is the youngest son of a knightly house, and from birth he works tirelessly to be like his father. But his life shatters when his mother is run down by a noble's carriage, a death that traumatizes and changes him forever. His father sinks into grief and alcohol, and his frail sister is too young to help. The entire weight of responsibility falls squarely on his shoulders. With little choice, Uraval enlists for the war, where sheer effort and pure luck lead him to great feats and many victories. But without the right connections, others steal all his merits. The pay is not enough to save his life, his home, or his family, and Uraval Pilshin believes he is finished. In this moment of despair, a single ray of light appears. The lord his knightly order follows, Count Raleigh, summons him for a mission. The Count explains his son ran too deep into the labyrinth seeking adventure and asks Uraval to bring the boy back. Uraval sees this as his one chance. Success means finally gaining powerful connections of his own, reigniting his hope of rising in the world. But it is the protagonist who is living this role. He tries to sleep, but cannot, forced to relive Uraval's memories on a loop. He concludes he must complete the mission to make it stop. He acknowledges the information, but the system alerts him. Uraval Pilshin's only characteristic is insomnia. Unable to sleep, the protagonist feels exhausted. He stops to think, finding the whole situation strange. It all feels familiar, closely resembling the circumstances of Parsons. A sick mother, a drunken father, a young sister, and a son willing to do anything. He wonders if this is deliberate, if the company is pushing these roles on him because they mirror his own life. The protagonist recalls the woman's words, that they want him to treat this world as his own. He believes they are choosing these scenarios to force him to act carefully, a realization that leaves him completely confused. His thoughts are cut short by a strange noise, the clash of metal, the sound of a nearby fight. He springs up from the ground and checks on his companions, only to realize Pizel is gone. He suspects Pizel is the one in trouble and immediately shouts for everyone to wake up. Not far away, a fight rages. A goblin attacks Pizel, who defends himself with a spear. But the goblin is not alone, and more rush toward the boy. Pizel fends them off with his spear and tries to flee, but the struggle leaves him too exhausted to get far. He stops for just a moment, and suddenly a massive orc appears. The boy turns, terrified, believing there is no escape. The furious monster swings down, and the desperate boy screams for help. Instantly, the protagonist appears at his side. He strikes with his sword, wounding the goblin. After defeating the monster, the protagonist approaches the boy to see if he's all right. Pizel confirms he is, and the rest of the group is relieved. The chief, however, scolds him, saying this is what happens when you wander off instead of sleeping. He then spots more goblins closing in, and demands to know if Pizel drew their attention. The boy insists it was an accident, but the furious chief demands a full explanation. The protagonist intervenes, suggesting they save the conversation for later, but the chief insists on doing things his way. The group has no choice but to unite against the massive goblin horde. The protagonist charges in, attacking fiercely, and together they cut down several monsters. He realizes that according to Uraval's memories, they've been in the labyrinth for 4 days, but this is the first time they've faced such numbers. He wonders if this explains everyone's desperation. It makes sense. These men are used for duels and wars, not monster hunting. The only reason they are here is because Uraval asked for help, and the chief agreed instantly, wanting to repay the man for saving his life. Back in the fight, the protagonist cuts down more goblins, realizing he's drifted from the group. He gets an idea and calls out to the archer, Caden. The protagonist tells him to get to high ground, explaining a new plan. Caden will focus on the larger monsters while the rest handle the smaller ones. Caden understands the tactic and agrees it could work. He runs toward the protagonist, who gives him a powerful boost, launching him into the air. From this new vantage point, Caden becomes the mercenary's trump card. With his new advantage, Caden's combat value is now equal to 10 men, but on the ground, the group's chief, Sampat, is surrounded. He screams for the goblins to back off, but they swarm him from all sides. The protagonist sees his concern grow as Sampat begs for help. The protagonist yells back, telling him to stop fighting them one by one and just plow through them all at once. The protagonist then orders Rob and Pizel to assist Sampat and finish off any stragglers. Desperate and nearly devoured alive, Sampat takes the advice and counterattacks. He acts like a tank, plowing through the monsters and killing several. The other members, including the relentless protagonist, rush to help. Through their combined effort, they finally wipe out all the enemies. The protagonist looks over the scattered goblin corpses, concluding the battle is over. After the fight, Caden asks Sampat if he's fine with the knight giving orders like he's the boss. With a bruised face, Sampat replies that Uraval is the chief, having saved his life and proven himself a capable leader. Pizel tries to defuse the tension, claiming the archer is just joking. But the protagonist's attention is fixed on Sampat, his expression turning serious. Sampat asks why he looks so grim. The protagonist points out that the chief is pale as a ghost and sweating heavily. Sampat insists he's fine, but he can barely stand, and a worried Pizel has to help support him. The protagonist orders them to lay Sampat on the ground and check him for wounds suspecting poison. Just then, a system message appears, startling the protagonist. A side quest alert has popped up right in front of him. The side quest requires the entire party to survive, offering a 10% payment bonus as a reward. The protagonist realizes that on top of the monsters, he now has to keep everyone alive, but considers the bonus worth the trouble. He immediately orders Rob to grab the supplements while he gathers his own medical items. Just then, Kadam finds the wound, a poisoned arrow in Sampat's abdomen. The injury looks nasty. Caden moves to suck the poison out, but the protagonist stops him instantly. He warns Caden that even a small open wound in his mouth could leave him in the same state as Sampat. Realizing the risk, Caden backs off. The protagonist states they can try another way to remove the poison and tells them to lay Sampat on the ground. He places his hands on his companion's abdomen and begins squeezing the wound to extract the poison, causing Sampat immense pain. The others try to hold him still, warning him that struggling will only make it worse. Rob returns with the supplements and suggests using alcohol to disinfect, but the protagonist warns him that it could accelerate the poison's spread. Instead, he asks for a canteen of water, explaining it's a better way to clean the wound. As the protagonist cleans the wound, Rob and Caden remark that they've always used alcohol for this, and now realize they've been doing it wrong. The protagonist thinks this is the extent of his first aid knowledge for poison, and all that's left is to administer an antidote. But looking at the vial in his hand, he gets a bad feeling, and realizes he's holding the antidote, not the water. He remembers Uraval making the exact same mistake, using the wrong medicine and accelerating a companion's poisoning. Caden asks what he's waiting for, and why he hasn't given Sampat the antidote. To buy time, the protagonist asks if their antidote is for poison or intoxication, but no one knows the answer. Caden just says they bought the first and cheapest antidote the pharmacist offered. The protagonist concludes that Uraval's memory was useful. He checks his bag and finds an absorber ivy, a type of medicinal herb he believes might work. The herb has antibacterial properties. While its effect isn't instant, it's a better option than risking the wrong medicine. As the protagonist prepares the herb, the others watch his careful work. After finishing, he tells Caden they can lift Sampat. The protagonist says he'll bandage him as fast as he can, and that Sampat just needs to endure the pain a little longer. After bandaging the wound, all that's left is to wait for his recovery. The protagonist states that knowing Sampat, he'll be on his feet soon. Pizel and Caden agree, commenting that if there's one good thing about their boss, it's his stubbornness. The protagonist then calls out to Pizel, who responds with a start. He demands Pizel apologize and explain why he led them into this situation. The others are also curious, asking what was so important that he got up in the middle of the night. Nervously, Pizel takes out a stored item and shows them a map, pointing to their current location. The protagonist is surprised he has a map of the dungeon. Pizel explains that according to the map, if they walk straight and turn left, they should find stairs leading directly down. However, he insists the stairs don't exist, claiming he searched the area multiple times and found nothing. Pizel insists that no matter how many times he searches, the staircase is nowhere to be found. He explains this is why the group feels like they're walking in circles, and he swears on his pride as a guide that he has tried everything. It turns out that while investigating the area, distracted by the map, he failed to notice goblins watching him and accidentally triggered a trap. By the time he realizes what's happening, he is completely surrounded. After hearing his story, the others exchange a look before punishing Pizel. They warn him to wait for them next time, because his recklessness almost got them all killed. The protagonist takes the map to verify it himself. He decides that he and Pizel will go take another look at the location. He leaves the camp in the others' care and follows the path with the boy, arriving at the spot where the stairs are supposed to be. Pizel insists the map must be wrong, arguing that the cartographer probably got confused in the labyrinthine dungeon. The protagonist asks where the map came from, and Pizel confirms it was part of the supplies given to them by Count Raleigh. After a moment of thought, the protagonist states that, according to the map, a downward staircase has to be somewhere in this area. Pizel agrees, repeating that he came to the same conclusion, but found nothing, remarking that it's not as if the stairs could just grow legs and walk away. But as the protagonist walks through the area, he notices something different about the floor. Pizel asks if he's found something, and the protagonist asks in return if anything seems off to him. When the boy doesn't understand, the protagonist points to the ground. He explains that the floor is normally flat and worn down from travelers, but questions why it's different only in this specific spot, right where the stairs are supposed to be. Now that the protagonist points it out, Pizel realizes there haven't been any of the usual sharp stalagmites in this area. The protagonist tells the boy to look up. On the ceiling, they see the staircase. Pizel wonders how it's even possible. The protagonist deduces the staircase couldn't have been built on the ceiling, and that it looks like some kind of trick. He figures the most likely explanation is that someone used magic to flip the staircase upside down. He recalls a method for breaking magic from Yuraval's diary. Unsure if it will work, he decides he has nothing to lose by trying. He hurls his sword toward the staircase. The weapon makes contact, striking a magical barrier, and things begin to shift. The protagonist and an impressed Pitzel watch intently. A moment later, the sword clatters to the floor, and the staircase returns to its proper place. Pitzel finally realizes these are the stairs they've been searching for. He can't believe someone used magic just to hide the path. The protagonist reflects on the situation. The map was provided by Count Raleigh himself, which means the Count was absolutely certain his son would be in this dungeon. He wonders if the aspiring adventurer told his father where he was going before he left. The protagonist also recalls when the Count hired Yuraval, remembering his instructions. If Yuraval found his son dead, he was to at least bring back the signet ring the boy would be wearing. With this, the protagonist realizes the signet ring seems more important to the Count than his own son. Pitzel asks if something is wrong. The protagonist considers that he might be mistaken, but something about this entire situation feels off. The protagonist rejoins the group and demands they tell him everything they know about House Raleigh. Caden questions his sudden seriousness, pointing out they should be celebrating the discovery of the stairs. But the protagonist insists something feels wrong and presses them again. Caden finally admits that they did uncover some information on Chief Sampat's orders. The protagonist is surprised and asks why they kept this from him. Caden explains they assumed Yuraval dislikes secret missions, and besides, their investigation only yielded rumors and gossip. They feared a reprimand, recalling how Yuraval refuses to let rumors affect his judgment unless he experiences something personally. Pitzel confirms this memory. The protagonist reflects on how different he is from Yuraval, then states that circumstances have changed and he needs to know everything now. The group insists it's nothing serious, but they finally share what they know. Count Raleigh, Yuraval's employer, has one son and one daughter, but recently, strange rumors have surfaced about the Count hiring a maid in her 20s who has a young son. Hiring a maid with a child is unusual, and to make matters worse, she seems to be living a comfortable life in the castle. Because of this, people are starting to question the true identity of the child's father. Everything clicks into place for the protagonist. This is why the Count cares more about the signet ring than his own son. He wonders if the son, groomed for 20 years to be the successor, is now just a distraction because of this new child. The entire setup feels artificial. Caden then asks if Yuraval is thinking this mission is tied to the Count's right of succession, surprising the protagonist that they've reached the same conclusion. He questions why they would agree to such a dangerous mission, reminding them that meddling in the affairs of a noble house is a death sentence. The protagonist warns that they could all be tortured or killed to eliminate loose ends, with no guarantee of their safety once the job is done. Caden dismisses the concern as speculation for a later time. He explains their job is to trust Chief Sampat, who described Yuraval as an honest kid and wanted to be there to help if needed. For Caden, that trust is enough. The morality of the mission is irrelevant. The protagonist is taken aback by this loyalty. Pitzel chimes in, telling him to save his thanks for the chief, since he's the one who dragged them all into this mess. The protagonist glances over at Sampat, who is still clearly in pain. Suddenly, the chief lets out a few grunts as the others rush to his side. He slowly manages to get to his feet. The protagonist asks if he's feeling better, but Sampat just complains that everything hurts thanks to the damn goblins, and asks why they are all acting like he was dead. The protagonist and the rest of the group are relieved and happy to see their chief recovering. A short time later, the group is back on task. Sampat is excited about the appearance of the magic staircase, but the protagonist sees nothing exciting about having almost died just moments before. The chief asks if one of Leopold's companions was the one who enchanted the stairs, and the protagonist confirms it's likely. Sampat urges them to hurry, reasoning that the other group must be close. Pitzel then asks how they are supposed to identify the Count's son, since Yuraval has never seen him. The protagonist reasons that the noble son will not look as rough and simple as they do, and should stand out from the others. Meanwhile, deep below the stairs, another party makes its way through the dungeon. A girl in the group suddenly senses something, looking back and listening intently. Her companions ask what she heard, and if they are being followed. She clarifies that it's not that, but rather that something feels like it's approaching them. One of them scoffs, saying it wouldn't be the first time some failures have tailed them, and suggests they just ignore it and move on. The girl, Asil, insists that it doesn't feel like orcs or goblins, but perhaps something far more dangerous. She is chided for overthinking, but she stands by her claim, stating that her woman's intuition is never wrong. The eldest member of their party suggests they remain on guard if something has managed to spook Asil. A warrior in the group, however, dismisses the threat. He states there is nothing to worry about, and if it is just more idiots looking for Leopold, they will simply take care of them. A strange, butterfly-like light appears near the group. The old man explains he used it to scout their rear and confirms they are being followed, as someone broke the magic he placed on the stairs. Leopold grows concerned at the news. Asil asks if it is the same group as before, but the old man is unsure. He suggests they set traps and wait for their pursuers. Meanwhile, the protagonist and his party advance, finding goblin corpses on the ground. They realize someone has recently passed through. Sampat is still fuming over the poisoned arrow, and the protagonist warns him not to take his frustration out on the dead. Caden intervenes, telling Uraval to let Sampat vent. He explains that Sampat's mother lives alone in their hometown, surviving only on the money her son sends. He asks the protagonist to ignore the chief's behavior, assuring him that Sampat is a good son. The revelation makes the protagonist think of his own mother, and for a moment he grows apprehensive. He now understands why Sampat is willing to fight as a mercenary, never knowing when he might die, all out of concern for his mother. Sampat then declares that being a mercenary is the best way to earn money, and that everyone in the group is in this line of work for family reasons. Rob explains that his brother's enlisted and his mother is sick. Caden says he lives alone ever since bandits invaded his home. Pizel, in turn, explains she has many people to help. The protagonist wonders how they can all have such difficult lives, yet remain so cheerful, something he cannot manage in his own life. Caden then asks the protagonist if he has similar problems. Before he can answer, Sampat tells Uraval not to worry if something happens to him, promising to personally ensure his family receives the mission's pay. The protagonist is glad to hear this, and makes the same promise to Sampat, vowing to care for everyone's family as if they were his own. Caden jokes that talk is cheap and that the protagonist would probably just run if something actually happened. Uraval lightheartedly replies that for Caden's sake, it is best they all return home in one piece. The group agrees. At that moment, a new system screen appears, informing them that a special attribute has activated. Because they all feel confident in one another, the group's speed will increase. For the protagonist, this is a great way to complete the mission faster. As they get closer, the party senses something, and the protagonist asks what is wrong. Caden points toward another group of people, and now Uraval can see them too. Leopold's group notes that there are 5 newcomers in total. One of them remarks that the previous group looked more like assassins, but this new one seems quite stupid. Another warrior warns him not to be hasty, as innocent-looking people can be more dangerous. His friend insists they cannot be connected to Leopold, but at that moment Sampat shouts from below, asking if they know anyone named Leopold. The other group immediately grows concerned. One of Leopold's men asks who they are and what business they have with Leopold. Sampat asks if they are Leopold's companions, and they confirm they are. The protagonist then steps forward, stating that Count Raleigh desires his son's return. He asks for Lord Leopold's location. One of the other group's warriors finds it strange that they reveal this so confidently and becomes suspicious. The protagonist realizes he may have made a mistake as their reaction is odd. He then demands to speak directly with the Lord. The girl, Assel, replies that they have nothing to declare to Count Raleigh's dogs. She warns them to flee immediately if they do not want to be beaten like the previous group. Sampat is enraged by the insult, questioning why they would call people they just met dogs. Isil simply tells them to back off. The swordsman in her group asks if she plans to use the trap to kill them. She replies that if they abandon the idea of taking Leopold and run, they might survive. The two groups stare each other down for a moment. Sampat asks the protagonist what the other group is muttering about. Then, the other 2 men back away as Asil steps forward, surprising the protagonist. The girl then points her finger to the sky, leaving Uraval's group to wonder what she is trying to do. The protagonist's group is confused by the girl's stance until Caden notices something is wrong. The very ground beneath them begins to move. Rocks fall from the ceiling as the tremors intensify. Boulders in front of them grind together, forming a massive golem, revealing the girl is a summoner. At her command, more golems rise from the earth and immediately charge forward to attack. Sampat immediately engages the golems, shouting for everyone to aim for the core, otherwise the creatures will just regenerate any damage. The protagonist joins the fray but quickly realizes it's easier said than done. Their weapons and stats are far too weak. The archer fires at a golem's eye, but the arrow simply bounces off its rocky surface, causing no damage. A moment later, Sampat takes a heavy kick to the chest and collapses to the ground, dazed, shocking his teammates. Enraged, the protagonist demands to know why they are being attacked for no reason. Aisel is unmoved, simply insisting they disappear. He tries to argue again, but the girl just repeats her offer. She won't kill them if they run. This only infuriates him more, and he insists this is all a misunderstanding. He asks if she is a companion of Lord Leopold, explaining that they are also allies, sent on a mission to escort him to safety. The girl doesn't believe a word of it. She tells them to go back and tell Count Raleigh to stop this terrible act of trying to kill his own son. For a moment, the group considers that she might be telling the truth. The protagonist asks her to wait, questioning if what she says is true, if the boy's father is really Raleigh. Assel asks if he's playing dumb or if he genuinely knows nothing. The protagonist then asks if Lord Leopold is safe. Assel confirms he is, but because of assassins like them, she doesn't know what the future holds. They insist they are not assassins, but she explains that a previous group said the exact same thing before attacking at the first opening. She claims that if it weren't for her party, Leopold would already be dead. The protagonist is stunned by this revelation, wondering which side is telling the truth. He doesn't know if the father truly wants to kill his son, or if this group is protecting Leopold based on false information. Asil tells them to return and send a message to their contractor. Leopold is now their permanent companion. Sampat shouts in protest that they are not assassins, but the protagonist cuts him off, telling him not to press the issue. In a gesture of surrender, he removes his armor and throws all his equipment to the ground, even the lamellar clothing underneath. The girl is taken aback by this act. His team questions his decision, but he addresses Asil directly, asking what more he can do to make her believe them. Sampat asks what he is doing, and the protagonist simply tells him to trust him. Sampat replies that he wouldn't be here if he didn't. With his hands raised, the protagonist asks if Lord Leopold's life has been threatened, staking his own life on the truth of his words. But when he looks up, the girl is gone. She uses a teleport skill and reappears right in front of him, slamming him with a kick. Even on the ground, the protagonist says he will risk his honor, swearing his group has no ill intentions and only wants to speak with the Lord. But the girl asks if he thinks he can buy her trust with meaningless words. She states she doesn't like this at all, and now she will kill every last one of them. But before she can move, every member of the protagonist's party throws their weapons to the ground, leaving the girl completely stunned. They declare that Urival is a man of respect who teaches mercenaries the meaning of true loyalty. If one life is not enough, then perhaps 5 will be. Sampat even states that if he had 2 necks, he would risk them both in Urival's name. The protagonist feels the trust of his companions, and his system issues an alert. Complete trust will be activated. Kneeling before the girl, he waits as she stands frozen, unsure how to react to the situation. His party members ask what she will do, declaring that if they must die, they will die together. Suddenly, one of the golems collapses to the ground, startling everyone. An instant later, all the other golems shatter into pieces, crashing to the floor with a tremendous noise that terrifies Leopold's group. Amidst explosions, the group runs together to escape the enemy goblins. During the escape, Sampat yells for Urival to run, not wanting him to die. Suddenly, the girl is caught off guard as an ogre 3 times her size smashes through a wall behind her and confronts her head-on. The monster lets out a terrifying roar, but Urival acts fast to save her, landing a direct kick to the creature's eye. The girl is stunned by his reaction, especially after what just happened between them. Right after the kick, Urival collapses, worrying his companions who see him charge the enemy when they can barely escape. He asks Sampat for help protecting the girl, and though his friend calls him a stupid meddler, he agrees to change their formation. Sampat orders Rob and Pizel to draw the monster's attention. Caden will aim for its eyes with his arrows, and Sampat himself will target its foot with his axe, hoping to exploit the ogre's dazed state. Furious, the monster charges toward the girl, who is still in shock. Urival tells her to get out of there with them, knowing they will all die if they stand still. The group follows the plan, drawing the creature's attention, which only enrages it further and provokes an attack. Sampat uses his axe to strike the monster's heel and yells for Urival to move and get the terrified girl away. However, Asil declares she is fine. Now recovered from the shock, she uses her abilities to join the fight. A goblin hand erupts from the ground and grabs the ogre's foot, giving Sampat the perfect opportunity to strike again, wounding the creature in an attempt to bring it down. The monster screams in pain, and Caden seizes the chance to fire an arrow straight into its other eye, blinding it. In a blind rage, the ogre tries to smash Sampat with all its might. Caden yells for his boss to run, but he is too close to dodge. But before the blow lands, a ranged attack saves Sampat. Leopold's warriors decide to help in the battle, with one firing a crossbow and a mage using magic skills, hitting the ogre from multiple directions. Asil is relieved to get their help, but Urival screams for them not to stop attacking. He rallies his group, and they all charge in with everything they have, determined to kill the ogre. It doesn't take long for them to succeed, and the monster finally falls to the ground, defeated. After the fight, Urival looks at his group, relieved and glad that everyone survived. But before he can celebrate, a sword appears at his neck, and a voice says it is now time for them to talk. A knight from Leopold's group warns the protagonist not to try anything, reminding him that he only has one life. The protagonist blames himself for the situation and argues that they all risked their lives fighting together, only to be treated so rudely. For his trouble, the knight's blade nicks his neck, alarming his party. The knight scoffs at the idea that fighting side by side makes them friends and questions why he should trust a man who could easily stab them in the back. The protagonist suggests the knight can decide what to do after they talk, admitting their group is no match for his. He introduces himself as Urival Pilshin and swears on his knightly honor that he is not hostile. He only wants details about Leopold. The knight scoffs at the oath, but because Urival helped Asil, he agrees to listen and calls for Lord Leopold. The Count's son appears, and the protagonist immediately recognizes him, his mind zeroing in on the mission's objective. Later, while the rest of the group sleeps, The two converse around a campfire. Leopold says he understands the Count sent Urival to bring him back, but insists the protagonist knows nothing about his situation. He explains that the Count no longer needs him now that a legitimate son has been born. The protagonist counters that the nobility would never accept an infant as a successor, which means Leopold remains the heir. But Leopold reveals the full truth. When he was 14, a drunken Count looked at him and announced that his wife's son was in the room. The protagonist finally understands the grim reality. Leopold is the son of the Count's wife and another man. Leopold explains that a noble family can never bring such an affair to light, and the only other person who knew the truth is dead. The most important fact is that the Count no longer considers him a son. The protagonist realizes the Count would never pass his title to an illegitimate child. He decides on a new course of action. He will return and report that Leopold died in the labyrinth, with his own companions confirming they saw the body. Leopold is relieved, calling the protagonist an easy person to deal with. Urival now understands Leopold wasn't seeking adventure, but running for his life. To make the plan work, he tells Leopold he needs the ring he wears, the one that proves his status as the family heir. But Leopold refuses, stating he cannot take it off. The protagonist questions if he still plans to succeed the Count, but Leopold insists he has given up on that path. The reason is personal. The ring is the only thing he ever received from the Count, and he cherishes it as his only family heirloom. The protagonist realizes the ring is Leopold's last connection to the man he saw as a father, representing his desire to live despite being cast out. He concludes Leopold would rather die than give it up, so he needs a new approach. He tells Leopold that he is a good man. Leopold is grateful, but asks why he is saying this so suddenly. The protagonist then asks if his companions can be trusted. Leopold confirms they can, as they have saved his life multiple times, and he plans to stay with them and go far away. With that confirmation, the protagonist insists that Leopold must give him the ring. Leopold immediately asks if this is a threat to his friends. The protagonist denies it, explaining the true danger. As long as Leopold has the ring, he remains the successor. He warns that the Count's knights are split into factions, and if the Count breaks the tradition of primogeniture, it won't just be the heir who dies, it will be the entire faction that backs him. Leopold understands the implication. He is a liability, whether he lives or dies. He tells Urival he has already abandoned his family, and that they will eventually forget him. He asks why he should make such a sacrifice for no reward. The protagonist's answer is simple. That is what family is. The response satisfies Leopold. He turns to the mage, whom he calls grandfather, and says he needs help giving the ring to the protagonist. The grandfather asks if he is certain, then thanks Urival for helping his grandson with a difficult decision, though the protagonist insists he did little. The grandfather pulls out a knife, warning Leopold that this will hurt a little. He points the blade at the boy's finger, making him flinch. In one swift, brutal motion, he carves the ring off along with the entire finger. The protagonist asks why that was necessary. The grandfather explains that a high-rank spell on the ring prevents it from being removed normally, and adds that the Count is the kind of man who would try to kill his own son without reason. His hand bleeding, Leopold hands the family ring to the protagonist and tells him to make sure this sacrifice is not in vain. Urival thanks him, now finally in possession of the ring the Count demanded. The protagonist wonders what will happen to Leopold's finger, thinking he is maimed for life. But the mage uses restoration magic, reattaching his grandson's finger in an instant. Leopold explains that healing magic can restore body parts, and asks what Urival will do now that he has the ring. The grandfather confirms the finger is fine, but states they cannot return the way they came because of the goblins, a journey their current condition will not allow. Since the protagonist lifted a burden from Leopold, the mage offers to compensate him with a teleport. The protagonist's party gathers, and Sampat notes the unexpected reward. Seeing that everyone is assembled, the mage announces he will begin. The protagonist expresses his gratitude and confirms they are ready. With magical words, the old man starts the spell, and a powerful magic emanates from him, its sheer force impressing the protagonist. Just before they vanish, Leopold asks Urival if they will meet again, saying he owes him his thanks. The protagonist is moved by the words and dismisses the gesture. Then, they are all teleported away. The protagonist is still reeling from the brilliant light, which is as intense as his first teleport into the mission. Suddenly, a new system message appears, declaring the mission complete. The message startles him, because the success condition was to return to Count Raleigh's mansion. The system clarifies that he has recovered the requested item, successfully completing Urival Pilshin's mission. He has also completed the subquest, as all party members are still alive. The system alerts him that he will now be teleported back to his original dimension. The protagonist thinks it would have been better to finish sooner, as the whole experience still feels like a dream. He reflects that Urival Pilshin, much like himself, does not have a good family situation, but Urival has companions by his side, and the protagonist feels a pang of envy, thinking how great it would be to have friends like that. He closes his eyes, cherishing the memories of his last mission. When he opens his eyes again, the world around him is completely different. He questions where he is, just as a new system message appears. The message states there has been a teleportation error, leaving him completely shocked. The system warns him of a new login and an access request from the simulator's former host. A new alert informs him he will be transported to the imaginary dimension and must please. The protagonist then appears in another place. From high above, he tries to understand what is happening, realizing he is floating over an unknown city, confused and desperate for an explanation. While floating, he sees something below. It is Sampat and Rob, walking nearby. He hears Sampat telling Uraval to share some of his ideas, since a great reward is coming soon. In that exact moment, he realizes he is no longer in Uraval's body. Seeing the character he was just controlling walk on its own sends Chul Kang into shock. The real Uraval walks beside his companions, Sampat and Rob. Suddenly, someone appears floating next to Kang, startling him. He looks over and sees Uraval himself, unable to understand how he can be both in front of him and down on the street with his friends. The Spectre introduces himself as Uraval Filcian, Kang's client, and expresses his pleasure at meeting him in person. Sensing the protagonist's confusion, Uraval waits for him to speak. Kang admits he is confused, thinking his mission was over, yet he remains. He never imagined he would meet the real Uraval. The Spectre explains that this is not real, but a scene he wants Kang to witness, showing his friends walking happily by his side. He reveals that he desires something from the protagonist, which is why he decided to meet him. When Kang asks what he wants, Uraval transports them to another location. They appear in Count Raleigh's house, where they see the physical Uraval talking with his friend Pidzel. The conversation is tense, with Pidzel clearly dissatisfied. Suddenly, Pidzel apologizes to the Count and lunges at Uraval, stabbing him in the abdomen. His friend falls to the ground bleeding and asks why he did it. Pidzel explains that the Count captured his family and will kill them all if he doesn't follow orders. From above, the Spectre of Uraval and Kang watch it all unfold. Uraval explains these events happened right after they completed the mission, a move by the Count to bury his secret. The protagonist is surprised, never expecting such an act from Pidzel. Uraval then reveals that the mission Kang completed was contracted with the sale of his soul after he died. He states that he also undertook the mission, but in his attempt, Caden and Rob died in combat inside the labyrinth, though the survivors still managed to capture Leopold. The protagonist asks if this means Leopold was taken by force. Uraval confirms it, saying that unlike Kang, they had no other way. Chul Kang then realizes Uraval can read his thoughts. Uraval tells him not to be surprised, as becoming a spirit taught him many new abilities. Kang remembers that taking Leopold's ring only required his finger, and asks if Uraval had to deal with his group, but Uraval says he never even saw them. He explains that the protagonist started too early. By the time Uraval found them, they were all already dead from an ogre attack. Kang now understands that in Uraval's case, things happened differently, and Leopold's entire group died. Uraval comments on how strange it is that no one on the protagonist's side died, since others tried and failed. At this, the protagonist asks what Uraval truly wants from him and what regret drives his mission even after death. Uraval points out that Kang obtained Leopold's ring through persuasion alone and questions why he doesn't try to persuade Pidzel and the Count. The protagonist looks at the scene, thinking he would not have died in that situation. He also realizes Pidzel was forced into a position with very few choices. He then asks if Uraval's request is the final part of this mission. Kang understands that these are not just characters repeating the same actions. As long as they are talking, he has a chance through dialogue. Uraval says he is anxious to see what the protagonist can do. With that, Kang is teleported back into his character's body, moments before Pidzel's knife strikes. He immediately dodges the attack, leaving Pidzel stunned and the Count in disbelief. The protagonist knows these are the events that follow his return from the mission, but he doubts he can persuade them in a situation like this. He then sees that Pidzel has not given up, but all he wants is a single chance to talk. The protagonist acts fast, grabbing Pidzel's hand and stunning the boy before throwing him to the ground and pinning him. With the mercenary restrained, he tells Pidzel to think clearly, warning that if he follows the Count's orders, everyone will die. The boy doesn't understand, but the protagonist insists he think it through. He asks why the Count wants him dead, explaining it's because he knows the secret of his bloodline. Uraval presses his argument, explaining the same fate awaits everyone in his group. He asks what makes Pidzel think the Count will let him live. But Pidzel reveals he doesn't care, because his family is being held hostage. He explains the Count promised to free them if he kills Uraval and all his companions. The protagonist glares at the Count in anger and asks if Pidzel really believes that. The mercenary claims the Count also promised him a good social position and a handsome reward. Seeing the boy's naivety, the protagonist questions if someone who breaks a promise to a knight will ever keep their word to a mere mercenary. Pidzel begins to realize the trap. Uraval states that if he kills his companions, his family will die right after, then turns to the Count and asks if that isn't the plan. Pidzel is confused but waits for the noble's answer. The Count, however, denies the protagonist's version. He claims that as soon as Pidzel Pizel finishes his task, he will guarantee his family's safety, along with a considerable reward. The Count then goads Pizel, asking if he's going to believe that lie and abandon his family. The mention of his family sends the boy into a rage. He breaks free from the hold, to the protagonist's dismay. Pizel grabs his knife again and lunges at the Count, declaring he isn't stupid enough to fall for his lies twice. The Count shows no reaction, simply standing still as he waits for the attack. But just as Pizel is about to strike, he's caught completely off guard. The Count strikes him first, questioning how a mere mercenary could oppose him and calling him pathetic. As Pizel falls bleeding onto the table, the protagonist realizes he couldn't predict the noble's movements. He wonders if the Count is truly that skilled. As the Count approaches, he realizes he doesn't have a sword. The Count says Urival forced him to do the dirty work, knowing the knight was disarmed at the entrance. He explains his plan was to make them kill each other over a reward, but he's changed his mind and will now finish Urival with his own hands. The protagonist is in trouble and can't see anything to use as a weapon. He knows the moment he blinks, he will be attacked. The Count gets closer and remarks that Urival handled the task strangely, mentioning he heard he didn't cross swords with that boy. The protagonist figures he must be talking about Leopold and, to buy time, asks what the Count expected him to do. The noble replies that he didn't expect him to bring the ring back without anyone getting hurt. Urival keeps the conversation going, saying the ring was very important to Leopold. He adds that the boy sadly said it was the only thing he ever received from the Count. The noble asks if Leopold really gave up the ring so easily. The protagonist wonders why the Count is still asking questions instead of killing him on the spot. He decides to play along and says it wasn't that simple. Hearing this, the Count becomes visibly curious. The protagonist realizes the noble's curiosity is the only thing keeping him alive. He decides to use this opening, continuing the story. He explains that before Leopold handed over the ring, there was something he was extremely stern about. Sensing the Count holds some regard for Leopold, the protagonist uses it to his advantage. He tells the noble that Leopold's only wish was to live by his father's side, protecting him as a loyal son. He adds that Leopold assured him it was never detestable to be with the Count. The noble's expression softens, a hint of sadness in his eyes, and the protagonist knows he is on the right path. The Count asks if this was the condition for the ring, and the protagonist confirms it. He received it in exchange for an oath. The Count remarks that he always knew Leopold was peculiar, but he doubts the boy would trade the ring for mere words. The protagonist quickly counters that there is more to the story. He explains that he explored a dungeon with Leopold and his companions, where they survived a near-death experience together. During that ordeal, Leopold watched him closely, and only after deciding he was trustworthy did he finally hand over the ring. The protagonist declares that he earned the boy's trust, and to honor his promise, he now swears absolute loyalty to the Count, kneeling before the noble. The Count stares at him seriously for a moment, then erupts in laughter, leaving the protagonist confused. He tells Urival he always knew he was stubborn, questioning how he can say such things now. To the Count, it all sounds like a desperate plea for survival. The protagonist's plan seems to crumble, but to his shock, the Count agrees to accept the oath. He closes the distance, declaring he will make Urival pay with his life as he swings his sword. But the protagonist dodges the strike. He explains that this very danger is the greatest reason his oath will hold true. Intrigued, the Count halts his attack and demands to know what Urival means. The protagonist states that while he is no master schemer, he is not ignorant of such plans. The Count grants him a moment and tells him to get to the point. Urival then explains the value of a knight everyone believes to be honest and trustworthy. He describes himself as a knight who only appears naive, a clever facade that he assures the Count will be incredibly useful. The Count is confused, and the protagonist sees his enemy's expression shift. He presses his advantage, explaining the utility of controlling someone universally seen as trustworthy. Whenever the Count hatches a plan, Urival can be a key piece. He adds that his voice can be used however the Count sees fit. No one would ever doubt him if he claimed to have witnessed Leopold's death with his own eyes. The Count asks if this is a bargain. Urival denies it. This is not a bargain, but an equivalent exchange. He states the Count only needs to deliver his promised reward, reminding him it is crucial for his dire family situation. He also guarantees he would never betray the man who spared his life. The Count listens, then declares that Urival is far more dangerous than he imagined, impressed by his cunning. The protagonist concludes with the old saying, "Keep your friends close, and your enemies closer." The Count finds the entire situation interesting, admitting he never imagined such a turn of events. But he raises a practical issue. How does Urival plan to silence the mercenaries from the mission? Knowing Pizel is already gone, the protagonist replies that he has a way, as soon as he gets the Count's permission. The noble questions why he needs it. Urival then reveals his shocking plan, to swap the true story for a complete fabrication. He suggests they spread a rumor that the Count's beloved wife betrayed him and bore another man's child. The Count explodes with fury, rebuking Urival for his words. This is the noble's greatest secret, but the protagonist knows he must expose it to win his trust. Despite his rage, the Count orders him to continue. He gives a severe warning that if this is some kind of joke, Urival will regret it until the end of his days. The Count waits for the conclusion, and the protagonist feels cornered, knowing one wrong word means losing his head. He begins detailing the fabricated tale. He explains that every time the Count sees his non-biological son Leopold, he remembers his wife's betrayal, which is why he always scolds the boy. Despite this, the naive Leopold keeps following his father, digging up the Count's pain until he finally makes a cruel decision. The protagonist adds that in this story, the Count decides to resolve everything only after recovering the family ring. The Count, however, asks if Urival truly believes this story will keep the mercenaries silent and demands a guarantee. Seeing the Count's genuine reaction, the protagonist explains that mercenaries leave home for money. They don't fear death, but they do fear their wives' betrayal. He argues they will empathize with the Count's story, understanding his humiliation and pain. This shared feeling will keep them silent for life, something threats and bribes can never achieve. Still doubtful, the Count expresses that he doesn't believe a mere mercenary could ever understand his feelings, and the protagonist figures the noble's pride is wounded. He takes the Count's genuine reaction as a good sign. The Count then asks how Urival will handle the situation if Leopold returns. The protagonist assures him there's no need to worry, because that will never happen. When pressed for certainty, he explains that Leopold values the people he cares for. As a warm-hearted man, he won't come back and cause trouble for them, especially since he still loves his father. This seems to convince the Count, who remarks that Leopold has indeed always been generous, and perhaps it's better not to be. He calls Urival splendid, a great storyteller. The Count then asks what Urival thinks is most important for a knight on the battlefield. Unsure of the reason for the question, the protagonist answers that he believes it is spirit. The Count agrees that spirit is important, as are swords and armor, but claims the most crucial thing is the horse. He describes horses as large, difficult animals that with proper training become deadly weapons. With that, the Count declares that he considers Urival a great war horse. Realizing it's best to just go with it, the protagonist watches as the Count extends his sword and touches it to his face. The Count declares that from this moment on, his name is Urival Halls, performing a knight's oath to name him. He then warns that since Urival has seen his true face, he will witness true hell if he disappoints him. The protagonist agrees. Seeing the boy's body still bleeding, he says he wants to take Pizel to a doctor before it's too late. The Count permits him to do as he wishes, leaving the boy in his care. Pleased, the protagonist thanks him for the gesture, but suddenly everything around him freezes, leaving him confused. He realizes time has stopped and wonders if the mission is over since he convinced both Pizel and the Count. Looking up, he sees the real Urival and says he did what was agreed, asking if he is satisfied with the outcome. But something seems wrong. The real Urival begins to scream at the top of his lungs, making the protagonist wonder what is wrong with him. As Urival continues to scream, the protagonist tries to calm him, asking what is wrong. Urival questions why things never ended this way before, believing he should have saved everyone. The realization that it was possible sends him into a mental collapse. He tells Kang he always believed his best efforts would be rewarded, but now he sees it was never that simple. Urival thanks Kang, declaring an end to his long delusion. He hopes the protagonist learns a lesson from his foolish life and is blessed with wisdom. Kang argues that it isn't fair, claiming he could never gather companions the way Urival did. He explains that Urival already possessed the trust and hearts of his friends, which is the only reason for this success, and insists Urival's life was not stupid. The protagonist adds that Urival only needed to be a little softer and listen more to the advice of others. Urival remarks that Sampat once told him the same thing, and that the difference between them is Kang's heart. The protagonist is flustered, but Urival then offers him a gift. He explains it is a fragment of his soul, his last pride, and declares the protagonist worthy of caring for it. Kang admits he doesn't know how to use it, but accepts the gift with thanks. He is suddenly teleported to a field and wonders where he has been sent now. From above, Kang sees people greeting an approaching lord. The lord is an older version of Urival, who is warmly received as he passes by. A woman emerges from an accompanying cart and begins distributing food to the people. The protagonist realizes this is Urival's family. Urival explains that this is the reward promised to him in exchange for selling his soul and offering his life to the contractors. He states that he waited a long time for this mission to be completed, but it was Kang who finally achieved it. But the protagonist understands this is not reality. It is a lie, a comforting dream. This is the price for selling his soul. Urival was never greedy for power or riches. He only wanted his family to live in peace. But he lost everything, which cast him into a bottomless pit of suffering for a very long time. The protagonist wonders why the world is so cruel and why a man like Urival would sell his soul. Urival, however, answers Kang with another question. He asks why a man like the protagonist, who can see into people's hearts, chooses to work in this kind of business. The protagonist doesn't answer directly, only giving an evasive reply that the world is not an easy place. A moment later, a bright light rushes toward him, and he realizes he is being teleported again. He wonders where he is going this time, thinking that perhaps he is returning home. Back at his company's headquarters, Woo Sun-hee works at a control panel. She cannot believe Chul Kang achieved a perfect resolution. That mission was doomed to fail. On top of that, he also completed the extra stage. She orders her secretary to investigate the protagonist more deeply. Staring at the panel, she wonders what just happened. The system updates Kang's member level to 3 and grants him a special item, the soul fragment of Uraval Pilshin. He is immediately teleported back to his original dimension. At the company headquarters, Woo Sun-hee thanks him on behalf of the organization for his excellent performance. She remarks that 2 perfect solutions in a row is an incredible feat, and that Uraval's spirit was deeply grateful. But as they speak, the secretary notices something is wrong. The protagonist feels unsettled. He points out that according to Uraval, he was the first person to ever complete that mission, and asks if Woo Sun-hee sent him there expecting him to fail. She denies it, claiming they only wanted to make things more convenient. Kang challenges her, stating that killing monsters is far better than killing humans. Woo Sun-hee retorts that she worked hard to find a suitable mission, and asks if he would rather be sent to a battlefield instead. She dismisses his concerns, stating that what matters is that Kang succeeded and returned safely. He asks if he should be grateful, but Woo Sun-hee points out they never informed him it was an IM mission. Kang recognizes her cunning as the secretary calculates his payment. She announces that 5% plus an additional 10% comes to a total of 15. Converting 3 gold coins from Tailroad, his final earnings are 4,800,000 won. The protagonist is surprised by the amount. It's not a small sum, but it feels low for everything he endured. He tries to negotiate, rounding the payment up to 5 million by arguing he achieved a perfect resolution and saved the entire mercenary group. He points out that on the Parsons mission, a 1% fee earned him 1.5 million, so he questions why 15% now only amounts to 4.8 million. Woo Sun-hee explains that the Parsons case was special, including a bonus from the mission's spoils. For this mission, the titles and territories he earned from his knighthood are not part of the calculation, as those were personal matters for Uraval's spirit. The official mission was only to retrieve the ring. The protagonist realizes he essentially worked for free, pushing himself until his nose bled, but Woo Sun-hee reminds him that he still has Uraval's reward. As Kang considers this, Uraval's soul fragment materializes. Woo Sun-hee notes its rarity and offers to buy it for a good price, 8 million won. Kang realizes the item is worth more than the entire mission payment. It's as if Uraval gave him his most precious possession. He asks if he has to sell it now, but the secretary clarifies that he can sell it any time, or even choose to use it himself. The protagonist doesn't know how to use the fragment. Woo Sun-hee explains it can grant him attributes like Uraval's power and valor from when he was alive, a power Kang recognizes would be useful. He then changes the subject, asking if Uraval will continue to exist in that world. Woo Sun-hee confirms he will, at least until the next contractor arrives. In the meantime, she says, Uraval can live in a happy dream, all thanks to Kang. Kang asks if this means the world resets every time a new mission begins. Woo Sun-hee confirms it does. The protagonist realizes that Uraval is forced to constantly witness his own failure, the most painful moments of his life, on a loop. Kang thinks he would go insane if he had to relive his own worst moments repeatedly. He recalls a specific incident from 3 years ago and shudders at the thought of it replaying for eternity. Just then, Woo Sun-hee's mood shifts, and she tells him to listen carefully. She reveals that throughout his life, Kang has experienced an unusual number of horrible incidents, as if something is destined to go wrong no matter what he does. He asks what she means. Woo Sun-hee admits they ran a simulation based on his data. Kang is disturbed by this, but she continues. The simulation shows the rate of misfortune in his life is indescribably high, as if someone is toying with his fate. The protagonist is shocked. She then delivers a final warning. He must find a way to resolve his karma, or a great tragedy will befall him. Terrified, Kang demands to know what will happen to him. Woo Sun-hee admits they have no definitive answer, but she can guarantee he will face a situation so agonizing, he will wish for death. The protagonist refuses to take the threat seriously. He argues a simple simulation cannot dictate his entire life. He doubts anyone is toying with him and questions how misfortune can be changed by a simple wish. Woo Sun-hee says she could explain again, but there is little more to add. Instead, she tells Kang she can show him how to change his karma. Reducing it will also lessen the harmful effect on his family. The protagonist immediately demands to know how. The woman's answer is simple. he must reach level 10. The benefits and rewards at that level are on a completely different scale, transforming his world into something new. According to her, those rewards are enough to change his destiny. Kang latches onto the idea of these rewards. If he reached level 3 after only 2 missions, then level 10 seems entirely possible. He begins to tremble with anxiety, realizing he has no other way to earn money right now. He agrees to complete more missions and asks when the next one will be. Satisfied that she has convinced him, Woo Sun-hee says they will be in contact soon. After the meeting, the protagonist walks the streets. He feels the exhaustion and the aches from the mission. The wounds are real. Kang remembers the reward was deposited as cash, not gold coins. He checks his phone and sees the balance. After a 5% exchange fee, his account holds roughly 4.5 million won. He realizes he's made almost 6 million won in just a few days. He thinks about level 10 again, and wonders if money can solve any unfortunate incidents in his future. He knows his family is crushed by massive debt and his mother's hospital bills. The reason the man he once called a friend stabbed him in the back was also because of money, but now he believes everything will be resolved once he reaches level 10. Back at the company building, the secretary asks Woo Sun-hee if a karma value that high isn't the very personification of misfortune. Woo Sun-hee confirms it. At that level, it's enough to drive a person to suicide within a few years. She adds that they ran a simulation because of Kang's success, but the results were not what they expected. The secretary then asks if she will check on how Mr. Kang is doing. Woo Sun-hee says she cannot leave such a valuable asset alone. Parsons and Uraval were cleared perfectly, and Kang reached level 3 after only 2 missions. She asks how many missions are left, and the secretary replies that there are 12. Woo Sun-hee then orders her to calculate the experience he would gain if he finished them all perfectly. The secretary asks if the president believes Mr. Kang is capable of such a feat, but Woo Sun-hee just insists on the calculation. After running the numbers, the secretary reports that if he succeeds, he will gain 34 million experience and reach roughly level 17. Woo Sun-hee acknowledges that level 17 is quite high. She sees it as a chance to clear all the low-level missions, but delaying his level up would leave a record on his file. The president considers what she should do. Then, she says to add a little more karma. She asks the secretary what would happen if they raise the value by around 3 million. The secretary is shocked and asks if the president wants to increase his karma instead of reducing it. She warns that Kang will break under such an increase, and if he can't take it and kills himself, the office will hear about it. But the president addresses Miss Min directly, saying she didn't actually ask her to do it, only to calculate it. She gives a new command. Remove Mr. Kang's family and friends from the equation. A system alert flashes. His luck plummets instantly. Woo Sun-hee declares that this should be enough. Miss Min asks if the president is sure about this, but Woo Sun-hee tells her not to worry. Even if he gains a lot of experience, they will just offer to exchange it for money. Finally, she orders the secretary to put Mr. Kang's account into the negative, but to make sure they can deposit funds into it whenever they choose. The secretary asks if the president thinks this can be solved with money. Woo Sun-hee replies that, knowing Mr. Kang, he will probably accept on his knees. According to her, on the entire planet, especially in Korea, money can solve anything. Before leaving, Woo Sun-hee says she will call the main office. She wants to put Mr. Kang under 24-hour surveillance so they don't risk losing such an exceptional talent. The president wants to support the protagonist and make him grow quickly, thinking she will do something important when he is finished. With a bag full of groceries in his hand, the protagonist feels a rare moment of joy. It's the first time he has ever bought this much meat with his own money, enough for his family to feast for the first time in half a year. He thinks that no matter the situation, money is always a good thing, and the feeling of stability even seems to lessen his anxiety. But in his mind, Kang is already calculating the costs: rent, credit card debt, daily expenses, and his mother's hospital bills. He knows he has so many overdue payments that the 3 million won will vanish in the blink of an eye. Beyond the debts, he has another problem: explaining where the money came from. He considers telling his family he found a job or that he won at gambling. Since it's such a large amount, he knows they will be suspicious no matter what, so he concludes that saying he won a bet is the best excuse. As he arrives at his apartment and enters the door code, a man calls his name, remarking that it's been a while. The moment the protagonist turns and sees Cho Min-soon, the bag of groceries drops to the ground. Blind with rage, Kang lunges at his ex-friend, cursing him before slamming a fist straight into his face. Cho hits the floor, and the protagonist grabs him by the collar, demanding to know what he's doing here and if he has a death wish. Cho tries to explain himself, but Kang cuts him off, questioning why he would show his face after destroying his family. Cho Min-soon begs Kang to wait, explaining he is here because of his sister. Hearing this, the protagonist freezes for a moment. Cho insists he just wait. After a pause, Kang tells him to spit it out, warning that he will kill him if he says anything ridiculous. Cho Min-soon then remarks how unbelievable it is that Kang would punch him just for seeing his face. The sight of Cho smiling makes the protagonist even more furious, reminding him of the recent trouble his family went through because of this man. Kang concludes that Cho is, in fact, asking to die. He grabs a bottle from the fallen bag, shatters it into a jagged weapon, and tells Cho to stop wasting time. He needs to speak now, because the very sight of his face makes Kang sick. Cho says he has bad news, but he can't deliver it while Kang is holding the bottle. Kang insists on knowing immediately, so Cho reveals the truth. He was out for some nightlife because of an issue with an insurance contract, and that's when he ran into Yan Wu. The protagonist is stunned by the news. Cho continues, explaining it was a hostess bar and that he went without knowing she worked there. He claims he didn't touch her and immediately sent her home, even alleging he threw away a 70 million won contract because of it. Cho adds that since the protagonist's family seems to know nothing, he thought it could cause problems in the future if he just ignored it. Kang asks when this happened. Cho replies it was the night before, and he was told it was her second day working there. Furious, the protagonist asks if Cho came here just to tell him this. He says yes, explaining that the place has a terrible reputation, and it could be a problem if she works there any longer, so he was worried. Kang doesn't care about Cho's concern. He sees him as the trash that ruined his family. He remembers hearing that the first kill is the hardest, but the second is easy. Still, he forces himself to calm down. He cannot become a murderer and bring even more trouble to his family. Controlling his rage, he asks Cho for the location of the bar. As soon as he gets the information, Kang hails a taxi and heads straight there. He gets out of the car, sees the building's facade, and walks toward the establishment. He approaches the sign, confirming he is in the right place. Before entering, he thinks to himself that this is no way for his sister to be making a living. Kang enters the establishment, where the receptionist asks if he's alone. The protagonist ignores him and demands to know if someone named Yan Wu works there. The receptionist, surprised, asks what this is about. Kang cuts him off, stating he knows she works there, and that a regular client, Cho Min-soo, sent him with a message for her. He considers revealing he's her brother, but the mention of Cho's name is enough. The receptionist tells another employee to get Yan Wu. The employee reports that Yan is already with clients in room 5. The receptionist explains he can't pull her away from a job and asks if Kang wants to leave a message or wait. Kang ignores him and marches toward the room. The receptionist tries to block his path, telling him he can't act this way in a place of business, but the protagonist shoves him to the ground and continues on. He runs down the corridor, reaches room 5, and throws the door open. Inside, men are drinking and being entertained by women. One of the clients demands to know what he's doing there uninvited. Kang ignores him, calls out to his sister, and asks what she thinks she's doing. Yan Wu is shocked to see him and asks how he found her. Another client confronts the protagonist, but Kang just stares him down with a cold glare, forcing the man to retreat. Without another word, Kang grabs his sister's arm and yanks her out of the room. She asks how he found this place and if Cho was the one who told him. Kang is too furious to speak and just tells her to be quiet as he drags her away. Back at the reception desk, a large man blocks their path. The receptionist accuses Kang of disrupting business and demands to know how he'll compensate them for ruining the mood. The large man grabs the protagonist and lands a punch, making Yan Wu cry out. But Kang has endured far worse. He immediately counters with a vicious headbutt, dropping the man instantly. He then sarcastically asks if a single punch is fair compensation for disrupting business, mocking their ridiculous standards. His sister tries to hold him back as the receptionist looks on in terror. Kang asks if he still wants to be compensated, then grabs Yan Wu and drags her out of the establishment before anyone can answer. Outside on the street, Kang storms forward in a blind rage. His sister tells him he's hurting her, but he doesn't listen. She finally rips her arm away, demanding he let her go. Kang spins on her, asking if she's out of her mind, earning money in a place like that. He questions why she couldn't find a better job and asks if she has any shame for their parents, but instead of answering, she just starts laughing. Kang demands to know what's so funny, and Yan Wu tells him he doesn't know anything and is completely overreacting. Kang demands to know what she means. Yan Wu retorts that she feels no shame for how she earns a living and questions why she should feel sorry for their parents. She asks if he has any idea how much debt their family is in. She explains that after their mother's accident, while Kang was lost in shock, she and their father had to cover everything: old debts, hospital bills, and daily expenses. She confronts him, making it clear that a normal corporate job could never be enough to pay it all back. Yan Wu explains she doesn't spend her nights drinking and smiling for fun. She does it out of necessity. The debt is over 100 million won, with interest piling up at 100,000 per month. She accuses him of hiding in his room while she suffered, telling him he has no right to lecture her. Seeing her tears, Kang realizes it's all true and is crushed by guilt. He can only argue that she should have told him sooner, insisting he would have found another way to get the money. She scoffs, saying if it were that easy, they'd already be free of debt. He asks how much they owe now, and she reveals she paid some of it off while he was hiding. A dark suspicion hits him, and he asks if she took an advance from the club owners. She confirms it. Desperate, Kang demands to know how much. Her answer floors him. 40 million won. The number sends Kang reeling. He warns her of the dire consequences of taking money from people like that and orders her to return it immediately. But his sister explains it's too late. She already used the money to pay off other debts. Yeon-woo accepts that she is now chained to the club until the loan is repaid, a risk she took with her eyes wide open. Kang is shaken, reflecting on how he always saw his sister as pure and innocent. He wonders why she went this far, and if she was always capable of this without him ever noticing. Then, he remembers Woo Sun-hee's words, that his karma is a disgrace, and that its effect on his family would diminish. He concludes his sister is in this mess because of him. His mind made up, Kang tells Yeon-woo to quit the club immediately. He tells her to find another job or just stay home. Furious, she asks if he even heard a word she said. He ignores her, reminding her that she ran into Cho yesterday. He asks who's next. One of their parents' friends. He demands to know if she wants to make their father collapse from grief. Through her tears, she insists she has no choice and challenges him to offer a better alternative. Kang takes her hand, comforting her. He tells her not to worry about the money anymore. He will handle everything. When she asks how, he simply states he will do whatever it takes. Yeon-woo grips his hand tighter, asking what he's planning to do, begging him not to sell his organs. Kang reassures her it's nothing like that. Still suspicious, she presses him on how he'll get the money. In response, Kang asks what kind of person she takes him for, then pulls out his phone to show her his earnings. She is stunned by the numbers and asks what kind of work he's doing. He explains he was lucky enough to find a job that pays extremely well. With this proof, he insists she quit the club, telling her it's not the solution. He reaffirms that as her brother, he will handle everything from now on. Moved by his promise, she begins to cry, making Kang feel a little awkward. Shortly after leaving his sister, Kang returns to the company headquarters. He marches straight to the president, gets right in her face, and demands she give him her most profitable mission. He declares he is going to become the level 10 she's always talking about. The protagonist insists he wants to become level 10 immediately, but Woo Sun-hee calls him stubborn. Kang counters that difficulty is irrelevant. He's already risked his life on every mission so far. The president asks if this is about his sister, pointing out his need for a huge amount of money. The protagonist realizes she's read his mind again. Woo Sun-hee apologizes for bringing up his personal life, but Kang cuts her off. He has no time for explanations and asks directly if she has a 40 million won mission. She confirms she does, and he immediately demands to be sent. The president gives him a strange look, unsettling Kang enough to ask what's wrong. She explains that she can send him on the mission, but warns that at his current level, his death is a 100% certainty. Kang asks if there's even a small chance of survival. Woo Sun-hee realizes she hasn't explained the mission's risk. She clarifies that the risk, or synchronization rate, determines the damage he takes, affecting both his physical body and his soul. Because Kang is only level 3, his risk rate is locked at 5% for his own safety. But as mission rewards increase, that rate climbs closer to 100%. She concludes that removing the safety lock for a 40 million won mission is pure suicide. The protagonist pushes again, asking if there isn't even a 1% chance of survival. The president's answer is a flat no. Kang realizes she won't bend, his hope of clearing his sister's debt in one go completely crushed. Woo Sun-hee warns him not to forget that his death will do nothing to help his family. The protagonist knows this job is his only chance, the one thread of hope that can save his family. He resolves to be patient. He absolutely cannot afford to die. With this new mindset, he asks for the most profitable mission he can take. Woo Sun-hee claims she isn't sure, as there are no missions available for him right now. When Kang presses for a timeline, she just repeats that she doesn't know. The protagonist wonders if there are truly no missions, or if she's just telling him to wait. The president says they will call as soon as something comes up and tells him to be patient. He leaves the building, completely dejected. He remembers the confident promises he made to his sister, all because he trusted this company. Now he has no idea what to do or where he'll get the money. Kang considers asking his ex-friend for a loan, but immediately dismisses the idea. The amount is too large to owe someone. His mind is torn. One part of him thinks there's always a chance, but another warns that such a move would drive away his remaining friends. As he walks the streets, he sees posters for loans. He knows a bank loan is better, but remembers being rejected before for his low balance. He racks his brain for a solution, but the only option left seems to be a place just like the one his sister was in. The thought drives him mad. Later that day, Kang returns to the company building. Woo Sun-hee is surprised to see him back so soon. In a desperate move, the protagonist asks if she can lend him the money he needs. The president finds this intriguing. He told his sister to return her advance payment, yet now he's asking for one himself. She points out that he, of all people, should know what an advance payment truly means, but Kang doesn't care about the consequences. He declares this is the only place he can earn that kind of money and promises to pay it back by completing missions. Woo Sun-hee agrees, but with one condition. She is considering entrusting Mr. Kang with IM missions. Kang has no idea what she's talking about. He asks what IM missions are. Woo Sun-hee explains they are more difficult missions, available only to special members. Curious, Kang asks if completing one will get him the money he needs. The president confirms it, but informs him that from now on, only IM missions are available to him. The protagonist feels like he is being used. She then details the current mission's reward, 8 million, which rises to 12 million for a perfect clear. She adds that a bonus stage offers the chance to earn even more. The protagonist realizes this is far more than previous missions offered. It is not the 40 million he needs, but it is a considerable sum. However, Woo Sun-hee reminds him of his current 90% penalty, meaning he will only receive 10% of the rewards. Kang is shocked, having just remembered this detail. He complains that if the mission is so difficult, the payout is far too meager. In response, Woo Sun-hee offers to raise his share to 50%. Kang immediately asks for the condition. She explains that the synchronization rate in other worlds will increase. This means the burden he must endure will grow considerably, and he will suffer more injuries. Despite the risk, Kang considers 50% a very high share. He accepts the deal, figuring he has to do the mission anyway, and does not mind suffering a little more. The president is pleased with his spirit, and announces she is transporting him immediately. The protagonist is caught off guard and complains that it was the same last time, wondering if it will always be this sudden. As her final words, Woo Sun-hee advises him to be more careful not to get lost on this mission, hoping he returns in one piece. Kang asks what she means, but he is teleported away before he can hear the answer. Back in her office, the president is approached by her secretary, Min-hee. She questions the president's actions, reminding her that Kang's synchronization rate limit is 30%, yet she raised it. Woo Sun-hee replies that she never forced Kang. He accepted the terms on his own. Min-hee argues that the president only mentioned the 50% reward, not the increased risks. The president coldly replies that if Kang is incapacitated on a mission like this, it simply means he has reached his limit, and she misjudged him. Angered by Kang's treatment, Min-hee asks what the president will do if he gets seriously injured, concluding that her boss is a truly cold and horrendous woman. Suddenly, a man arrives, reads her thoughts, and repeats them aloud. He introduces himself as Hyung-gun, much to the secretary's surprise. Woo Sun-hee reveals that Hyung-gun was the one who recommended raising Kang's sync rate, making him responsible. Min-hee asks why he would do such a thing, stating that Kang is just a beginner and could die if something goes wrong. Hyung-gun replies that he is curious to see what happens when Kang is put under immense mental pressure. He wants to see if the protagonist is someone he can work with in the future, or just another piece of trash. The president concludes that, success or failure, this mission is a great opportunity for Kang. Immediately after, the system announces a successful character login and the removal of the beginner protection penalty. From now on, damage received by the character will be applied directly to the original body, so the user must be more cautious about permanent damage. Upon arrival, a bright light blinds the protagonist. He realizes he is still not used to the sensation of being teleported and understands that this is another new beginning. Immediately, a pain stabs into his chest, growing worse by the second. The protagonist wonders what this feeling is, like his insides are burning violently. Images from the man's life then unfold before him, revealing his most intense moments and the reason for his screams. In one scene, a girl approaches him with a question. She asks what kind of work he does since he is always gone at night. He explains that he works for his boss as a secret guard and that it is bad for him to be easily noticed. In another moment, a man calls him Strovan. The man explains the current request is difficult, as the target is now the esteemed daughter of Viscount Pony. Looking Strovan in the eye, the contractor states that he is the best assassin and places his full trust in him. Shortly after accepting the mission, Strovan stands before the Viscount's daughter and carries out the job with ease. Once it is done, the contractor notes that he has cleaned up the corpses well and can now return. In another memory, however, Strovan sees his parents dead on the floor while the same girl from before stands on the edge of a wall. He tells her to stop playing around and get down, but she calls him brother and says she is sorry. She claims it is all her fault that their parents are now dead. Finally, she apologizes for being a foolish sister and jumps from the wall. Her brother screams her name, but it is already too late. Time passes, and he reflects on these moments, blaming demons and gods for what happened. He swears to avenge them and to face anyone responsible, promising to kill them, cut them into 1,000 pieces, and eat their raw flesh. However, his revenge fails, and he ends up selling his soul while crying out for bloody vengeance. He does this in exchange for the destruction of his unknown enemy, despite not knowing how many of them exist. Back in the present, the protagonist realizes his entire body is shaking from the hatred etched into Strovan's very bones. He understands that he relived the client's memories in a short period, which caused the earlier pain, and he now knows this bloodlust will not stop. Consumed by fury, the protagonist is completely immersed in the character, feeling an uncontrollable urge to tear someone apart. It doesn't matter who, anyone will do, so long as he can rip a person to pieces. But through the haze of emotion, he tries to calm himself, realizing he is still Kang Chul-ho. These feelings belong to the client, not to him. In all his previous missions, he has never been this influenced by a client's emotions. He then remembers the company president, Woo Sun-hee, warning him to be careful and not lose himself. He concludes this is exactly what she meant. The threat to his own consciousness is a direct consequence of the risk option being raised to 49%. Suddenly, a voice tells him to calm down. Kang recognizes it as Urival's and thinks he's going insane, but then he remembers the soul fragment from his previous client. He realizes the fragment is speaking to him. Now calmer, he takes the item in his hands and mentally thanks Urival for the gift. He then retrieves his sword from the ground, sheathes it, and considers his next move. A system message immediately appears in his vision. After this happens for the third time, he finally understands how to activate the notifications at will. The system alerts him that the character information will be displayed, showing the status of Strovan Peleus. His occupation is a peasant from a fallen and unverifiable noble family, with the nickname Black Dog of Eldane. The combat information also appears, but a specific section is locked. The system warns him his level is too low for access. He sees that the information page is far more detailed now, with more skills available. The protagonist also notices his health is not only full, but over the limit, with both health and SP above normal. He concludes this must be a status effect, caused by the client's fury over his family's murder. Even the skill names are grim. Sharp Eyes allows him to detect and remember objects. Information analysis helps him understand a target's unexpected actions or movements. The speech skill lets him better hold the attention of others. There is also pain removal, which in dangerous situations allows him to move unrestricted by injuries, though he could die at any moment. Finally, he sees the torture skill. It states that once targets are captured by the Black Dog, they cannot die without his permission. Reading about the final skill leaves the protagonist in shock. He compares Strovan Peleus, an assassin who walks the path of darkness, to Urival Pilshin, an honorable knight who earned his comrades' trust. The two are complete opposites. Strovan's skills give the protagonist a clear idea of what kind of person he is, but he reasons the company would not have given him useless skills, which means he will have to torture someone if it becomes necessary. In the client's thoughts, he understands he will have to torture his parent's enemy. He feels a flash of frustration, thinking the mission was just about killing, not torture. But then, memories from his real-life surface. The payment for the job, his accumulated debts, his sister's current situation, and the loan. All of it reminds him why he is doing this. Frustrated by his lack of choice, the protagonist slams his head against a tree, telling himself he has to do whatever it takes. He knows this is no time for weakness, not with his family's situation and his sister taking a horrible job to pay off a massive debt. He becomes determined to stop worrying about others and focus on his own family. If he has to kill, he will kill. The objective is revenge, and he focuses on that, on how unjust the situation was and how much Strovan was wronged. The protagonist knows Strovan killed many and made enemies, but they targeted his family instead of him. His enemies murdered a weak old couple who couldn't resist, which drove his sister to give up on life. No matter the grudge or the reason, what they did was cruel. As a man and an older brother, Kang sympathizes with Strovan and now knows what he must do. To silence his guilt and his conscience, he is determined to do whatever it takes. With his goals clear, the protagonist springs into action. He knows what to do and calculates he's about 4 kilometers from the city, a distance that would take an hour on foot. But he remembers he is no longer Kang. He is Strovan. Using the character's skills, he leaps an incredible distance, feeling his body as light as a feather. Mid-air, he realizes he never planned for the landing and knows he's in trouble. He crashes to the ground in a cloud of smoke but gets up with ease, finding himself envious of his client's resilience. Thanks to his excellent physique, his movements correct themselves with a simple thought. He knows Strovan is a handsome descendant of a noble family, which makes him wonder how the man became an assassin. He immediately accesses the client's memories and discovers the truth. Strovan comes from a slum, where he stole bread just to survive. That's how he met other thieves, joined their guild, and eventually the Assassin's Guild. The protagonist concludes Strovan's life was pitiful, and that the price for killing always comes due. He then realizes he is not so different, doing this kind of work just for money. He remembers what Woo Sun-hee told him. The foundation of a contract is mutual consent, and not even the company can operate without it. The world's first contract, Eve's corruption by the forbidden fruit, was based on her own will. This makes him realize the importance of consent. A person must agree for themselves. Suddenly, a system message appears, asking if he is a bad person with value to their lives. The sudden message startles him, and he begins to suspect a major loophole in his contract with Sosei, perhaps even a way to change it into a blank slate. The protagonist wonders if it's truly possible, questioning if someone as weak as him can stand against them. Lost in thought, he doesn't notice the time passing. He looks to the sky and decides to stop thinking about it. The thoughts are dangerous, as the company can read his mind. If he starts complaining and searching for loopholes, they will find out instantly. He also has to consider the ownership of his soul and his need for money. With that, he resolves to focus on his current mission above all else. He runs toward his objective as the moon lights his path at dusk. He arrives at a specific location and identifies it as the place holding the client's family's bodies. He wants to check them, hoping to find a clue that will lead him to the culprits. With the passive skill sharpened eyes active, he detects a track near the bodies. It could be from an animal or a human. The protagonist finds nothing else out of the ordinary. The place is quiet, without a single insect sound, but for a brief moment he realizes that the complete silence is itself unnatural. Suddenly, he hears something from the forest and dodges a projectile at the last second as it slams into a wall. More projectiles, looking like daggers, fly toward him, but he uses the character's skills to evade them all. From the air, the protagonist gets a better view and understands their plan, concluding that a fight is unavoidable. He closes the distance with a double jump, landing in disbelief that he could even use such a skill. He prepares to counterattack, but as he gets closer, he sees his opponent is not very intimidating. He still moves to strike, but the attacker introduces himself as Keisha, claiming he didn't know he was attacking Strovan. At the revelation, the protagonist halts his attack and demands to know what Keisha is doing here. Keisha tells him to lower his sword first. Accessing the original Strovan's memories, the protagonist knows Kesha was a companion, an associate who cleaned up after his missions. They worked together for years, becoming close allies. Kesha is relieved to be unharmed. The protagonist repeats his question. What is he doing here? In a location even the guild shouldn't know. Keisha hesitates, asking why Strovan is acting so hostile, and if he no longer trusts him after 5 years as his companion. The protagonist states that right now, he trusts no one. He sees Kesha still gripping his sword, and his suspicion remains. Sensing Strovan's distrust, Kesha drops his sword. He claims he only came to help, telling the protagonist to kill him if he can't be trusted. He says he owes Strovan his life and holds no grudges. The protagonist weighs if this is an act or a genuine plea. He decides the man seems truthful, but he cannot lower his guard. Kesha is also an assassin. Still, the protagonist sheathes his own sword, and Kesha is happy. The MC considers that Kesha might be a secondary character like Sampat. If that's true, he needs an ally, not another body. He tells Keisha he cannot trust anyone right now, not even a friend. Kesha calls it regrettable, but says he understands, having heard about the situation with Strovan's family. He came because he was worried his friend might do something reckless. The protagonist demands to know how he found this place. Kesha explains that after the Baron Creighton mission, Strovan stumbled out of this very forest covered in wounds. When asked who else knows, Kesha guarantees that no one from the guild is aware of this location. The protagonist then notices dried blood and small cuts on Keisha's hand. He asks if Keisha was the one who cleaned his parents' bodies. Keisha confirms it, explaining he thought his friend wouldn't be in the right mental state to do it himself, and reminds him that he is also a gravedigger. The protagonist understands but grows angry, demanding to know if Keisha erased the clues left on the corpses. Fear paralyzes Keisha, and he cannot answer, which only deepens the protagonist's suspicion. Keisha breaks into a nervous sweat, begging Strovan to stop. He says that even for friends, this is too much. He explains that even if Strovan's heart were made of steel, it would be nearly impossible for him to dissect the very parents who gave him life. That is why Kesha cleaned the bodies himself. But he also reveals that he took photographs and made copies of all the wounds. Hearing this, the protagonist feels a sharp pain in his chest, suspecting it's a remnant of the original client's emotions. The protagonist admits he jumped to conclusions and thanks his friend for the help. Kesha is relieved, saying he's finally acting like his old self and that he honestly thought he was about to die. According to Strovan's memories, Keisha is not the type to hesitate or hide things, leading the protagonist to believe he might actually be trustworthy. He concludes that trusting someone is better than suspecting everyone, which will get him nowhere. He asks Kesha to help him on his journey. Sensing his friend's sincerity, Keisha agrees, stating he has always waited for this day. Kesha explains he searched for clues but found little of interest. He reveals they were attacked with heavy iron and a blunt weapon. Judging by the wounds, Kesha believes a club was the murder weapon. The protagonist deduces that since mercenaries use axes, the culprit must be a gentleman or a soldier. To confirm this, Kesha asked a nearby homeless woman, who claims she saw a troop of soldiers in the area. The information enrages the protagonist. He questions why soldiers would commit such an act, and his bloodlust flares so intensely it makes Keisha feel sick. Kang realizes he needs to rein in the enraged Strovan before he takes over. He decides to treat the situation like a game, classifying the mission as either a search or a hunt. He reflects that search missions involve finding clues to solve problems, while hunt missions are about killing monsters without any special criteria. The protagonist thinks his previous mission was a search, involving gaining trust and uncovering secrets, while Parsons' mission was a hunt, with the goal of eliminating enemies on the battlefield. He wonders which category the current mission falls into, and asks Kesha if he can find out the soldier's affiliation. The young man replies that he already has, impressing the protagonist. Keisha begins to say there were about 15 soldiers, but stops when he notices something is goes wrong. The number of soldiers makes the protagonist realize this is a hunt mission, and he will have to kill all 15 of them. Sometime later, they travel to the city of Eldane. Once there, Kesha points out the soldiers on patrol, explaining they are evil, and that Strovan's parents were not their only victims. The protagonist knows a new lord was appointed to Eldane after a recent territorial war, which threw public order into chaos. The riots were controlled by the power of garrison, which eventually became the law itself. Now, the ones holding power in the city are the cruelest offenders, using the excuse of maintaining order to commit murder, rape, and robbery with total impunity. From a rooftop, the protagonist watches the soldiers forcibly drag a man away. His daughter fights back, throwing a rock that strikes one of the guards in the head. She claims they stole nothing and demands they release her father, offering to take his punishment herself. The guard sarcastically asks if she is really willing to take the punishment, remarking that she is a great daughter. The protagonist realizes the girl is in trouble, but before he can do anything, she is struck by a spear. Immediately, the protagonist runs to her, worrying his friend. The guard laughs at the situation and says the girl's father will join her soon so she will not be lonely. The protagonist approaches, making no effort to be subtle. The soldiers see him and ask who he is, but he just laughs. Confused, the guards ask why he is laughing, and one of them says he might regain his senses after being stabbed in the stomach. They approach and order the protagonist not to move. However, he just thanks them, explaining that he is grateful they are true scumbags. The guard does not like being insulted and moves in to attack. The guard lunges to attack the protagonist, who simply stands his ground. Laughing, the guard calls him a reckless fool, but his blade shatters on impact. He stares at his broken sword in utter disbelief. The protagonist then kicks the guard and attacks him with his own weapon, using the skills of Strovan. He slices the enemy from top to bottom, without giving him any chance to react. The guard collapses, gravely wounded, beside a terrified comrade, as the other soldiers look on in horror. The protagonist glares at the remaining guards with a ferocious look, thinking he must be insane, but that he's not the only one. The soldiers, not understanding who he is, begin to call for anyone nearby. Just then, Kesha joins the fight and warns that the guards are calling for reinforcements, suggesting they retreat before more soldiers arrive. To Kesha's surprise, the protagonist is pleased by the news, as it means he no longer has to search for them. Ignoring the warning, the protagonist charges toward the enemies, leaving Kesha worried. One of the guards tries to attack him, but he dodges with ease and immediately counters, severing the soldier's hand. He then moves on to the others, seeming to enjoy the bloodshed. The soldiers call him a demonic bastard and decide to attack him all at once. The protagonist, however, notices one of them carries a club and patiently waits for the attack. When the guard with the club least expects it, he is sliced from all sides and falls to the ground, bleeding heavily. The protagonist then turns to Kesha, points at the wounded man, and orders his friend not to let him die, an order Kesha promptly obeys. Meanwhile, the protagonist faces the guards who are left. They exchange nervous glances, wondering when reinforcements will arrive, as they realize their enemy is too strong. With that, they decide to flee, but they are not fast enough, and the protagonist quickly catches up to them. One of the guards who runs ahead believes he has escaped, but he is caught by surprise and stabbed in the back. Soon, all the soldiers are down on the ground, except for one, who begins to beg for his life. The protagonist cuts him off by piercing his hand with the sword. He tells the guard not to dare act like a human and ask for mercy now, and that he must stay there until everything is over. The guard begs to be spared, claiming he's sorry and trying to shift the blame onto the others. But the protagonist ignores him completely and asks if he remembers something. The confused guard doesn't understand what he means. The protagonist reminds him of the people he killed, specifically the victims who begged for mercy, just like he is doing now. Terrified, the soldier claims he remembers every single one of them. The protagonist proposes a test, promising to spare the guard's life if he can name the people he killed 3 days ago. The nervous guard answers with the names Emily, Park, and Dami. The protagonist warns him that if he's wrong, he will die, because the names he found in his own investigation are different. Because of this, the soldier's death will be the most brutal he can imagine. Faced with this threat, the guard admits he can't remember everyone, justifying it as a time of war. The protagonist replies that this is exactly what he expected. In a desperate act, the soldier lets out a scream so loud that reinforcements locate him by the sound and move toward his position. When they arrive, they find a massive pile of bodies with the protagonist standing among them. They are shocked, wondering if all these soldiers were really defeated by just 2 men. Concluding that their opponents can't be normal, they decide to attack together, but a short time later, they are also defeated. Night falls on the city. Elsewhere, the protagonist is washing himself when a sudden wave of nausea hits him. The feeling reminds him of his first mission with Parsons, when he felt the same way, but he quickly concludes this time is worse. He reflects that if the Parsons mission was a war, what he just did was a massacre. The first time, he had no choice. This time, he killed of his own free will, crushing his enemies and listening to every last one of them scream in pain. And as it all happened, he was enjoying it. To stop the thoughts, he throws a bucket of cold water over his head and admits to himself that he lost this battle. He tries to convince himself the mission is just a task with a generous reward that will help his family. He tells himself this is a game where if he doesn't kill, he will die, which isn't so different from the Parsons mission. The risk is high, as any injury or death in the mission also applies to his original body, but the reward of 40 million, which will be increased fivefold, can save his family. He just wants to complete the task. He remembers his sister took an advance payment from that club, a private loan. He fears that, like in some cheap movie, he could end up watching his family get destroyed and his sister sold off. The protagonist thinks his naive, soft-hearted sister cannot be harmed and promises himself he will kill anyone who tries to hurt her. His thoughts are cut short by a system notification. It informs him that he is now level 4 and that his compassion, among other stats, has increased. Staring at the screen, he wonders what this is. Immediately, a thought about killing someone flashes through his mind, and he associates it with Strovan. The protagonist feels his blood burn and his heart pound wildly. The system alerts him that his health has reached a critical limit, and to protect him, the state of compassion will be forcibly removed. Kang realizes the unbearable rage vanishes in an instant, and, despite his confusion, he breathes a sigh of relief at the absence of that burden. A moment later, he starts to laugh, because now he understands what it means to be merciful. He realizes the massacre he started was not entirely of his own will. Kang concludes that those swift, insane actions must have been Strovan's doing, not his. This would mean he isn't completely guilty and should be happy, because it was something he did, but at the same time, didn't do. However, he immediately screams at his subconscious to shut up, declaring he won't run from his responsibilities. He is torn between blaming himself and making excuses, saying it's all just illusions created by a monster. The protagonist decides he will not run and will accept what he has done. He committed a grave sin for profit, and he would rather be called and condemned as a killer. He declares, however, that he will not be shamed because this is his last pride, just as Urival maintained his pride until his last breath. Kang states that this is his guilt, the killer's last innocence. Finally, the system alerts him that the Bloody Avenger mission will be updated. The message about the Bloody Avenger leaves the protagonist slightly shaken. The system immediately alerts him that the completion of the revenge is determined by Strovan's satisfaction, even displaying a progress bar. Kang wonders why this is happening. He has already killed and torn apart several people, yet the client's satisfaction is only halfway. He doesn't understand this thirst for blood and questions what more he needs to do, whether he must kill more or if he simply hasn't killed enough. He detained the club-wielding guards to get information or use them in some other way, but he has been avoiding one of Strovan's specific skills: torture. A scene from the movie Law-Abiding Citizen comes to his mind, where the main character refuses to give his family's killer an easy death. Instead, he kills him painfully after cutting up his body, seeming happy as he tortures him, enjoying the killer's pain. The key word is satisfaction, and the protagonist concludes there is no other way but to use this method. Later that night, his friends arrive at the designated location. Kesha says she had a hard time keeping the prisoners alive, and asks why Strovan cut their arteries in such an impatient way. The friend replies that he did it because he was holding back. At that moment, the protagonist checks the character's status and sees his health is nearly gone from the previous rampage. The assassin's madness skill consumes his HP and mana when active, but in return, it increases his strength and other abilities. It is a double-edged sword that makes him lose 5 HP per minute and could cause him to faint quickly. Entering a prison, the protagonist asks about the prisoner's condition. Kesha informs him that they are still breathing but won't last much longer. The protagonist says he needs to be fast and asks what they should do. Kesha explains that they knocked them out with anesthetics. Although a bit apprehensive, he decides to proceed with the plan, stating that a slightly less than lethal dose of anesthetics and narcotics won't be a problem. Even if the guard wakes up, he will be incapacitated. One of the guards, still awake, asks where he is and why he is in this state. A moment later, he recognizes Strovan's face. The protagonist says the guard has already understood the situation and calls him by his name, Alden Fisk, 36 years old, from Seistine, mentioning that his wife and 2 daughters live in the city. Alden asks who he is and what he wants, but the protagonist simply replies that he is wrong and, with a powerful thrust, stabs the guard's leg. Alden realizes he feels no immediate pain, and the protagonist explains that the pain will arrive slowly. A short time later, the effect kicks in, and the guard screams from the agony he now feels. The protagonist reveals he coated the dagger with an antidote, freeing the guard's wounded body from the anesthesia. He then establishes 2 rules. The first is to answer the questions he asks, and the second is to answer correctly to avoid being stabbed again. Alden agrees that he will answer and pleads with him. Before finishing, the protagonist removes the dagger, and Kesha applies more anesthetic to the guard, explaining that as they repeat this process, his life will slowly end. The protagonist starts the conversation by asking if the guard's name is Alden, and he says yes. In his thoughts, however, the protagonist doesn't care about the name, as he knows the first key to torture is interrogation. Asking simple questions that can be answered quickly serves to make the targets careless. This way, even if he asks the same question, there will be a difference in the answer. For example, if he asks threatening questions about the guard's family, they will answer on impulse first and only think later. The plan works, as Alden becomes desperate and says his family has done nothing wrong, that he is the villain and should be the one punished. The protagonist states that he is wrong again, since he can't follow such a simple rule. With a cold, metallic voice, he whispers that he is going to kill the guard's entire family. All of Alden's despair comes to the surface in that instant, and he begs for it not to happen. The protagonist thinks that the repetition of terrifying words, combined with extreme pain and the disorienting effects of the anesthetics, will induce hypnosis in the guard. He continues to threaten him in horrifying ways, and asks if Alden can imagine it. To the guard, his voice must sound like the whispers of a demon, and from his reaction, the technique is working. The system then alerts him that the speech skill has been activated, along with information analysis and sharp eyes. Due to the multiple skills, he will receive a bonus on the torture action. With this, the protagonist feels the effects and increases the psychological and physical threats, demoralizing the guard to get what he wants. He wants a sense of despair, fear, and guilt to break Alden's mind. The mental collapse bonus is helping him, and he continues to say everything the guard does not want to hear to prepare him for his final move. The continuous induction of hypnosis breaks the guard completely. By this point, he is already apologizing for everything and melting into tears. The protagonist concludes that this is a success. Torture is a form of domination, a way to completely seize an enemy, break them, and make them dependent. Like a reaper or a demon, the torturer forces the victim to see them as an absolute being, the only one to cling to for mercy. The protagonist stares down the guard and gives him one last chance to tell the truth. He promises to show mercy and leave Alden's family in peace if he cooperates, all while thinking that the guard's end will come the moment he becomes dependent. The protagonist announces he will ask 3 questions. First, he demands the names of Alden's comrades and the locations of their families. Crying, Alden agrees to tell him everything, revealing that Teo's family lives behind the smithy in the village below Sistine Castle, and Shook's family lives in the guards' quarters in the same village. For his second question, the protagonist asks why they destroyed the warehouses near the river 3 days ago. Alden explains it was because of a traitor, as they received a tip that he was living in that area. The protagonist immediately asks who gave them the tip. The guard claims he doesn't know and swears he isn't lying, explaining that a note was simply on his desk when he woke up, as if a ghost left it there. This revelation surprises both the protagonist and Keisha, who wonders what it could mean. The protagonist dismisses it for now, saying they will talk later because he needs to free the other prisoners. Keisha obeys, pulling a lever and releasing the guards from their chains. The moment they are free, the guards turn on Alden in a fury, screaming that they will kill him for betraying them just to save his own family. The protagonist reflects that even though he is the one who slaughtered their comrades, all their rage is directed at Alden. Worse than an enemy, he is now a traitor. The MC wonders who is worse, himself, a man as cruel as a reaper, or the powerless Alden. But the target of their vengeance is already decided. Before the guards can leave, the protagonist asks his final question, confusing Alden. The protagonist then asks if he was really naive enough to believe he would actually leave his family in peace. Before Alden can react, the other guards grab him. They surround their former comrade, beating him, cutting him, and tearing him apart. Alden dies screaming in the most horrific way imaginable. After the gruesome scene, the protagonist leaves and calls for Keisha. His friend asks if he is sure about what he has done. The protagonist replies that he won't touch Alden's family because it would be a hassle, explaining he only said it to make the guards suffer more before death. But Keisha clarifies he wasn't asking about that. He was asking about the guild. The protagonist admits he doesn't know what to do yet. His mind drifts to the memories of Strovan, the black dog of Eldane, a terrible human weapon created by the very Assassin's Guild that guided him for years. Within that guild, there was someone with a touch of humanity who taught Strovan many things. This man was the guild master, a father figure to Strovan, and the one person who loved to sneak around leaving notes on desks. Keisha doesn't understand why the master would leave such an obvious clue, knowing he would be easily discovered. The protagonist replies that it must mean the master doesn't care if anyone finds out. When Keisha presses for an explanation, his friend tells him it's not something he needs to know. Changing the subject, the protagonist asks what Keisha plans to do. He looks at the young man, noting his round face and naive appearance. Though he is a guild assassin, he is low-ranking and still human. The protagonist advises him to leave the guild now, before he gets any more blood on his hands. Keisha asks if the guild would simply stand by and let him go. The protagonist assures him they will, because if anyone from the guild comes after Keisha, he will exterminate the entire organization. Keisha agrees, certain the protagonist is capable of it. He mentions the master's words might have been right, that Strovan's family was an obstacle, and without them, Strovan would become the greatest assassin in all of Tailorlord. The protagonist questions this, but tells Keisha to stay out of it and leave the city with his family under the cover of night. He then notices Strovan's satisfaction has increased by 30%, a direct result of Alden's tortured screams. This confirms he is on the right path. Kesha stops him to ask what he should do after he leaves, noting that they never chose to have blood on their hands. The protagonist tells him only to survive. He is free now, and must not lose himself the way the protagonist has. He can live like a human, not an animal, even with a souled soul. After their farewell, the protagonist heads to the Eldane slum. He finds a desolate alley so barren that no one frequents it. The silence confirms they are hiding, so he announces his presence, declaring that the black dog has come to see the master. His enhanced senses, sharp as an animal's, detect 5 hidden figures, 2 behind rubble, 3 at the entrance. A man in a black mask steps forward to block his path. The protagonist recognizes him as Zyrtek, the guild's number 3 and Strovan's superior. But now, the protagonist can sense everything. Zyrtek's movements, his breathing, even his hesitation to draw the hidden blade in his sleeve. Zyrtek respects his higher rank, a natural order where skill defines one's place. The protagonist tells him to stand aside. He is here to challenge the master, and in this world, strength is the only law. A voice suddenly cuts through the tension, announcing the black dog's arrival. It's the master. The protagonist is stunned by his stealth. He was completely undetectable until he spoke, a true sign of peak ability. The master acknowledges that Strovan has finally made his decision to challenge him. Recognizing the master of Eldane's greatest assassin guild, the protagonist initiates the assimilation process. The system immediately alerts him. The assimilation, combined with his emotional state, triggers extreme rage and the slaughter madness bonus. The master declares that Strovan has finally broken through his barrier, making him a worthy opponent. His body ignites in flames, and he challenges Strovan to make the first move. But the protagonist needs one last confirmation. He asks the master directly if he killed his family. The master denies it, claiming the guards were responsible. The protagonist calls him a disappointment for feigning ignorance and asks if he is afraid. The protagonist is deliberately provoking him. In a battle to the death, any hesitation from the master will be a fatal opening. He needs a reason, a justification to kill without a shred of doubt. The master mocks him for fighting with words, but agrees to answer. He admits it was he who left the note for the guards. The protagonist simply thanks him for the answer. With that confession, his guilt vanishes, and the system mission completes his full assimilation with Strovan. The memory of Strovan's sister's last moments surges through him, and all that remains is vengeance. His rage is so absolute he can no longer feel his own heart beating. He ignores the screaming pain of his muscles pushed to their absolute limit and activates a skill. His blood vessels constrict as if frozen, forcing oxygen-rich blood through his entire body. Time itself seems to slow as his body trembles with power. The skill Mortal Blow activates, granting him a stack of effects that make him feel invincible. The protagonist moves so fast the master can barely see his movements, unable to sense any trace he leaves behind. Strovan suddenly appears right in front of him like a ninja, and the master realizes he needs to stop him. But before he can do anything, the assassin strikes first with a slash, preventing his attack. This is not enough. The protagonist immediately slices the master from multiple directions, giving him no time to react. Realizing his opponent's overwhelming strength, the master is stunned, no longer feeling parts of his own body. He then falls to the ground, already dismembered, as the starry sky illuminates the night's darkness. Below, the protagonist thinks it is all over, and that the satisfaction level should be sufficient, but when he checks, he sees the status is at only 2%. Even on the ground, the master says that Strovan is just as he thought and that his eyes did not deceive him, for he has talent and can walk the path of the king. The protagonist asks what that is. In response, the master says that the king of assassination, the Lord of Shadows, has emerged, and that the world must be terrified now, for the personification of death has appeared. This leaves the protagonist confused, and he asks why the master is laughing in this situation. The master says he has his reasons to laugh, because his dream, for which he waited patiently and worked hard, is finally realized. The king he waited for is finally born. The protagonist cannot believe such a thing, thinking this only happens in stories. He understands he was intentionally prepared for this moment, so the master of assassins could turn him into a deadly weapon. The master continues, saying that Strovan possesses no greed. Even if he owned all the houses in the area, he would have tried to convert it into benefits for his family, something the protagonist agrees with. To the master, this is clear, as Strovan is obviously trying to save what is precious to him. He says that what he himself is trying to do is also obvious, because Strovan is the most valuable thing, and he tried to complete him. The protagonist calls the master insane, and in a way he agrees, saying he could not dream of something like this if he were not mad. The result is right in front of Strovan, as the master destroyed his family, his normal life, and his happiness. According to the master, this is why Strovan was enlightened. The protagonist states that the master's words make no sense, and that he is speaking nonsense. But the master insists that Strovan is an assassin who earns money by killing people, and, with that dirty money, helps his family. However, due to his personality, he did not want wealth or fame, so he sometimes felt doubt. The master explains that a sword has no blood running down it, as blood only makes the blade rust. In the end, everything that killed his family was Strovan's own doing. To the master, Strovan's family was an obstacle, so he killed them to make the king emerge, and this was his way of showing goodwill. The protagonist says that no one cares about this king story, and that just imagining it makes him feel disgusted, as something like that is despicable. He thinks that maybe this title is of great honor and glory to some, but to him, it is meaningless. Therefore, he asserts that he will not do the master's will. The master then reveals that he can hide if he wants, but he has already sent a message to all the assassin guilds in the territory, stating that the king of assassins they were waiting for has been born there. If he really did that, the protagonist can imagine what will happen in the future. Like a moth to a flame, all assassins will come after Strovan, and if he defeats them all, he will become the king involuntarily. The protagonist then asks why the master did all this. The old man replies that it was his dream, and that the history of assassination is long. They have always worked for rich merchants, nobles, and the king, being used everywhere, but they have always been treated like dirty rats. With this, he argues that if there is a king for knights and nobles, assassins need a king too. He wanted the absolute assassin, whose presence would make even the emperor nervous. The master saw in the black dog, Strovan, a professional with great skills and talents. However, he states that Strovan lacks greed, because even with great talent, he was just trying to earn money to support his family. He concluded that if the family was a disadvantage, then killing them could provide an answer. The master bet everything on this, and the result is here. He claims his decision is not wrong and is only sorry that he gets to see the result just once. Lastly, he tells Strovan to end it and get on with his life. The protagonist says he now understands people who follow their dream, those who are trying to achieve something even if it ends their lives. He thinks the master is sick enough to make him feel disgusted, and says that if this is the old man's dream, then not even death can be an obstacle for someone trying to achieve it. To the master, Strovan is a masterpiece he spent his life on. Revenge and death are insignificant, because by dying, this masterpiece will be completed, like the final brushstroke of a master who is painting with the rest of his life. Realizing this, Strovan resolves that he will destroy that dream. The final blow, instead of becoming the last brushstroke that finishes the painting, will be the one that ruins it. The protagonist asks the master if an assassin with one hand can become the king of assassins, then severs his own left hand. The sight drives the master completely insane. He then questions what would happen if he lost both legs and, without hesitation, cuts them both off. The master grows desperate, screaming that the world is within Strovan's grasp and that he cannot throw it all away, but the protagonist doesn't listen. He proceeds to slice off his own ears and then his left eye. Finally, he puts the knife to his own throat, declaring it would be more amusing to die in front of the master. He states he will not become the old man's monster and will die as a human, and so he does, slitting his own throat. Strovan's final act drives the master into total despair. Even as Strovan lies on the brink of death, it is the master who collapses and dies first from the immense psychological pain and suffering. He meets his end not from any wound, but from the unbearable shock of watching his dream die before his eyes. With this, Strovan's satisfaction level surpasses the goal, and his revenge is complete. After leaving the client's body, the protagonist asks if he is now satisfied. He sees Strovan before him, looking pale and much older, a sign that many years have passed since the mission's completion. Strovan replies that he is without a doubt satisfied. He explains that he chose to harm himself in a life-or-death venture, but only felt that way from a certain point on. Even if he decided to kill himself, it should have happened only after completing the mission, a choice the protagonist concludes was far too dangerous. Strovan thanks him and says that although he killed the master, he failed to complete his own revenge against him. Just as the master predicted, he became the king of assassins with all the dark houses under his command, and perhaps because of this, he grew afraid of death. The protagonist, however, disagrees, stating that Strovan was not afraid to die. In truth, he had lost everything and had no strength left, leaving him unable to think or act. The loss was so enormous it left him paralyzed. So even after getting revenge on the master, he lost all purpose in life, rendering it all meaningless. Strovan asks if the protagonist pities him, since he is praising him so much when Strovan considers himself just an animal, but the protagonist denies it, saying he feels no pity, only that he knows the pain of never seeing his family smile again, having lived with it himself for 3 years. He explains that he was in the same position as Strovan, and the outcome would have been the same. He only succeeded because he still has a family to return to. Strovan remarks that it is strange how the protagonist, who has never killed anyone, can understand the king of assassins. After their conversation, Strovan leads them to a cemetery, where 3 graves stand before them. He tells the protagonist that these are his family's graves. The protagonist asks if this is his reward, and Strovan questions if it is too much. Indignant, Kang asks why he is like this, thinking of how different he is from Urival, who walked with his family under golden plains in the end. Even knowing it was a lie, Urival had a happy dream and found rest. So, Kang demands to know why Strovan's family is still dead. Strovan replies that he already knows the answer, and the protagonist then mentions conscience. As the king of assassins, Strovan has likely killed thousands and made countless families suffer, becoming a perpetrator too cruel to be considered a victim. Now, he blames himself, thinking that the happiness of being with his family is a luxury he cannot wish for, capable only of feeling sorrow. Kang grows even more indignant and asks why Strovan is this way, stating that this is his reward, a dream where he can have anything he wants, like a luxurious life with his family in a palace. He then questions why Strovan murdered people if his conscience is so fragile and he did not want to kill. Strovan, however, only responds with a thank you. Kang says he will never live like him, and Strovan affirms that is exactly what he wants. He then says he will give his power to the protagonist and tells him to take it. Kang knows Strovan has a power that everyone fears, and having witnessed so much tragedy, he feels pity for him but wants no involvement. Strovan says he wishes the protagonist will never need to use that power, but he cannot predict the future. He says that since Kang met him, his life must also have been difficult, and he doesn't know what kind of disaster might occur, so he wants to help. Finally, he tells Kang to protect his family and the things precious to him so that he can remain a human to the end, even after selling his soul. After this, the teleportation to the original dimension begins, and Kang returns home. Looking around, he realizes he is in his room, which surprises him, as he was previously in Sosa's office and left for the mission from there. He wonders why he didn't return to the same place. In his mind, a voice tells him there is no time to lose and gets straight to the point, explaining that something urgent is happening at his house, which is why it sent him there directly. Kang asks what happened, but the voice just says there is no time to explain and that he must go now. Immediately, Kang runs out of his room and, upon reaching the living room, comes face to face with several men taking his sister. Both the girl and the intruders are stunned to see him at home. Kang instinctively rushes to his sister, her face a mask of despair. He grabs her arm and demands to know who the men are. One of the intruders questions the girl about her lie that no one was home, but tables the issue. He turns to Kang, asking if he's Kang Chul-ho, the bum living with his sister. Instead of answering, Kang just asks for the man's identity. The man realizes this is their first meeting and flicks a card at Kang. It identifies him as Bong Chun of the Songrim Company. Kang demands to know why they are in his house, trying to take his sister. Chun calmly explains that the girl has serious financial problems and agreed to work for them, even taking an advance payment, but she never showed up for the job, creating a major issue. Kang is unnerved by Bong Chun's slow, polite way of speaking. He realizes this man is a true gangster, not some neighborhood delinquent. Bong Chun asks if Kang knows what his sister has been up to, and Kang confirms he found out yesterday. Chun gets straight to the point. The girl took a 30 million advance and then bailed on the job, causing trouble. He mentions that someone named Cho Min-soo took a liking to the girl on her first day, and now wants her back. Kang tries to de-escalate, saying if his sister borrowed money, they just need to return it. Bong Chun laughs at the idea, questioning how an unemployed brother could possibly pay the debt. Bong Chun then throws a document on the floor. It's the contract Kang's sister signed, forfeiting the rights to her own body. Terrified, the girl claims she couldn't help it. The protagonist figures they lured her in with sweet words before threatening her. Despite the shock, he declares the contract is meaningless. He argues that unless it's a promissory note, it's just a piece of paper. Bong Chun finds it concerning that the girl's brother seems to know the law. Kang replies that he's a college graduate, but admits he's no expert. He repeats his promise to return the money Yeon-woo borrowed, and demands they stop trying to take her, stating he can't wait any longer. In response, Bong Chun argues she already broke her promise. In a world built on character, a person's word is everything. He explains that their work is difficult. If they show weakness, people will think they're soft, which only creates more problems. Another gang member steps in, mocking Kang for making empty promises when his own life is on the line. The man scoffs at how he plans to pay back the 30 million his precious sister took. Kang doesn't like his tone and glares at him with pure rage. The goon notices the look and dares him to try something, warning that they'll beat the dead out of him tonight. Kang ignores the goon and speaks directly to Bong Chun. He complains that his subordinate is being a nuisance and asks if the man wasn't raised properly. The provocation sends the goon into a fury. He curses the protagonist and smashes a fist into his face, telling him to say it again if he wants to die. Humiliated, the man keeps running his mouth. He says Kang's sister isn't even good enough for a nightclub and that he should just sell her off to some island. Hearing that last insult, a murderous instinct awakens in Kang. He coldly asks the man what he just said. The goon is stunned by the challenge. Kang knows he can't win as himself, but then he remembers. He can use the memories and lessons from Strovan to his advantage. Drawing on this new power, he instantly overwhelms the goon, slamming his face straight into the floor. Kang then looks up at the other men. His sister is in shock, and he sees that even the gang's leader is stunned by his sudden, brutal display. After taking down the goon, Kang is immediately threatened by the others, who are furious he hurt their friend. He tries to de-escalate, arguing it was self-defense and suggesting they call the police to buy time. But the goons don't care about the law. They make it clear he won't walk away away after hitting one of their brothers. Realizing talk is useless, the protagonist concludes that Strovan was right. Though he didn't want to use his power, he feels there is no other way and decides he will kill anyone who harms his family, no matter how many there are. Meanwhile, the boss, Chun, orders one of his men, Yura, to pick up the fallen man. Yura seems surprised, but obeys without question. Chun then remarks that their information on Kang seems to be wrong, as he is completely different from what they heard. Kang isn't even listening, his focus entirely on his next move. He knows these men are large and strong, and that a single blow could destroy him, but he believes he can win using Strovan's powers, even if he's not sure his body can handle it. Suddenly, to Kang's surprise, the boss completely changes his tone and says he wants to talk amicably. Chun explains his change of heart, stating that he recognized the killing intent in Kang and knows how to spot someone who has killed before. The boss says people like them can recognize each other by their eyes, and Kang doesn't look like he's only killed 1 or 2 people. He then switches the topic to business, explaining he can't have his men getting hurt for no reason. Chun renegotiates the debt, adding a 10 million won fee for the visit and cancellation to the 30 million already owed, for a total of 40 million won. He sets the payment deadline for the next day, warning that there will be no deal if Kang can't pay. To everyone's shock, Kang replies that he doesn't need to wait. He says he'll take care of it right now and pulls out his phone to make a call. On the other end of the line, Woo Sun-hee answers and confirms she already knows the situation, asking if she should send the mission payment. Kang says yes, but before he can even give her the account number, she cuts him off, saying she already knows everything and that he can check the deposit immediately. The speed of the transaction startles the protagonist, and the gang leader asks if something is wrong. Kang denies it, stating the money has already been deposited and they can check. One of the goons confirms the deposit with the boss, who comments on Kang's talent for getting 40 million so quickly, admitting his eyes didn't deceive him before he says his goodbyes and leaves. As soon as they're gone, the protagonist finally collapses to the floor, exhausted, as he is still not used to this kind of situation. Shortly after, he goes to check on his sister, Yan Woo, and warns her to never get involved with those people again, as it is extremely dangerous. Still frightened, she promises she won't. Kang insists she shouldn't even go near that place, and if she ever sees them again, she must run to a crowded area. He tells her he installed a tracking app on her phone and recommends she buy pepper spray and an emergency GPS. As he continues listing things he saw on the internet, his sister interrupts him, saying the worst is over. She states that she won't leave the house for a while, and Kang agrees that would be a good idea. With the safety issue settled, Yan Woo changes the subject. She acknowledges it's great they have the money, but directly asks her brother where he got 40 million won. Kang simply replies that he promised he would get it, all while thinking about everything he had to do to fulfill his promise to protect his family, even if it cost him his soul. His sister isn't satisfied with that answer and presses him, speculating that it must have been a private loan. The protagonist knows it's nothing of the sort, but he can't explain the truth. In desperation, he mentally pleads for help from any deity. At that moment, Woo Sun-hee, who is still on the line, asks if he needs help. She instructs him to say he's not unemployed because an employee is on their way to explain everything. Following her instructions, Kang tries to stall his sister until the supposed employee arrives. A short time later, the doorbell rings, startling the girl, who fears the gangsters have returned. However, a familiar voice calls out for Kang, asking if he's home. He goes to the door and opens it to find Hyung-geun, who greets him, saying it's been a long time. Kang realizes Hyung-geun is acting and decides to play along. Hyung-geun apologizes for showing up unannounced, and Kang's sister is impressed by his polite friend. Kang sends Yeon-woo to make coffee for their guest, and the moment she's gone, he demands to know what Hyung-geun is doing there. Hyung-geun simply tells him to pretend they are friends, and that he will handle everything else. A short time later, Yeon-woo returns with the coffee. As they sit at the table, Hyung-geun formally introduces himself, explaining he met Kang in university and now runs a small business. The sister's happiness quickly turns to jealousy, and she questions why his friend is a successful businessman, while Kang is still a bum. Hyung-geun corrects her. He isn't the owner, but the co-founder in charge of finance and distribution. He then drops a bombshell. The original business idea was Kang's. The revelation stuns even the protagonist, who now has to deal with a fictional business. His sister struggles to believe it, wondering if this is some kind of joke. As Hyung-geun insists that Kang is incredible and makes a lot of money, Yeon-woo's suspicious gaze shows she doesn't think her brother is capable of such a thing. Hyung-geun smoothly suggests that Kang probably just hasn't told the family yet. The protagonist is at a loss for words, cornered into talking about a business he knows nothing about. While he scrambles for an answer, his sister remains completely doubtful. Sensing the tension, Hyung-geun steps in, claiming it's a long story and asking if she wants to hear it. She agrees. So he launches into a fabricated tale about their university days and a joke business idea that could make them a fortune. According to Hyung-geun, they started the company and immediately began to prosper, now making around 400 million in profit annually. The absurd figure leaves Yeon-woo speechless, and she asks if he means revenue instead of profit. Hyung-geun insists it is pure profit, explaining their product is in high demand in Korea and they handle everything from manufacturing to distribution. The girl still can't believe it, arguing it makes no sense. Her brother wouldn't have been so depressed and acting like a failure until just recently. Yonggun counters that Kang is relaxed precisely because things are finally going well. He claims Kang has always been a bit gloomy, and the initial investment was only fully paid off at the beginning of the year, which is why the money wasn't flowing before. To Kang's astonishment, just when he thinks the lie is failing, his sister suddenly agrees that it all makes sense. She then asks why he is revealing this secret only now. Hyung-gun explains he heard something bad happen to her, and since Kang is like family to him, so is she. He says Kang wants to discuss her problems, but she needs to understand him first, because the company's products are a bit embarrassing. Yeon-woo, trying to process that her brother owns such a large company and said nothing, asks what kind of business it is. Hyung-gun replies that it's hard to explain, and he can imagine why Kang kept it a secret. He finally reveals that the company makes toys, and that the profit margin is huge because production is cheap, while the final product is expensive. From the business card, Yeon-woo sees the business is in adult toys, but she misunderstands, asking if they make something like expensive model miniatures. Embarrassed, Hyung-gun clarifies that it's a little different. Suddenly, the realization dawns on her. She looks at the card again and asks if the company is about what she thinks it is. Hyung-gun confirms that whatever she is thinking, she is probably right. Kang grabs her arm to calm her down, but she insists she is fine and now understands everything. The protagonist realizes she is staring at him as if he were a cockroach. Yeon-woo says that he is making millions without telling the family, and now she understands why he couldn't get a job and never left the house. She gets the secret, but tells him to stay away from her. She doesn't want to become a pervert too. With that, she leaves and locks herself in her room, leaving Kang desperate and swearing that Yong-gun will pay for this. The next day, Kang arrives at the company building and greets the receptionist. She notices he seems happy and asks why. Kang explains that despite the previous day's disaster, his situation at home has actually improved. Before, his family saw him as a pathetic bum, but now they see him as the founder of an embarrassing business just trying to survive. He told them he will be busy and can't help financially yet, but he promises that one day, he will make their home a great place no matter the risk. This becomes his main objective. The receptionist makes a joke about adult toys, leaving Kang flustered, but he feels things went well enough. Just then, Woo Sun-hee appears, commenting that his work seems to have been a success. She's glad to see him okay, admitting she was worried he had chosen something too horrible. Kang concedes the situation was a little horrible, which surprises Woo Sun-hee. She confesses she was even prepared for him to slap her. He assures her he was just embarrassed and would never resort to violence, but she clarifies that he misunderstands. She isn't talking about his family, she's talking about the Strovon mission. Kang had completely forgotten about the mission. The memory hits him with a sharp headache. He feels like an absolute idiot for slaughtering so many people only to forget about it completely. He realizes he was acting arrogant and happy, even laughing, and he berates himself as the worst kind of trash. Woo Sun-hee is surprised he actually forgot, as she considered him to be very focused. Kang demands to know why she chose that mission for him. The president explains it was shock treatment because she couldn't let things stay as they were. Hearing this, Kang's anger begins to build. She explains that he is too soft when it comes to blood and murder. It's a trait of ethical people, but it severely limits the types of missions he can take. With this weakness, he can only accept a handful of jobs, and Kang reluctantly agrees with her assessment. He reflects that contractor missions often involve people in extreme situations, leading to revenge, murder, and massacres. He knows that unlike the Uraval case, most missions cannot be completed without killing. He is irritated that Woo Sun-hee pushed him into this as a gamble, but he recognizes the necessity. He vows to take full responsibility for any blood he spills. He decides he will not be a coward. He accepts that the money to protect his family comes from the deaths of other people. As he embraces this new reality, he feels like a mercenary. Woo Sun-hee notices the shift in his attitude, commenting that a beautiful light now surrounds him because he has decided to become strong. Confused, Kang asks if she can see his soul on top of reading his mind, but she tells him she will explain later. A client is waiting. They enter a surprisingly spacious room. Kang asks if it's a spatial distortion, and the president calls him a fantasy maniac. She then orders a refuge to open, and a portal with a magic circle materializes on the floor. Impressed, Kang asks if she's a mage. She denies it, explaining that while it looks like magic, it's something else entirely. Woo Sun-hee says she can't give him more details yet. Kang understands it's because his level is too low and asks for the mission briefing. She informs him this will be his first mid to long-term mission, and the refuge will protect his physical body while he's gone. The president details the mission. It's D-rank difficulty, but the payment with bonuses reaches 350 million won, with an option to increase the risk. Kang calculates his share at 170 million. This confuses him, as he remembers her saying that payouts over 1 billion won are for A-rank missions. Woo Sun-hee explains he was specially selected. The contractor, a master named Kasane, specifically requested someone with his exact traits. This reminds Kang of the Parsons mission, which also had a special condition. That job could have paid 100 million, but in the end, he only received 1% of the value, a mere 1,200,000 won. The mission's risk is set at 30%, and Kang asks to keep it there. Since this is his first mid to long-term mission, he prefers to play it safe. His greatest fear isn't permanent damage. It's the possibility of enduring the terrible experience of two minds merging into one again, an ordeal he refuses to ever repeat. The protagonist is transported to the new client's location. He arrives on the hot battlements of a castle wall. He focuses to prepare himself and immediately feels the powerful emotions of Cassine flowing into him, recalling that a man's life is the image of his most powerful scream. He then dives into the client's memories. He sees Cassine approaching his lord to report a massive group of orcs far larger than expected. Cassine warns that the city is in grave danger if this continues, while outside, everyone moves in silence. Back in the memory, the lord explains that the king has vanished, taking the soldiers with him. Cassine questions how the man can even call himself a lord when he plans to survive alone and abandon everyone to be eaten by orcs. The lord retorts that the king took all the soldiers and the tax money. The food depots are empty, and now the only question is whether the orcs will kill them before they starve. Hearing this, the protagonist concludes that Lord Gaios has abandoned the city of Canadium. Analyzing these memories, the protagonist understands the client is a man of justice and pride, the guardian of the city. He is similar to Uraval, but the weight Cassine carries is on another level. His city is surrounded by monsters, and there is no food left. With no one protecting the streets, people attack their neighbors, becoming monsters themselves and making the guards' job impossible. In another memory, Gauss approaches Cassine, revealing that some residents were found boiling a human bone stew. He insists they must do something, as humans are turning to cannibalism and will kill each other before the orcs even get a chance. Faced with this, Cassine, the leader of the Canadium Guards, finally makes a decision. He kills the civilians who have gone mad and can no longer be controlled. Immediately after, he witnesses something even more cruel, a child who has starved for a week, and a woman boiling the neighbor's child for food. Cassine is forced to kill the woman, who doesn't even have the strength to lift a sword. Seeing the child's plight, Cassine screams to his god, offering his soul in exchange for his people's survival, declaring he will go to hell if it means he can save them. These memories leave the protagonist deeply uncomfortable. The situation is anything but normal. He looks down from the castle wall. He thinks that while the first mission with Parsons was an attack, this is the opposite, a castle defense. But he realizes the situation already seems lost. He wonders if it's even possible to turn this around when there is no money, no supplies, and no food. Monsters surround the city, and soldiers are now attacking civilian homes to steal what little they have. The protagonist concludes he needs help, and right on cue, the system alerts him that the mission is updated. He must now solve the city's famine and maintain its security. He sees that side quests have also appeared alongside the main mission, and begins to think about how to solve everything. Coldly and calculatingly, he tries to form a plan. He knows Cassine is a knight, so if he combines the strong guards with his own power, they could seize the trade route and deal with the other cities. But then he remembers they have no money. The Lord took the soldiers, the weapons, the horses, and all remaining funds, leaving him powerless even if he reclaims the trade route. He thinks this is an impossible mission, finding a D-rank quest this difficult, and imagining what an A-rank would be like. Suddenly, his thoughts are cut short by a man warning of a disturbance in the main village. The system also alerts him to a report of a disturbance in the castle. Worried, he realizes he has no time to think. He decides he must run, believing he might find some answers by seeing the situation for himself. As he approaches, he hears a massive commotion between guards and civilians. He sees people being robbed in broad daylight, while the guards just stand and watch. The protagonist realizes everyone is starving and no longer cares about anything else, so he orders them to stop. His special coercion ability activates, and everyone immediately freezes to listen. Using the skill, he commands the guards to tie everyone up and kill anyone who resists. The guards obey instantly. The protagonist wonders if this will solve the situation, even for a moment. Just then, someone approaches and addresses him. He recognizes the man as Burabal, the mercenary who is like a brother to the client. The protagonist knows one became a knight and the other a mercenary, but he decides to set their private relationship aside to get more information. He acknowledges that Burabal is smart, which makes him difficult to handle, and that the person he works for is Sios Kenadal, the brother of Gauss Kenadal. Burabal confronts him, worried his old friend will kill him. He reminds Cassine they are like brothers, even if they chose different paths. The protagonist knows Burabal works for Sios Kenadal, the brother of Lord Gauss, and understands he must tread carefully to avoid failing his mission. Cassine accuses Burabal of causing a public disturbance, threatening him with arrest, but Burabal denies it all. He points to a woman and explains she refuses to pay back the money she borrowed. The woman immediately denies this, claiming she already paid Lord Gauss in full. Burabal demands documentation to prove her payment, but the woman has no receipt. He then brandishes a promissory note, asking Casein which side the law is on. Burabal insists he was just confiscating what was legally owed and wants to know what Casein will do, if he will arrest the woman. The protagonist recognizes the impossible situation. The woman is clearly the victim, but his duty forces him to side with the thief. He sees the raw injustice of it all. She paid the Lord, but the Lord ran off with the money. As Burabal demands payment, the woman pleads that she already paid and will starve if they take what little she has left. Seeing the impasse, the protagonist silences them both. He announces that everything will be confiscated, stunning them into silence. He explains that since this is a dispute over property and the truth cannot be determined, his guards will seize the assets at the heart of the conflict. The woman asks how he can do such a thing, and even Burabal questions the order, insisting the goods belong to Lord Sios and presenting a provisional writ to prove it. But Casein points out a fatal flaw. The name on the note is Gaos Kenadal. Therefore, Sios has no legal right to collect the debt. Burabal argues that Sios is Gaos's brother, but the protagonist retorts that before the law, he is nothing more than a stranger. He turns the accusation back on them, asking if Sios is attempting to seize a lord's property, and if Burabal is challenging a knight of the king, an act of treason. Casein drives the point home. Until Gaos's death is confirmed, Sios is not the lord. The true ruler of this land remains Gaos Kenadal. Burabal is terrified. The protagonist orders his guards to confiscate everything. The woman, now desperate, accuses Casein of robbing her in broad daylight, screaming that the guards and Sios are all thieves. Burabal finds his voice again, warning the protagonist that Sios will not let this insult stand. Casein fires back that in the Lord's absence, he is the commander of the guard. He asks if Citizen Burabal is now threatening an officer of the law in the line of duty. Fear flashes in Burabal's eyes, but he tries to leave with a final threat, telling Casein to just wait and see what happens next. A short time later, a guard reports that the confiscation is complete. Casein realizes the woman's family were food merchants, which explains the large quantity of supplies. He feels a pang of guilt for her, but he needs the provisions to feed his guards. He knows that to the people, his actions look like nothing more than theft, and their morale plummets. A check of his status confirms it. The number of optimistic citizens has dropped sharply, but he feels he had no other choice. He believes the guards are the only force for order in Canadium, and if he can't control them, the mission is doomed. Next, he seeks out a man named Zapiro. The protagonist knows that when Lord Gaos Kenadal was in charge, Zapiro was the vice lord who handled all the administrative work. His skills saved the city when Gaos fled, and Casein believes he is the key to solving the food crisis. He finds the man and gets straight to the point. They need to take all the food from the people using the pretext of war. Zapiro reacts with disbelief, thinking Casein is mad. He asks if the protagonist seriously wants the guards to go from house to house, stealing from their own citizens. The protagonist explains his encounter with Burabal, who is already looting food shops in Lord Sios's name. He argues that if they let this continue, all the remaining food in the city will disappear. Zapiro asks sarcastically if their plan is to simply steal it first, before Sios can. Casein clarifies that he is only trying to seize the food that Sios is already planning to take. Zapiro is aghast, asking if he is serious. He calls it madness to use the army to steal from desperate families and warns Casein that for such a crime, he will be executed and his body torn to pieces. The protagonist says he welcomes that fate. He explains that the moment he stands on the execution block is the moment the city returns to Gaos's hands, and only then will they be safe. He lays out the grim reality. If things continue as they are, everyone either starves to death or gets devoured by orcs. Casein declares that to save the people of the city, he will sell his very soul, acknowledging that both he and Kang are backed into a corner. Realizing Casein is dead serious, Zapiro makes his choice. He declares that if the protagonist is this determined, then he too will risk his life on this decision and support him with all his power. The protagonist tells Zapiro he isn't obligated, but the city administrator insists, reminding him that all legal procedures must pass through him. A system window suddenly appears, announcing that the city's vice lord is yielding to coercion and accepts Casein as the leader in this dire situation. The protagonist is stunned by the alert. He had no idea coercion could work this way. The system then informs him that Zapiro's special skill, Bureaucrat, has activated. It applies a special bonus, boosting his intelligence to better comprehend the situation. With his newly sharpened mind, Zapiro instantly concludes that the shops, warehouses, and homes of the wealthy hold the most resources. The protagonist watches in amazement as Zapiro now handles his work with the speed and efficiency of a man in his 20s. Zapiro immediately hands Casein a list of all the shops in Canadium, complete with a register of the city's wealthiest families. The document details everything from food stores and wood shops to the construction guild and the blacksmiths, a perfect blueprint for seizing resources and recruiting more soldiers. Looking at the list, the protagonist warns Zapiro that he'll be in grave danger when this is over. But the Vice Lord is resolute, stating that this is a time of war. In such times, they need a decisive administrator, and above all else, they must first survive. Kaysen remarks that they'll both be hanged if they even manage to survive this. Zapiro explains that his parents lived here, as do he and his children. He cannot allow orcs to destroy his home. He feels that if an outsider is willing to risk his life for the city, he cannot simply stand by. The protagonist suggests Zapiro should stand by his side, but the Vice Lord declares he isn't beside him. He is far ahead of him. He places an object on the table. Kaysen asks if it's the seal of Lord Gauss. Zapiro confirms it is, telling Kaysen that he is now the Lord's representative until Gauss returns, and he should do whatever he deems necessary. One day later, at sunrise, the protagonist gathers all the soldiers of the Lord's house. But there are not even 300 men, and they are poorly trained. Gaius took all the skilled soldiers with him, leaving behind only new civilian recruits, accepted based on whether or not they could lift a spear. Standing before them, the protagonist presents a license signed by the Vice Lord, declaring the captain of the guard is now the Defense General of Canadium. Education in this age is abysmal, and few of the new guards can read, so the document means nothing to them. Even when the protagonist calls himself the Defense General, they don't understand. He switches to a more aggressive approach. He asks them if they want to die, activating his special skill, coercion. The basic proposal of life or death is the same for all of humanity, making no difference whether a person is smart or stupid. He tells the guards that he wants to live, but he demands they look at the state of their city. If the situation continues, this place has no future. They will either starve to death or lose the strength to resist, only to be torn apart and devoured by orcs. And that, he says, is the most optimistic outcome. With the city isolated, food running out, and orcs at the gates, Kaysen forces them to confront the reality of death and destruction. He aims to awaken the fear hidden in their hearts, appealing to their love for their families, and asks if they are truly okay with letting all of this happen. Outraged, the soldiers demand to know what their captain is doing. They complain that a military parade is meant to raise morale, but he is doing the exact opposite. They question if Kaysen wants them to flee instead of fight. The protagonist knows he is on the right path. After driving them into fear, he offers them hope, asking what they would do if there were an alternative. He then declares a general mobilization order, stating that both Zapiro and Gauss have agreed he will be the leader of the guards and the acting defense general. He declares that he will summon everyone who can fight. The men will raise their spears, the women will cook, the elders will pass on their wisdom, and the craftsmen will forge spears and bows. He assures them there are still plenty of resources left in the city, and they are going to seize all of it. The guards are terrified, certain that this path leads only to death, but the protagonist recognizes this as a classic motivational strategy. He tells the guards that people will call him a madman and say he is going to die. He admits he may be mad and he may die, but to save them, he will fight the orcs. He knows this will stir them. He then asks who will join him, and at that moment, the eloquent skill activates. A lone guard steps forward, declaring he will join. A system alert announces that the skills of eloquence and coercion have combined. In an instant, every guard in the city agrees to follow him. The general then commands the guards to repeat after him that they want to live and that they can achieve it if everyone in Canadium unites. As one, the guards chant the words. Their despair and fear of death transform into a burning desire to live, forging them into true soldiers. The protagonist leads the guards on a march, the soldiers following him faithfully. They soon arrive at the house of Lord Chios, where a man named Birabal stands guard. Seeing Kaysen at the head of the column, Birabal demands to know why he brings soldiers here. The protagonist states that he wishes to live, and in unison, all the guards repeat the motto. Birabal questions this action, and Kaysen explains that he will live only when Canadium becomes one. The guards slam their spears on the ground in perfect coordination and chant the motto again, leaving Birabal stunned. He tries to reason with his childhood friend, but Kaysen cuts him off. They are here to take the food. He declares that in a time of war, they are seizing the provisions of Chios' citizens. Enraged, Birabal presses his sword to Kaysen's neck, asking if he is insane and wants to die. The protagonist steps forward into the blade. He tells Birabal he can kill him, but only if he is confident enough to face 280 soldiers after murdering their general. Birabal immediately backs away, again demanding to know why he is doing this. Kaysen grips his shoulder and explains that they will all die otherwise. Gauss Kenedal has fled, taking 500 soldiers and abandoning the rest. Kaysen continues, explaining his need to gather all resources, food, weapons, leather, and wood. He insists Canadium still has strength, but his master is managing everything alone, a fact Birabal must understand. His childhood friend is left confused, unsure of what to do. Just then, Lord Chios appears from above, demanding to know what Birabal is doing. He sees there is no right answer. The situation with Canadium's general is serious, but if he kills the leader of the guards, his own life may be forfeit. Chios declares he will handle it himself. He asks if Birabal will do nothing while his house is being robbed, then orders him to kill Kaysen and become the new leader of the guards. Burabal, however, sees that his lord never lifts a finger, only ordering others to do his work. He tells the lord not to treat his position like a joke. If Cassin dies, the guards become powerless. He adds that with his own 30 soldiers and 20 guards, they wouldn't last a single day before being eaten by orcs. After this, Burabal turns back to Cassin and asks if he will feed them if they help in the fight. Cassin asks if he is hungry. Burabal confirms it, explaining that the lord gives them just enough food to survive, and his soldiers are complaining. In response, the protagonist invites him to join his defense force, promising double the food. Burabal is pleased with the offer and immediately orders his men to stand down, letting the guard leader do his work. Shios hurls insults at them, questioning if they think they will be safe after this. Realizing Shios will only cause more trouble, Cassin orders one of his men to arrest him. As he is dragged from his own home in ropes, Shios screams that Cassin will face divine punishment. After collecting all the supplies, the protagonist realizes Shios had far more than he imagined. He concludes that people like him are the reason the city is in this state. He knows what he did is theft, but he feels renewed to finish the job. After setting up a feast for the soldiers, Burabal asks Cassin where he and his men should patrol. Cassin already has a task in mind. He tells Burabal to find more trainers because the men need extensive training. Burabal agrees and commits to selecting 5 fast learners for the job. He then mentions they also acquired a healthy horse that was going to waste. Cassin knows the city is surrounded by mountains that limit visibility, even with the walls. He immediately sees the horse's value. A scout patrolling the mountains can give them a crucial advantage. He thanks Burabal for the good idea. Burabal asks if Cassin is worried he might just flee with the horse, but the protagonist tells him there's no need to run. When his friend asks why, Cassin declares with absolute certainty that he will save the city. Later that day, the protagonist returns to the walls and is met by Litra, Zepiro's son. Cassin asks for a report. Litra informs him they have all the metal, and the blacksmiths are already at work with the bellows. The protagonist recognizes the young man is a capable administrator and a great help. Litra continues his report. The spear and arrowheads are ready. As for wood, they gathered everything possible, even dismantling rich houses to get more durable materials. Litra notes that the wealthy complained bitterly, failing to grasp that everyone will die if the city falls. He calls them stupid, pointing out that without enough armed soldiers, the castle walls are defenseless. Cassin asks what happened to the complainers, and Litra replies that they are now sleeping in the first level of the cellar. Regardless, Litra believes they can easily defend themselves with the sturdy castle walls. Cassin senses there is another problem and asks about it. Litra confirms the problem is food, just as Cassin suspects. With so many people to feed, their entire stock will be gone in 5 days at the current rate. The protagonist knows he cannot cut rations without destroying morale, and he needs people willing to fight. Litra summarizes the situation. Trainers are chosen and weapons are being made. They can prepare if they have enough time. Cassin concludes that for Canadium, food is time. They must find a way to turn this around. He reflects that today's situation is better than yesterday's. When he arrived, everything was on the brink of collapse. Through his efforts, he has bought them 5 more days. Cassin feels he is on the right path, comparing the situation to a game with a secret key that can open an escape route. He remembers thinking it was impossible to change things, but simply taking resources from the rich partially solved the problem. He believes there must be another key like that one, but the question is where to find it. The protagonist knows the game changes based on the assigned mission, and that quests are never meaningless. Side quests always relate to the success of the main objective. The issues of hunger and morale are not perfect, but they are steadily being addressed. He then recalls a system alert telling him to remove the city's isolation and reopen the trade routes. He has no idea how to do it, but it could be the answer. Cassin immediately asks Litra if there is any way to trade with other cities, but the boy has no answer. The protagonist insists that if they cannot move, they must at least call for help. He states that their isolation is the city's biggest problem. Zepiro's son then reveals that his father happens to possess a magical artifact. Cassin asks what it does, and Litra explains it is a teleportation scroll that can send one person to the great city of Hurtle, a week's journey away. It only works for one person, but for the protagonist, that is more than enough. Just as he thought, there was a key. He decides to send Zepiro to the distant city, but the young man says it is impossible, asking if Cassin has forgotten why their former lord abandoned the city. The protagonist replies it was because of the orcs surrounding them. Litra confirms he is right, informing him that the last count was 1,000 orcs. As long as the orcs remain, the army will not come. In this world, orcs grow stronger as their numbers increase. 1 + 1 does not equal 2, but 3. If it takes 100 warriors to defeat 100 orcs, it takes 300 men to defeat 200. Litra then asks how many warriors it would take to defeat 1,000 orcs. He explains that Canadium has only survived this long because of its defensive walls, but they can no longer rely on that protection. Litra also mentions a red orc, a lord born once in 1,000, explaining that the group it leads is 3 times more powerful than normal orcs. This monster is a strategist that provides fighting spirit and morale to its kin, driving the other orcs into a battle frenzy where they no longer care for their own lives. They are nothing like humans, who cower in fear and despair of death. Letra says he understands why his lord fled, because there was no hope left. He admits he is angry that Gauss abandoned them, but from a self-preservation standpoint, the lord did the right thing to save what little he had left. The protagonist immediately reprimands him, telling him he cannot think that way. Letra agrees, but only because if the people heard him, the defense force's morale would weaken. Cassine states it is more than that. He explains that if someone as calculating as Letra sees the situation as hopeless, then ordinary people will be unprepared and fail to perform at their full potential. Cassine clarifies he is not asking the young man to lie, but to truly believe the city can overcome these hardships. If he truly believes it, then they will win in the end. Impressed, Letra admits he is almost envious and asks where Cassine's strength comes from. He replies that he once heard God only gives people challenges they can bear. Because of this, Cassine believes they can absolutely overcome this situation. Sometime after the conversation, guards begin distributing food throughout the city. The people finally get something to eat, and the system alerts that the number of fed citizens is growing. Because of the regular rations over the last 2 days, citizens who once thought the food would run out now show up on time to receive their share. The people are visibly more cheerful. Meanwhile, the protagonist helps train the soldiers, ordering them through their exercises. A great change is visible. The men no longer seem weak, and they now shout with concentration during their training. The system then alerts that the citizens are beginning to have hope. The protagonist, who at first did not understand the point of the mission, now realizes the objective is to change the city's entire atmosphere. Burabal approaches and asks if the protagonist truly believes victory is possible, since they don't have enough food, and the orcs could attack at any moment. In response, the protagonist reveals to Burabal that Zapiro has a teleportation scroll. The news surprises Burabal, who understands this means Zapiro has not given up on the city. The protagonist knows the real reason is that Zapiro refuses to survive alone and leave his children and cousins behind, but he sees no need to reveal this detail. With the new training orders, the guard's optimism grows even more. Suddenly, someone arrives with urgent news. The orcs have come. They are here. Realizing the gravity of the situation, the protagonist screams with all the force in his lungs, summoning everyone to the fight. He orders them all to the castle walls immediately. In response to the call, all the crossbowmen move into formation with perfection. They are focused and ready for the next command. Seeing the troops' potential makes everyone happy and optimistic. Thanks to all their effort, the results will finally be harvested. Zapiro points to the orcs, screaming below the walls, fearless of death. He estimates their numbers at 1 to 200. Despite the horde and the protection of the wall, Zapiro believes they are probably weak, a comment that catches the protagonist's attention. He reminds the men they will live if they remember their will, and that they are not alone. Zapiro then hands the protagonist a book, explaining he has already studied orc ecology. He details how orcs reproduce quickly, eat a lot, and grow 3 times faster than a human, but they have a critical weakness. When Zapiro asks if he knows the weakness, the protagonist correctly identifies it as a lack of food. Zapiro confirms this, explaining that 80% of orcs are warriors who survive by hunting and pillaging, driving the starving ones to hunt humans. The protagonist's expression falls at this revelation. He now sees the orcs in a new light, understanding their screams are born from hunger, but his face hardens again. He calls for everyone's attention and assures them the attacks will be over in 30 minutes. He activates his specialty, coercion, and asks if the soldiers can hold out for that long. Seeing their doubt, the protagonist insists they will soon see he is right. It is only 30 minutes. His words make the soldiers start to believe they can survive. Zapiro, however, is incredulous. He questions how the protagonist can be so certain, arguing that if the fight drags on, the men will lose their faith. The protagonist simply states that the orcs are starving and cannot withstand a prolonged battle. Zapiro presses the issue, asking what they will do if the orcs are not hungry. The protagonist pulls him close and reveals his plan. Zapiro questions if it will even work, given their lack of resources. The protagonist counters that this is exactly why they must use what they have where it will be most valuable. Zapiro agrees and turns to prepare. Immediately, the battle erupts. The orcs attack to plunder, and the humans fight to survive. The orcs raise their axes high, gathering momentum before striking the wall in unison. At the same time, Burabal orders the archers to prepare a volley. They follow his command, and at the wave of his flag, they fire as one, felling several orcs. The wounded beasts only become more enraged, doubling their efforts to smash through the wall. Seeing this, the protagonist orders the archers back and commands the soldiers to use the stones. The soldiers hurl a barrage of stones down on the orcs, striking them with great force. But this only leaves the creatures more injured and furious. One of them, unable to contain its rage, throws its axe, striking a soldier square in the torso. The protagonist shouts at the orcs, daring them to throw more, taunting that they cannot fight without weapons. An orc takes the bait and hurls its axe directly at him. The protagonist swings his sword and bats the weapon away, sending it flying back to kill the orc that threw it. He realizes the stones are not doing enough damage. He needs something stronger. Just then, a soldier warns him that the castle gate is at risk. As he runs toward it, the protagonist shouts for his men not to forget. Only 20 minutes remain. He arrives to see significant holes already splintering the wood, with orc axes widening the breach. A group of soldiers braces for the worst just inside the gate. The protagonist knows that at this rate, the enemy will soon break through. If the gate falls, they all fall with it. He clutches the fragment in his hand. He thinks about how he does not need 8,000,001. He knows what it is to want to save someone, even at the cost of one's own soul. With the fragment raised, he screams for Urival to help him, calling on its power. A moment later, the fragment shatters. A system message confirms he uses the fragment, gaining Urival's physical power and courage, but the effect can only be used once. He feels the surge in his abilities, sighs, and then explodes forward at a surprising speed. He moves so fast that a nearby soldier questions what he's even seeing. As he runs, he snatches a spear and charges, thrusting it through a crack in the gate. The weapon impales 2 orcs at once. He rips the spear back from their bodies and prepares to strike again. He keeps attacking, striking down every orc he can reach through the gaps. When he finally stops, the assault on the gate has ceased. He pants, exhausted, sweat dripping from his face. Urival questions how he can use his power when he's already in such a state. The protagonist replies that Cassine isn't weak, just starved. Urival accepts this and asks if he will defend the gate, but before the protagonist can answer, the orcs resume their attack. Urival warns him that this won't be enough to stop them. He needs to find another way, suggesting that well-built walls like these must have something for such an emergency. Thanks to Urival's experience, the hint floods the protagonist's mind with images of strange schematics. He immediately shouts to the second unit, ordering them to bring the hedgehog, briefly startling the soldiers. He figures Gauss Kenadal must have left the hedgehog behind only because of its massive size. A soldier protests that they don't know how to use the weapon, but the protagonist assures them he does and orders them to bring it fast. A short time later, the hedgehog appears, rolled in on wooden wheels. The soldiers push the extremely heavy barricade, telling each other to hold strong. They know one slip means death for them all. But on the way, a small stone gets stuck under a wheel, halting their progress. A soldier reports the problem and suggests changing direction, but the protagonist says there's no time. He tells everyone to push on his command. He counts to 3, bracing himself, and gives the order. They all push with their maximum strength, forcing the wheel over the stone. Immediately after, he orders them to load the weapons. As they work, the orcs on the other side sense that something is wrong. They don't understand how, but spears suddenly erupt from the gate in front of them. With no time to react, they are impaled where they stand. Without delay, the protagonist orders them to reload. After a great effort, the weapon is reloaded. He yells for them to fire. Once again, a volley of spears cuts down several orcs. He knows the hedgehog won't be enough and orders another reload. Urival agrees with his assessment, explaining that the orcs are now targeting the corners, beyond the hedgehog's reach. He warns that the gate will soon give way, and that the protagonist must prepare a different defense. As he wonders about a delay, a soldier announces Zipiro's arrival. The protagonist looks back to confirm. Without a word of greeting, he tells Zipiro to throw it immediately. Zipiro, however, points out that it isn't hot enough yet. He explains that he needs more firepower to heat whatever it is he's brought. The protagonist realizes they can wait no longer and orders the oil to be used immediately, arguing that the relentless axe strikes on the gate will cost them their chance. Seeing the urgency, the soldiers begin moving the large pot of oil toward the murder hole, an opening directly above the castle wall and their most powerful defense against the attackers. Zipiro warns them not to agitate the oil and to move slowly. Using chains, the soldiers begin to haul the pot up the stairs. Halfway up, one of the soldiers loses his footing and falls, screaming in shock. Zipiro watches in disbelief. Gravity takes over as the pot tilts, its contents spilling towards 2 other soldiers frozen in shock below. But before the pot can fall, the protagonist catches it with his bare hands. He withstands the scorching temperature and begins to push the pot back up. Realizing he cannot do it alone, he calls for help, and Burabal quickly joins him. They both struggle to stabilize and push the pot as the protagonist screams with the effort. All the while, his hands are literally cooking against the hot metal. With one last joint effort, the two manage to push the pot to the top of the stairs. He then looks down at his smoking hands and sees that Burabal is in the same condition. Despite the pain, they both smile, relieved to have prevented an accident that could have cost them the entire defense. But the relief is short-lived, as the soldier warns that a crack in the gate is growing larger. Without wasting a moment, the protagonist tells Zipiro to use what they have prepared. Zipiro then orders the soldiers to throw the prepared food through the hole. Soon after, women bring more full buckets, leaving the soldiers confused about why food is being brought into a battle. The women dump the food through the hole, and it rains down on the orcs. Unsure Unsure of what is happening, they halt their attacks for a moment. However, the instant they taste what has fallen, the orcs go into a frenzy. They all start screaming and rushing for the food, trampling one another just to get a taste. With hatred in his eyes, the protagonist declares that now is the time and unleashes all the boiling oil through the hole. As the liquid falls upon the orcs, he explains that its name is Devil's Tongue. The orcs it hits are fried completely, while those outside its reach lose all visibility. The terror of this weapon is that it swallows every last space in front of the gate, inflicting death on everything in its path. Seeing this, the surviving orcs run in fear, not wanting to end up fried as well. The protagonist celebrates as he sees them retreating. However, one orc with an axe covered in lightning shows no sign of fleeing. Instead, it cuts down those trying to escape, making the rest think twice. The special orc roars, its body crackling with lightning as it glares at its comrades. Left with no choice, the other orcs turn back to the wall and begin to charge once more. The protagonist realizes the orcs are returning and wonders about the identity of this powerful orc. The orc with the glowing axe points forward, ordering the others to attack. Uraval identifies it as the chief and recommends the protagonist get a bow. Heeding the advice, the protagonist takes a bow from a nearby soldier and asks Uraval about his archery skills. Uraval expresses confidence but admits he is less skilled with a bow than with a spear. As the protagonist aims, he complains about the lack of any aiming assistance. At the same time, the orc chief prepares to enter the battle. The protagonist resigns himself to the shot, but as he starts to mention his army training, he accidentally looses the arrow. He is in shock at his mistake. As the arrow soars through the air, he is certain his aim is completely wrong. To his surprise, the swift arrow strikes the chief directly in the head, dropping him to the ground, lifeless. The protagonist cannot comprehend what just happened, and everyone on the wall is stunned by the sight. Ignoring his own lucky shot, he raises a hand and declares that his skills are still sharp. In response, the crowd erupts, chanting the protagonist's name in celebration. Uraval approaches and questions if the protagonist's aim was off, but the protagonist dismisses it, stating that it doesn't matter now that the battle is over. With their leader dead, the orcs lose their last shred of fighting will. They turn and flee without a second thought. Watching the enemy retreat, the protagonist asks how much time has passed, requesting a check on the 30-minute mark. From the wall, everyone watches the orcs retreat in a massive wave. He reflects that for the first time, the city of Canadium has defeated nearly 200 orcs. The battle ends in a great victory, and the city enters a festive mood, with soldiers and civilians overjoyed. Elsewhere, sometime later, the protagonist is focused, writing at a desk. After finishing, he drops his pen and expresses his own desire to celebrate. He thinks that while winning is good, there is still too much to do, and all he really wants is to rest. He must write reports on casualties and resources, analyze the problems revealed by the battle, and plan for the next confrontation. Uraval comments that the paperwork is worse than the war itself. The protagonist scoffs, remarking that a veteran knight is being defeated by paper. He then reflects that he never had to do this kind of work in the games he used to play. Suddenly, the door opens. Zapiro enters laughing and asks if the protagonist is struggling. The protagonist confirms that it is hell. Seeing his state, Zapiro offers to send him on another job if this one is too difficult. The protagonist immediately stands up, eager to accept. Zapiro explains the deal. If the protagonist does his job, Zapiro will handle the paperwork. The protagonist asks what the job is, but then looks down and notices the red envelope Zapiro is carrying. He asks if he has to deliver them personally, and Zapiro confirms it is the most polite way. Concerned, the protagonist asks if Zapiro has slept. Zapiro claims he slept as much as he needed, but one look into his eyes tells the protagonist he is lying and has likely been awake all night. The protagonist tells Zapiro he doesn't need to punish himself for not raising his sword in the battle, warning that he will collapse and starve if he keeps this up. But Zapiro replies that he likes to work. He explains that when he lies down, he feels like he is going to die, but working makes him feel comfortable and even allows him to sleep a little. After hearing this, the protagonist says he understands, takes the envelopes, and leaves the room. As he walks away, he considers that he cannot know exactly how Zapiro feels, but imagines he must be so anxious that he suffers from insomnia, choosing work over sleep. He reflects on the heavy responsibility that no one can understand unless they carry it themselves, a unique burden. Looking out over the city, he concludes that this is a bundle of red scrolls for the dead. He stands before a family's home and extends his hand, delivering the red envelope. He tells them he is sorry and did everything he could. The woman weeps, learning she must now live without her beloved. The protagonist continues, stating the soldier was courageous to the very end and that everyone witnessed his bravery and will remember it. At his words, the soldier's wife and son collapse to the ground in tears. An old man rushes toward him, screaming that if the protagonist took them away, he must also bring them back. Faced with the old man's grief, the protagonist can only say he is sorry. He reflects on the battle against the orcs. It was a success. They defended the city and stopped the attack. But a battle is a battle, and nothing can be done when someone gets hurt. Out of 300 soldiers, 50 were wounded and 20 died. A decisive victory, but he knows it means nothing to the families who lost someone. The grieving old man asks how they are supposed to live now. The protagonist, unsure if it will be any comfort, tells him they will still receive the same amount of food, but the old man slaps him across the face. He screams that he did not sell his son to fill his stomach and orders the protagonist out of his house. As he leaves, the old man screams one last time for him to disappear. Walking away, the protagonist feels restless and clicks his tongue in anger. He wonders aloud if he should just leave the family without food, but Urival tells him not to say such things, as it would upset the other soldiers. Urival explains the system. Food is distributed first to soldiers and their families, who receive double the amount of others. If the men realize their families will not be cared for after their deaths, they will start avoiding battles. The protagonist snaps that he already knows all of this. Urival asks why he is being so sensitive, and the MC replies that a family's loss is tragic, but he doesn't understand why they blame him instead of the orcs or Gauss. Urival asks if he is worried about Zepiro, and the protagonist confirms he is, but he believes he must do this. It is what a chief must do. Urival reflects that the burden of a just leader is the root of his authority and sacrifice. Such leaders work harder than anyone and care for their army, which is why everyone attacks without hesitation when they give the order. The protagonist then mentions a general who did everything alongside his soldiers so they would lose their fear of death, turning them all into strong warriors. Urival asks if that is why he is delivering the letters himself, and the MC replies that he considers it a leader's duty. He believes that as one of the most important people in Canadium, he must bring honor to these families, to the point where they feel pride instead of sorrow. Urival asks if he intends to support them, and the protagonist confirms this is the ultimate goal. Out of 2,000 inhabitants, 300 are soldiers. Urival comments that he cannot force people to enlist, but the protagonist replies that he knows this, which is why he only accepts volunteers. He reflects that civilians are the source of a city's strength, and he must create an environment that makes them want to join the fight. After a moment, Urival says it sounds good, but it will not work. Smiling, the protagonist asks if he is sure about that. A moment later, he looks back and asks why the people following them do not show themselves. A young man approaches and greets the general. Awkwardly, the man asks if many died. The protagonist confirms it. Many died, and many more will likely die. He explains that unless the orcs disappear, they will face battle after battle until they collapse from exhaustion. The young man asks if there is no way to escape, but the protagonist replies that they cannot escape. They can only stop them, and only if they act now. Breaking into a cold sweat, the young man asks how. The protagonist shouts that if he had just 200 more people unafraid of death, the city's defense would be secured. The young man smiles, but his expression quickly changes as he looks to the side, where his son calls to him from a distance. With his head lowered, he says his body is weak. The protagonist counters that weaker and older people are already fighting, and asks if the man does not want to be a brave father to his son. The young man just looks at him with a dark expression. The protagonist lowers his hand, noting the fire in the young man's eyes. He tells him not to let that fire go out, warning that if it does, he will become like a defeated dog. As they depart, Urival comments that the exchange was pitiful. The protagonist just asks if he wants to bet on whether the young man will enlist. The young man stands frozen, watching them leave, before clenching his fist tightly, his decision made. Even after the great battle, the city remains isolated, but the victory sparks a glimmer of hope, drawing in more volunteers. From a distance, the protagonist sees the young man from before, now holding a soldier's armor. He recognizes that Canadium is finally burning with embers of hope. Later, at Zepiro's house, the protagonist asks why he was summoned. Zepiro doesn't look up from his writing, simply noting his arrival. The protagonist questions what he is doing, and Zepiro explains he is researching the history and merits of Canadium. He argues that if the orcs are a liability, they need to find a compelling reason for soldiers to fight for the city, a reason for them to stay and protect it for a long time. As the protagonist reads the document, something catches his eye. He sees the word dwarf and asks if they are the city's great merit. Zepiro confirms it. He points out that while the city produces herbs, its massive walls are an anomaly. The protagonist agrees the walls are incredibly sturdy, but he suspects a different reason for their size. Zepiro reveals the truth. At its peak, the city had 25,000 inhabitants, and their food supply depended entirely on trade with the dwarves. Zepiro describes the dwarves as masters capable of refining iron weapons to the quality of mithril, with immense knowledge of minerals and excavation. If Canadium could resume trade with them, people would flock to the city. The protagonist asks why the trade stopped, believing he can restart it if he knows the cause. Zepiro explains it all ended after a great desert appeared, an event the mayor at the time blamed on a dragon. The protagonist is stunned, realizing he might have to defeat a dragon just to save the city. He wonders if this is the key to the problem. It is the ultimate key to saving the city, but it's not the most immediate need. The priority is getting food to feed 2,000 civilians and soldiers, and he feels the frustration of the dead end. He knows a piece of the puzzle is missing, and finding it will solve everything. As he racks his brain, a commotion starts outside. Litra bursts in, announcing that they have arrived. She repeats the words, breathless. The protagonist immediately asks if she means the orcs. Litra confirms the orcs are fighting outside, but she clarifies that he has arrived, Quibel. At the name, Zapiro leaps from his desk and bolts from the room without a word. The protagonist asks Litra to explain, and she reveals that Quibel's merchants, friends of her father, have arrived with a massive amount of food. The protagonist is completely surprised. He doesn't fully understand what is happening, but the key he so desperately needs has finally arrived. He realizes the solution to his problem didn't need to be found, it came directly to him. From the top of the walls, he and Zapiro look down at a column of men and wagons pouring into the city, bringing countless barrels of supplies and even livestock. Naturally, the orcs swarm the convoy, desperate for a piece of the spoils. But the knights guarding the wagons cut them down with terrifying ease. Every precise strike fells another enemy. The protagonist is amazed. Hundreds of orcs are already dead, so many that his own reinforcements would only get in the way. He tells Zapiro that his friends are incredible. Zapiro just stares down, commenting that Quibel spent all his money on this. He says that while he wants to thank his friend, he also pities him, because now he must kill his friend of 20 years with his own hands. The protagonist has no idea what he means. The confused protagonist demands to know why Zapiro wants to kill the very merchants who brought food to Canadium. Zapiro explains the grim reality. The city has no money. Even if they gather every last resource, they can only afford half the supplies. Failing to secure the entire shipment means the people will fall into despair. Understanding the situation, the protagonist slams his fist into a wall, silently cursing Gauss Kenadal for abandoning the city and stealing its means of survival. He briefly considers asking the merchants for credit, but immediately discards the thought. He knows that as a merchant himself, he would never give food to a city besieged by orcs. Even if the leader is sympathetic, he can't afford to leave with debts. The merchants will simply pack up and go. He concludes that the food is an absolute necessity for Canadium. His life is now reduced to a simple choice: kill or be killed. He resolves to carry this sin in his heart forever, but knows it must be done. Turning to Zapiro with grim determination, he tells him it's time to move. Just then a side quest appears, instructing him to capture the merchants with minimal damage. He immediately urges Zapiro to hurry. In front of the city hall, they meet the merchants. Zapiro thanks them for coming and welcomes them to Canadium. Their leader, Quibel, remarks on the excellent treatment, even being allowed to sleep in the mayor's house. Zapiro replies that since Quibel came because of him, it's only natural. A pleased Quibel says it was worth risking his life to get here, and that he will just go unpack before meeting them. Zapiro then heads back inside as the merchants go on their way. Back inside the building, the protagonist tells Zapiro they cannot let this turn into a bloodbath. He realizes the quest's true meaning. The mercenaries are the key to the city's survival. They defeated 100 orcs without taking any damage. If they can be turned into allies, Canadium can finally be properly defended. Zapiro agrees with the goal but asks how they can achieve it. The protagonist reveals his plan. While they lack food, they have plenty of wine. They will host a banquet. Zapiro thinks the idea is brilliant. Mercenaries are vulgar and don't carry swords while drinking, as a drunk with a blade is a recipe for disaster. The plan is to separate the merchants, the mercenaries, and their boss into different sleeping quarters and prepare a large bath for them. Litra adds that a good bath will ensure everyone disarms. The protagonist explains further. The men are exhausted from sleeping outside and breathing dust. The moment they see hot water, they will be desperate to wash the sand from their irritated skin, and no one takes a weapon into the bath. To seal the trap, he will place alcohol in everyone's room. After a hot bath, they will drink, their anxiety and worries melting away in what they believe is the safest place in the city. Despite the careful planning, he warns Litra to stay vigilant. They must capture everyone without a single casualty. The mission's difficulty is D, and its success is crucial to surviving the food shortage and the orc attacks. Urival asks if this is truly the only way. The protagonist tells him he doesn't have to force himself to help, acknowledging his pride. But Urival insists that if he stands aside, the protagonist will just do it all alone, so he will join him. The protagonist thanks him for his loyalty. Later that night, with all preparations complete, the guards move into position to begin the capture. Burabal gives the protagonist a final warning. One of the mercenaries, a man named Mortar, is extremely strong. He explains that Mortar is a first-rate fighter while the others are third-rate, and strongly advises against engaging him directly. The protagonist agrees to avoid a direct confrontation and tells everyone to prepare. He begins the countdown, ready for the fight, but before he can give the signal, they overhear voices talking with Quibel. It's too late to stop the plan. He finishes the count to 3 and screams the order to attack. He kicks the door open, yelling for them not to move, but inside there are only 3 people. One of them remarks that he warned the others they were coming. With a sad expression, Quibel confirms the man was right, lamenting Zapiro's betrayal of their 20-year friendship. The protagonist realizes they saw the ambush coming all along. Stunned, he wonders who this strange man is. He looks different from everyone else, yet somehow familiar. At first, the protagonist thinks he might be Asian, but then he corrects himself, recognizing the man is specifically Korean. The shocking conclusion hits him. This man might be another dimensional visitor, door. Genis confidently asks if they are all here to celebrate, assuming they have considered his proposal. He mentions his 2 useful subordinates. The soldiers see him standing unarmed before 6 armed men, yet he makes no move to defend himself. One of them, Burabal, orders him to drop his weapon and kneel, but Commander Cassin tells him to stand down, sensing the immense strength of the man before them. Cassin sheathes his sword and apologizes for the trouble, explaining that Genis must understand their reaction. The young man just smiles, saying he can try. The protagonist interrupts, needing to confirm something. He asks Genis directly if he is a dragon, shocking everyone with the sudden question. Genis points at them, remarking that their eyes must be for decoration, as he is obviously not a mutant lizard. The protagonist follows up, asking if he is a dimensional traveler with a contract. The questions leave the young man intrigued, angry, and suspicious all at once. His patience snaps. He seizes the protagonist by the neck, demanding to know if he is Duenas, a dragon Genis eliminated, or perhaps a priest of another dragon. He insists the protagonist tell him everything he knows. Only then does the protagonist realize his mistake. He has said too much, and now he faces a dragon slayer. It's too late. He has provoked the wrong person. With reddened eyes, Genis threatens to make him suffer so much, he will want to give up on everything. The power he unleashes is immense. Objects in the room begin to move on their own as the atmosphere changes drastically. The sheer force of his energy unnerves everyone, and the weakest among them collapse unconscious. Despite this, the protagonist pushes further, questioning how Genis expects to get answers without even letting him speak. Genis just smiles, commenting on the strange man's audacity. As this unfolds, the protagonist runs through multiple scenarios, all pointing to Genis being from another dimension. He concludes that if Genis is truly a dragon slayer, there is no way to defeat him. Even while being held in the air by his neck, the protagonist still glares back at his attacker, a feat that suggests he has a special body. With his remaining strength, he tries to reason with him, asking if Genis also plans to eliminate his 2 useful soldiers, who are already unconscious on the floor. Genis's interest in the 2 men is so great that he simply tosses the protagonist into a corner. Genis considers himself a very temperamental person, and admits he still hasn't learned to lessen the impact of his attacks. Luckily, aware of his own immense power, he always carries a healing potion. He approaches the men he deems useful and begins to revive them. When they take too long to wake up, his short patience runs out, and he flicks them to speed up the process. From across the room, the protagonist watches everything. He notes that the man acts like a child, but is impressed by the potion that brings 2 people back from the brink of death. From a distance, he asks if the 2 men will be all right. But then he notices something strange. Everyone in the room has fainted, except for Genis and Cassin. This realization makes Genis even more suspicious of Cassin. His eyes turn red again as he demands to know why. The young man wonders if the question is serious, feeling half dead and wanting to vomit. The only thing keeping him on his feet is Uribaldo's buff, an unshakable spirit. He thinks the protagonist is much younger than he seems, and mentally curses him, questioning if he is stronger than he first imagined. To justify his resistance, the protagonist explains that he is a contractor, which is why he withstood the attack. Genis asks if he is a contractor from that hell, and if he also sold his soul. With a smile, Genis declares the protagonist is pathetic. The protagonist is confused, wondering what Genis means by that hell, and if it is just another name for Sos. He realizes the man is different somehow, and at least not a contractor like him. At that moment, the man in black suggests they greet each other again, introducing himself as Genis, the master of the group the protagonist intended to rob. Immediately, a status window appears, informing the protagonist that he has met the epic hero. The window details his name as Genis, age 20, but with a mental age of 60, because he spent time in a dimension where time moves much faster. His class is the Guardian of the Dragons, and he is an enemy of the Black Dragon Duenas. Among his titles is Owner of Infinite Riches. The status window explains that Genis, the Dragon Slayer, is the only person who can solve the city's current problem. The protagonist's mission updates. He must save the city by befriending Genis, now that he has met the main character of this mission. The system informs him that Genis is an epic hero who needs 4 loyal subordinates, and that the protagonist must help convince people to make him the ruler of Canadium. With that, his affinity with Genis, which was at 25%, is reset, and they are now on equal footing. The protagonist processes the information, thinking that Genis is truly someone famous, a hero about whom poems are written. If he is a dragon slayer, he must be a real hero. The logical conclusion is that to save the city, he needs to become Genis's subordinate. He tries to remain calm, despite planning to steal everything from the hero just minutes before. He is interrupted by Genis, who asks why he has not yet greeted him back. The protagonist quickly introduces himself as Cassin, his real name, but says he has no surname because he is a commoner. He thinks he almost revealed his true name from Earth, and that now is not the time, as he does not know if Genis will help him. He wonders what he should say, whether to tell Genis that he is different and was sent here through a contract with Sosi. He considers explaining that he traveled with only his soul to earn money, but concludes it would be too difficult to tell only part of the story. He would have to tell everything. Unsure how secret Sosi's operation is, he decides to be careful not to jeopardize the mission. Finally, he says it is an honor to meet a dimensional visitor, and though he feels unworthy of the position, he is the leader of the local guards. He thanks Genis for coming with the merchants and promises to return the favor when things improve. Internally, the protagonist thinks he needs to organize his ideas and make Genis believe him. Fortunately, he was born into a family of talkers, and perhaps his skill in eloquence will be useful in this situation. Despite his confusion and the urgency of the moment, he begins to explain that the state of the city is not good at all. However, Genis interrupts him, putting an arm in front of him and telling him to stop. He comments that for someone who does not seem to like talking, the protagonist is very talkative and asks him to be quiet so he can think. The protagonist likes the idea, as it gives him time to reorganize his thoughts. He reflects that Genis is powerful and seems careless, but has an absurd strength that he cannot handle directly. Therefore, he needs another approach. Make Genis like him so he can become his subordinate. It is then that he understands everything. He is not the main character of this story. Genis is. The solution will not come from him or from Cassine, but from the hero. With this clarity, he sees the answer. He needs to figure out Genis's personality. To start, he asks if the others are okay. Genis replies that they are, because the elixir can heal even those who are dying. The protagonist deduces that elixir is the name of the purple potion, and that Genis's casual use of it means he must care about people. Based on this, he runs another test, and asks the hero to also take care of the guards who attacked him, explaining that they were hit by Genis's explosion and are near death. Genis, however, asks what he is talking about and why he should help people who attacked him. He states that he is the victim, and the law of any country does not require a victim to help their aggressors. The protagonist then asks if Genis is a dragon slayer. Faced with implicit confirmation, he suggests that in that case, the true victims are the guards and the people of the city. He does not mean to say Genis did anything wrong, but that the current state of Canadium and everything happening around it is not, in fact, the hero's fault. He explains that it all started after Genis arrived. The orcs of Blacktooth Mountain, who had not left for over 300 years, suddenly descended and surrounded the city. The protagonist then connects the dots and makes a direct accusation. Genis killed the dragon, Duena. He asks if the current situation in Canadium, besieged by thousands of orcs, is not a direct consequence of the hero's involvement. The hero is silent, not knowing what to say. Without a word, he throws the elixir to the protagonist, who thinks with relief that he got what he wanted. Genis warns that the elixir is more expensive than gold, and that one drop is enough, as any more could kill them. The protagonist thanks him while the hero just crosses his arms. He acts quickly, applying the elixir to the injured people and noting its incredible effectiveness as their faces become less pale and their breathing improves instantly. When he turns to say he is done, he realizes Genis is no longer there and wonders where he could have gone. He reflects that the hero must have been conflicted, but since he did not deny the suspicion, it means he was right. The fall of Canadium began with Genis's mission. It all started when he killed the dragon and became a dragon slayer. It was like a small stone thrown at the top of a mountain that turned into an avalanche, a terrible catastrophe for the village below. Fortunately, Genis does not ignore his responsibility for what he caused. With a slight smile, the protagonist thinks that if this is how things are, he will be able to complete this mission. The protagonist sits on the floor, running his hand over the stone as if trying to will gold from the rock. The status window asks what he is doing. He explains that he is obviously looking for gold. The system questions his sanity, asking if he truly expects to find gold in a stone floor with his bare hands. The protagonist explains that he is trapped with nothing to do, so he might as well think about gold. He reflects that while it seems foolish, the act is just a way to organize his thoughts. The mission was forced on him, and Genis put him in this cell for trying to rob the merchants. Realizing this, he asks the status window for more information. The system opens, revealing his mission is now updated to Guardian of Canadium. The description states he met a hero trained only to be a guardian of dragons, who has no experience living in this world. His task is to help Genis and get him involved in managing the city. The protagonist thinks the mission has changed, and that this must have been the plan from the start. He reflects that robbing the merchants was never going to succeed, but without that act, he never would have met the true hero of the mission. He finally understands the robbery was just a pretext to meet Genis. To get the 4 subordinates required by the mission, he thinks of Zipiro, the young man, and the other 2 people. He recalls the young man mentioning 2 useful subordinates and realizes that because of his actions, Genis now has them. Genis was trying to fit in with the merchants group and, after noticing the 2, wanted them as his subordinates. They rejected the offer, but when the protagonist tried to rob them, they recognized the danger and joined the hero to escape the threat. Smiling, the protagonist realizes that was the key. The status window asks if they were helpful and he confirms, understanding they will help him later on as well. A day later, while the protagonist is still imprisoned, his cell opens. A man in a red cape approaches and says the hero is summoning him. The protagonist gets up immediately, agrees, and asks if they can go now. The man in the red cape finds the protagonist's behavior strange, thinking he might be delirious with fear. As he walks ahead, the man asks if he is okay. The protagonist says he is and asks why. The guard tells him not to worry since he doesn't seem nervous enough to do something irrational, and adds that he doesn't think they will kill him. The protagonist realizes they must think he is so terrified he has gone mad. He reflects that it's fine. Unlike the nervous Kisin, he is acting as Cheol Ho Kang. He wonders if he should focus on acting like Kaisen, but instead begins to speak, saying he isn't worried and actually feels comfortable. Mordem, the guard, asks if he really feels comfortable. The protagonist confirms it, explaining that whether the hero likes it or not, he will now take care of Canadium. The protagonist no longer has to carry that burden, which is why he feels at ease. As he speaks, the protagonist turns his head, hearing people being told to get in line, and notices food being distributed in front of the office. He observes that the soldiers who tried to rob the merchants were not killed, but put to work maintaining order. The protagonist comments that looking at Canadium now, he doesn't think the hero is so bad. The man completely ignores him and just tells them to keep walking. However, the protagonist is certain the guard's voice sounds happy. Cheol Ho Kang thinks that since this man sees things positively, he will be a good source of valuable information. So, he asks Mordem what the hero is like. Mordem replies that he might not believe it, but he doesn't really know what the hero is like either. The protagonist thinks to himself that he only asked to test him, but realizes the guard is very talkative. The guard continues, saying he met the hero just a week ago when the caravan was on the move. The protagonist asks if he said caravan, and if that's how they travel. Mordem confirms it and explains that a few months ago there were less than 100 monsters in the area, but now there are hundreds or thousands. He adds that it wasn't just that. The climate also changed, turning into a tropical desert. The protagonist thinks that while many might not know, he can deduce that all of this was caused by the dragon's death. He reflects that he knows nothing about the lives of dragons, only that they are like huge mounds or something similar. The dragon's death was a calamity. The monsters it contained are now free, and the surrounding area has become a desert. He compares the situation to uprooting a tree, which leaves a hole. The dragon had a beneficial power, and when it died, that power spun out of control. Mordem continues his story, saying that on the third day many monsters attacked. They tried to fight them, but had to split the group, sending the merchants ahead while they stayed in the rear. Everyone there thought they were going to lose their lives, but then the hero appeared and saved them. According to Mordem, the hero just swung his sword a few times and defeated all the orcs, proving he is incredibly powerful. The guard concludes that the hero has a different nature and is not like a normal man, and that's all he knows. The protagonist wonders if he is serious, and if this is just a polite way of saying the hero has a bad temper. Just then, the mercenary announces they have arrived and tells him to enter. Inside, Queeble is questioning why, after decades, someone tried to kill them. A white-haired man replies that he is very sorry and ashamed. Another young man tells him to stop his meaningless apologies before his ears rot. The merchant then intervenes, saying everything is settled and that all of his and his father's debts are paid. He adds that the white-haired man has even shamed the parents who raised him. Someone says that is enough. It is the hero, Genis, who orders them to stop, telling them not to insult the man's parents like that because it is making his own ears dirty. Queeble addresses the hero as master, but Genis cuts him off, telling him not to be mistaken. He states that Queeble and Zapiro would not have thought of this on their own, and that if they had enough people, they would not have conspired against him. With red eyes, Genis announces there is another guest, and asks if he should call him in. At that moment, the protagonist enters through the door, and everyone looks at him. He now stands right in front of Genis. A man demands to know if the protagonist is the defense general. The protagonist offers no justification for his actions. The man repeats the question, outraged, but the protagonist only confirms he has no excuses. He confesses to trying to take the lives of those who wanted to help, admitting to thoughts more monstrous than any beasts. The protagonist realizes this is a test and drops to his knees, a move that surprises Genis. The protagonist knows his mission is to persuade Quibble, to calm his rage and make him an ally, believing that managing the emotions tied to his powers is the true goal. He begins to speak, claiming Quibble misunderstands the situation. He takes full responsibility, insisting he alone tried to rob the merchant group, that he manipulated the weak Zapiro, and that he personally led the guards. The man grinds his teeth, demanding to know if the protagonist was truly responsible for everything. The protagonist's strategy is to fuel the man's rage, and it works perfectly. The man explodes, demanding a reason for his actions. The protagonist simply states he will offer no excuses. The man asks if he has a death wish. The protagonist replies that he wants to live, which only enrages the man further, who accuses him of mockery. In a swift motion, the protagonist bows even lower, pressing his forehead to the cold floor. He explains that he almost made a grave mistake upon witnessing an injustice, suggesting his punishment should have been harsher. He recounts the city's 3-month isolation. 2 months ago, their lord fled with all the guards, abandoning them. The women and children died first. Orcs devoured many of the rest. As he speaks, a status window announces the activation of sympathetic mode. The protagonist continues, describing how his people cast aside honor and humanity just to survive, how they felt their crimes were justified. He screams, asking what they have left but their own lives, proclaiming they would sell their very souls to go on living. The story moves a white-haired man to tears. Janice listens silently as the protagonist tells of people climbing their neighbors' walls for scraps, of going without food for 2 months, of abandoning everything for a chance to live, and of following him because of it. He ends by pleading for them to save Canadium, insisting they only want to survive. Suddenly, the protagonist's head is slammed into the floor with tremendous force, spilling blood across the stone. He struggles to lift his head, but another blow comes flying his way. Before his face can smash into the ground again, Janice catches him by the shoulder. With red eyes, Janice calls the protagonist clever. He explains that while the protagonist claimed to offer no excuses, he masterfully said everything he wanted to, acting like a venomous snake. Janice smiles, remarking that a snake that bites at the first opportunity is a useful thing to have. On the floor, the protagonist hears Janice say he needs someone exactly like him and can only conclude that the man is insane. A status window opens, declaring this is the end. Another immediately follows, stating he went too far. The protagonist wonders how powerful the blow was if his skull is shattered. Then, to his shock, he is completely healed, his eyes flying open. He questions if it was an elixir or a function of Janice himself, concluding that the remedy is incredibly potent, regenerating cells no matter how severe the wound. Janice turns to Quibble and declares that he is lost. Quibble, confused, asks what he means. Janice explains that they are stopping now, that Quibble's argument has failed, and asks why he looks so displeased. Quibble tries to protest, but Janice cuts him off. He makes it clear that this is an order, not a request. Janice continues, stating it's obvious that people who endure such a tragedy would lose their sense of right and wrong. Janice points out that Quibble himself abandoned mercenaries to guarantee his merchant group's safety, concluding that he and the protagonist are the same. Quibble tries to defend his actions, but Janice orders him to be silent. Janice then declares that when the city was starving, they did not abandon anyone, and asks Quibble if he is wrong. Quibble can only admit that Janice is right. With that, Janice declares the conversation over. He orders his men to put food in the protagonist's group's bags, stating that before they accuse them of a crime and take their lives, they must feed them first. A man named Mortem agrees to carry out the command. Quibble tries to interject one last time, but Janice silences him with a furious glare, ordering him to simply follow the command he was given. Janice questions if Quibble can truly do this, but Quibble explains that there must be a misunderstanding. He wants to know if the man can work without anger or resentment, and if everything is truly resolved. Quibble wisely advises him that to be a merchant, he cannot let his emotions get out of control. Trusting him, Janice changes the orders he gave to Mortem. The new priority is to find the routes the orcs might use to infiltrate the city. That servant must also obey his absolute orders and choose people who can fight during the attacks. The next to receive an order is Zapiro, who is terrified as soon as his master's gaze falls on him. He is told he has only 1 day and must rest as much as possible, as Janice thinks he cannot work in his current state. The master says he values everything that belongs to him, and if Zapiro wants to be saved, he must obey. The man feels immense gratitude that someone is concerned for his life. Janice then makes a few more observations, commenting that the vice mayor can only sleep after drinking alcohol. Because he is already an old and tired man, Janice says he will take that heavy burden and carry it for now. This makes the old man break down in tears, but it's no use as the master is stubborn. He just points his finger and orders the man to go rest. From a distance, Kaysen just watches all these orders being given. He comes to admire this new lord, who seems arrogant, but whose orders are clear and specific. Kaysen reflects that when a powerful person acts so recklessly, it is not out of irreverence, but benevolence. He notes that the 3 most influential people in the city are now under that person's command, and realizes that after them, only he is left to receive more orders. And Kaysen is right, because that person suddenly walks toward him. Placing a hand on his shoulder, Janice asks if he is Kaysen and, in a strange tone, wants to know if he has anything to say. The vibration of the touch is so strong that it makes his very bones ache. He is then slowly sent to another dimension and opens his eyes. As soon as he does, he sees 2 women looking at him intensely. Little by little, he comes to the realization that he is back in reality, although everything feels like just a long dream. In truth, he is not Kaysen, but Cheol Ho Kang. a 30-year-old unemployed man. It takes a moment for it to fully sink in, but as soon as it does, he is terrified. It's strange because he didn't fight and he didn't lose, so why is he back? Looking at the women, he wonders if he failed, which seems odd since the mission had only just begun. The short-haired girl tries to calm him, but to him, it feels as if someone just cut the power at a PC bang. The president then tells him that this was just a save point. Since he has no knowledge of what that is, he is a little suspicious. The president explains that the mission is very long and that he must rest for a while. She doesn't want his body to start failing, so they will all talk in the office. She explains that a mission is only cancelled under special circumstances, and also observes that he is not a high enough level for missions of this size. Once in the office, he wants her to explain more about the save point, since the woman mentioned it when he returned. The woman explains that the risk and danger he went through are still the same. He questions this, saying he is not hurt or tired enough to want to rest. She then tells him that thinking too much as Cheol Ho Kang has overloaded his mind. And it seems to be true, because when she says this, his mind begins to falter in a way. She continues, saying that it is not normal for him to be at level 4 and for his body to still feel pain. Although they don't say it, it feels as if his head is going to break in half. It is all because of Casein's past, which is too heavy, and that is why he is so desperate and depressed. In this way, at the beginning, he cannot think of it as a game, but as a once-in-a-lifetime mission in another dimension. Then, Seon Hee-woo reveals that he, just like the character, is in danger. The reason is that Janice has begun to suspect him, and she fears that everything about the organization could be discovered. He realizes they are right. Right before the teleport, Janice corners him, clearly curious about something. Pulling him out through a shortcut makes perfect sense now. Everything points to one conclusion. Cheol Ho understands Janice is suspicious, likely guessing he is a dimensional traveler instead of a regular citizen. The president sits in a delicate position and cannot explain everything. She tells him to stay quiet, already knowing his thoughts. She points out his highly unusual and unstable style, something that shocks even her team. He shows flashes of brilliant intelligence, then turns around and makes absurd mistakes. He admits his error. He spoke too openly about contractors and dimensional travelers, pushing the director into a tough dilemma. The protagonist notices her frustration and asks if this situation is the only reason. Seon Hee grows irritated. He reads situations too easily. The exact skill that lets him execute perfect mission clears. He tries to justify his results as a product of his curiosity. He explains his need to level up fast, since level 10 unlocks more information. She asks him to stop causing disasters. He only promises to try. The truth remains simple. He is far too stubborn, a player operating purely on his own logic and style. While they talk, his in-game character sits in serious trouble thanks to his reckless choices. The director explains that if things get that dangerous again, they will just pull him to safety. He asks if he can continue the mission. She confirms, stating they have no other options. She checks her computer and announces some good news. Permission is granted. She clarifies it is too early to hand over classified intel, but he needs certain knowledge to prevent Janice from blindsiding him. She hands him a file titled The Myth of Other Dimensional Worlds. This document exists solely to help him answer Janice's questions, covering for his character's limited ability to reveal the past. Reading the file, he uncovers the history of the evil goddess Hel. He finally understands why Janice asked about selling his soul to her. He needs to absorb this information to shake off the suspicion. Some details can wait, but the next page is crucial. It describes the goddess Hel as reckless and overwhelming, an entity obsessed with breaking rules. The absolute law of that dimension enforces strict principles of cause and effect. Hel stands as the exact opposite, branded an evil goddess who also contracts souls for the underworld. The director hits him with a question. If contracting souls makes the goddess evil, does that make their organization evil too? He knows these people never hurt him. Instead, they operate as his financial saviors. She continues, stating the afterlife matters because the soul holds the highest value, but fixating on it leads to despair, making the intense effort to protect it completely contradictory. The protagonist refuses to listen any further. He feels the temptation and shuts down any chance of being manipulated. His way of speaking only draws more of her attention. His constant need for help exhausts her, yet she keeps praising him with bizarre comparisons, even calling him a fried octopus. Suddenly, without thinking, he asks the director out to eat. He snaps back to reality a second later. She smiles, pointing out that single men with no experience are all the same. She suggests he goes home to clear his exhausted mind. He realizes he started the mission in the morning, and it is already the middle of the night. Time moves incredibly fast in that dimension. Even though the task remains incomplete, the director asks what he plans to do with the money. She explains Casein's mission is long-term. He can take the payout at the end, or take a cut right now. He immediately asks if splitting the payment changes the total amount. He catches the real reason behind the offer. He might not survive long enough to see the final payout. He knows he is not invincible, so he has to factor in failure. This realization sparks an idea. He slams his hands on the table and states he wants the $1.5 million reward in a different format. The director finds it interesting that he wants something other than cash. He specifies his terms. On top of the money, he wants the exact potion Janice used on his companions. The moment she hears his demand, her eyes go wide with absolute shock. The woman recovers from her shock and explains that the item is forbidden. He cannot bring it into this dimension. The news crushes him. He remembers how that same medicine healed his fractured skull, just as it healed Quibble and Mortem. She continues, stating the potion is an elixir that doesn't exist in their world, unlike simple gold coins. It's a matter of balance, but the protagonist cannot understand this logic. The woman warns him not to let his feelings cloud the negotiation. His motive for wanting the elixir is obvious: to save his mother. He knows they read minds, but feels she strikes a raw nerve. He tries to calm himself, thinking his information should be private, but then he remembers he never even provided his bank account number. He concludes they can access any information they desire. After all, they are nothing more than merchants who sell souls. She explains the prohibition is part of a rigorous security system. An item that can cure cancer or grant immortality would attract the world's most powerful people, like corporate CEOs. The rich and powerful could live forever, becoming absolute monarchs, perhaps even gods. The protagonist realizes this would create a terribly unjust world. He finally understands why the item is forbidden at every level, and that no matter how high he climbs, he will never obtain it. However, the woman reveals there is another way for him, another cure. At this sliver of hope, his eyes widen in desperation. She explains that a safe healing potion exists, and because his mother's illness is not terminal, the process is easier. There's just one problem. The potion is restricted to high-level players. The potion can only be obtained when he reaches levels 25 and 50, and it can only be used on a family member. The woman notes his talent for understanding things quickly and urges him to endure and work hard. She adds that with a high enough level, he can also discover his true name. He knows she is still hiding most of the game, but he feels they are giving him the most critical information. Because of this, he decides he can trust them a little more. Even without getting everything he wants, he thanks her. This satisfies the woman. After all, this is just a transaction. He reflects on how he has begged both heaven and hell through tears, but in the end, these people are just merchants who sell souls. Back at the hospital, he once again confronts his cruel and miserable reality. Seeing his mother in her bed, he remembers giving up on everything. Now, the return of hope is terrifying. He recalls drowning in debt and considering giving up on her, believing that the attempt to save her would destroy his family. At that time, he even thought it might have been better for everyone to just let her go. Now in tears, he silently begs his mother to wait just a little longer. He feels that this time it will not take so long, and he is determined to make it happen. He researches online until exhaustion sets in. He studies everything he can to deceive Janice, but finds the lore fascinating, especially the section on the evil goddess Hel. He theorizes that her laws have combined and expanded, and makes a mental note to increase his computer's security. The moment he leaves his room, his sister ambushes him with questions about where he is going. He says he is going to work, but to avoid suspicion, he calls it a business trip. Her questions persist until he shuts her down by reminding her that he is the company president. Still, she demands a minute of his time, and he irritably asks what she is complaining about now. Her complaint is simple. If he is the president, he should not be dressed like a homeless person. She points out all his flaws, arguing that while he does not need to be extravagant, he should not look pathetic either. She demands more of his attention and makes him promise to spend more time with her. Satisfied, she flops onto the sofa and wishes him luck. All he can think about is his desperate need for cash. He calls out her name and smiles, promising to make a lot of money. He arrives at the company to continue Kaysane's mission. The secretary says he is free to leave, but when she asks why he is in such a rush, his thoughts drift to his mother. The women immediately read his mind. He forces a smile and claims he just does not like being idle. He knows curing his mother is not impossible. All he needs to do is reach level 50 and obtain the miracle potion. The game itself is not difficult, but he feels the strain after completing the harder missions. Reaching level 50 is one thing, but he also needs to figure out the price of the potion, since he knows the organization is all about profit. The woman, reading his thoughts, tells him not to worry. She explains that while reaching level 50 is hard, obtaining Dharma is easy. His eyes widen as he wonders what Dharma is. When she offers no more information, his mind starts working. He knows karma is an inescapable abyss, so Dharma must be something different. The woman panics, realizing she has said too much. She begs him to keep it a secret and insists he must not tell the president about karma and Dharma. He forgets again that she can read his mind, and his next thought sends her into a full-blown panic. She accuses him of overthinking and deducing things too quickly, then yells that the real problem is that he is right. She scrambles to fix her mistake, but it is too late. He makes a mental note. Her weakness is that she talks too much. The woman explains that his silence alone won't fix the problem. She reveals that if he prepares himself mentally, reading his mind becomes difficult. The trick is to express himself with thoughts instead of words, thinking quickly with only his subconscious. He understands it all comes down to the speed of transmission. This new information triggers a memory. He recalls the last time he saw the president and realizes she read his mind wrong. He He had only thought superficially, which led to her misinterpretation. Now he knows the organization reads minds like a message, and the souls they sell are flawed. Realizing he's no longer at such a disadvantage, he asks if this isn't a trade secret. She confirms she could be fired if the president finds out. She advises him to just train until he reaches level 10, since the organization doesn't use mental probes on formal contractors. Seeing the value of this intel, he agrees to keep her secret. But just then, the woman is terrified. The president is arriving. She scrambles to send him on his mission, desperate to cover her mistake. He notices her desperation to get him out. As his image fades, his thoughts turn to his hospitalized mother, his resolve to cure her hardening. He tells himself to just hold on a little longer. Then, his presence is completely transported to another dimension. Back at the organization, the employee feels a wave of relief now that he's gone. The president, Hee-woo, approaches and asks if the protagonist has left. The employee, Min-hee, recalls her mistake and confirms she followed all orders. Hee-woo comments that the protagonist is smart and will do well, but Min-hee worries her work evaluation is ruined. She thinks it would have been better to just tell him how to handle Genis, but Kesien would never accept that, and Cheol still has doubts about the company. If they believe the protagonist figured everything out on his own, they can trust and use the information. Min-hee says the problem isn't the mission, but his future. Both women agree his cognitive abilities are fast, and he might even develop a special skill. The president then confesses her goal is to give him a skill, which puts the pink-haired employee on the defensive. But Hee-woo argues that great risks equal great rewards. Min-hee understands the greater the danger, the greater the return. The president continues, explaining that if the protagonist hadn't made a mistake at the start, his mission wouldn't be this difficult. As she speaks, she watches a hologram of him. Min-hee is determined to open the connection for Kesien and receives the order to do it safely. The connection is linked, but during the process, a request for intervention comes through. It's hard to believe since he's only level 5. Then they see the user's name. It's the young man with blue eyes. The president growls at the sight of the name Naguk, the insane user. The rules are clear. The player isn't level 10 yet. The request is just to make a reservation, but the president decides to respond herself. Meanwhile, the moment the protagonist teleports, a new skill is added, automatic event search. He immediately notices that his experience points and his level can now decrease. The situation is serious, but he has no time to process it. Someone demands to know what he's muttering. He turns, looks at Burabol, and his eyes go wide. Seeing his reaction, the man grows uneasy and asks if there's something on his face. An exclamation point floats over Burabol's head, and the commander realizes it's just like a game, where he can see quests on NPCs. This is an incredible skill he never expected to get. Burabol explains that recently, the men are more tired and weak, perhaps from not eating enough. This is strange, since they should be the best fed in the city, especially after the Queeble merchants brought so much grain and meat. The man confirms they are eating, but the diet is unbalanced, focused only on meat and bread. Though meat and grains are nutritious, the excess calories could be making the situation worse. So Burabol asks if there is a solution. A side quest appears, and the leader declares he will seek the wisdom of the elders. Burabol finds this strange, as the elderly have no strength. Losing his patience, the commander explains that because they were born and lived their whole lives in Canadium, the elders know how to distinguish poisonous plants from edible ones. Understanding the logic, Burabol suggests he look for Hadel, an herb gardener. As soon as the suggestion is made, the side quest is completed, and the commander gains 5% experience. He cracks a smile, having found the solution to his level loss. From that moment on, whenever he sees a soldier with an exclamation point on his head, he approaches to help. After giving one of them a quick solution, he receives another reward of 0.5% experience. He realizes that every time he helps someone with those marks, he gains a certain percentage. Young Pal's mission continues like a game, but now he can see the exclamation points immediately. The people with these marks have quests both large and small, which explains the variation in experience gains. There are over 2,000 citizens in Canadium, and this new ability becomes a way to support them all. The soldiers become agitated, always seeking out the commander and greeting him with enthusiasm. His eyes shine as he sees the citizens filled with hope again. However, a trade route is still missing, and for that, he decides to find the epic hero. He searches for information on Genis, a 20-year-old with the mental age of 60. Looking at the file, the commander wonders why Genis was removed from his position. He also notices the affection rate, once at 25, has plummeted to 10. Just as he is thinking about the hero, Genis suddenly appears. His eyes go wide at the sight of the bizarre figure, completely covered in ice. The young man tells him not to be so loud and explains the filth is not his own, but from the orcs. Curious, the commander asks how many orcs he fought. After hearing the report, he asks for a moment to think. The protagonist looks into the young man's eyes and sees no trace of resentment. He knows that to capture a tiger, one must enter its den. With that in mind, he begins to speak, declaring that the two of them need to have a serious talk. Janice leads the way upstairs as the protagonist follows, trying to figure out the problem. Once inside, Janice announces he has some questions. The protagonist feels no fear, having expected this. He gives a smooth answer, explaining that the church has extensive records on travelers and that he is a servant of the goddess of liberty. To prove it, he makes a gesture he learned in the real world, claiming he has followed her for 2 years. The questions continue. His position in the church, then the power he received. He claims his power is a secret. Janice presses him, asking why a 2-year veteran of the faith is not surprised by the story of fighting 100 orcs. The protagonist realizes his mistake. A feat like that requires 150 soldiers. He knows he can defeat 500, but that is a secret, so he lies, claiming he heard the story from someone else. Immediately, the system warns him. Janice's affection is decreasing. Janice then says the word 3, and the protagonist understands the terrible truth. It is the number of lies he has told. Janice knows. The next question is dangerous. Janice wants to know why he is in Canadium. Fearing Janice can read his mind, he uses his superficial consciousness to calm himself. The truth is that Cassine is not from Canadium, despite having been there for 12 years. With red eyes, Janice seems to search for the truth. Once he has it, he calms slightly, advising the protagonist to stay on the path of truth, confirming his worst suspicions. The next question, is he talking to someone else? Realizing he has been watched all along, he gives vague answers. He remembers the director's warning about the save point, but his hesitation is his 4th infraction. With a strange expression, Janice declares he is done trying to solve things with words. He prepares to attack, clenching his fist and landing a devastating punch. The blow is so powerful that every muscle in Cassine's body screams with continuous damage. Janice advances, looking down at him with enraged eyes. Cassine demands to know why he is being attacked, and Janice furiously states it is for the 4 lies. Janice strikes him again, announcing the real interrogation is starting now. Every punch feels like a piece of his skeleton is shattering, and Janice has no intention of stopping. The barrage is agonizing. Finally, a defeated Cassine starts to cough. He sees the bones he used to defend himself are completely damaged, broken like thin glass. The pain promises to last for 4 hours. Janice looks down at him, remarking that an elixir would be best, but it is too expensive. He adds that a healing potion would make most of the wounds disappear, the very thing the protagonist wanted all along. Grabbing Cassine's mouth, Janice asks what he is staring at. He grants absolution for his inability to control his skills, promising he will not take his life, but he makes it clear that by the end, Cassine will wish for death. Everything is now clear. He faces 4 long hours with this person. It is as if fate is screaming with laughter, and so the ordeal continues for 4 hours. He descends the stairs alone, lost in thought, but a single pebble is enough to make him trip. He collapses in immense pain, realizing it's not just the injury, but a new, crippling fear of everything. He knows he wouldn't have survived without Uribaldo's help. Janice understands perfectly how to leave a person weak, in pain, and unable to use their own judgment. He remembers hearing an inner voice speak to him, and the memory is startling, especially because Janice was prepared to inflict even more pain. In that moment, he screamed for the man to stay away. The voice then asked him to surrender control of his body, promising it was the only way to endure. Reflecting on everything that happened, he concludes that without Uribaldo, he would not have made it. He then remembers his friend and asks if he is okay. Thanks to the potion, both are physically recovered, but they remain mentally damaged. The grand healing potion is truly a magic as effective as medicine. It isn't long before he finds Zapiro, who also has that small dot on his head. Zapiro immediately notices from Cassine's appearance that something is wrong, but Cassine cannot tell him what happened. Instead, he changes the subject and asks what the problem is. Zapiro begins talking about the city and the insecurity of the last few days, which activates a seemingly lucrative side quest. Everything seems surrounded by misunderstandings and threatening glares, and what Zapiro describes sounds very familiar, reminding him of his own father. He continues to listen as the man asks if he has a solution for the anxiety gripping Canaduim, especially with the city isolated. It is a certainty that anxiety makes people violent and uncontrollable. When they are about to starve, they think only of survival. Now, it seems that focus is turning toward a dark future. Zapiro thinks the problem is the large number of unemployed people, since without work, they have time to think about useless things. With just a few words, the side quest is completed, but a new one is added. Help the unemployed, a very complicated problem. Cassine thinks a large-scale construction project could be an easy solution, but quickly dismisses the idea, as they have no money. While he reflects, another person with a dot on their head approaches him. Looking at Quibble, he wonders why everyone here seems to have a quest. Quibble also comments that the commander does not look well, but Cassine deflects the question by asking another. The man then apologizes, saying he caused many problems the first time, and now needs to ask for some advice. Quibble explains that Janice gave him a horrible task, find a new way to obtain 3 times more food than the last time. The protagonist does not understand, since the caravan Quibble brought was already massive. Even counting children, women, and the elderly, the food purchased was enough for 3 months. Quibble says Genis threw him out and told him to find Cassine if he failed. The problem is that he has already spoken with Cassine, and the experience was far more traumatic than it should have been, but he will not mention that to anyone. In the middle of the conversation, a medium-level quest activates. Cassine notices that Quibble seems to already know the answer, yet still questions him with great intensity. He is unsure why Genis would send Quibble to do this, knowing he is a merchant who measures the value of everything, even people. Thinking he could gain some points with him by giving the right answer, Cassine walks and points to one side. He explains that the place has a lot of old buildings, and if they relocate the people and destroy everything, they will have a large portion of empty land. At first, the man does not understand why he is talking about an empty plot. Cassine then explains that they need a plantation to grow vegetables and raise animals inside the wall. That answer seems quite innovative to Quibble, who realizes Genis must want everyone to become self-sufficient in agriculture. Once again, Cassine manages to leave the man speechless. The commander knows this is the obvious solution, and also tells Quibble that he understands this is all just a test. The man confesses that it is a test, and that the mission is very important. He then opens the sack he has been holding the entire time, and Cassine's eyes widen at the light coming from a bag full of precious items. The bag is overflowing with precious stones, leaving the protagonist speechless. Quibble sees this and thinks Kazin is human after all. These are the resources Genis provided to secure food, and Kazin immediately realizes the enormous gems must be from the dragon he killed. Quibble admits he never imagined handling so much wealth, but he urgently needs advice on where to lead the caravan. This isn't a test. Quibble genuinely doesn't know what to do. Kazin realizes the problem is real and asks for the details. The man explains the issue is the long distance and travel time. A 2-month round trip is far too long, especially with their slow wagons. Just then, a new mission appears for Kazin, offering a trade route as a reward. He now understands Genis has 2 trade routes, a puzzle even for a dragon slayer. The mystery slowly begins to unravel. The merchant says the caravan leaves tomorrow morning, telling Kazin to find him if he comes up with a solution. But the protagonist is exhausted, his mental energy completely drained. He needs to eat and sleep, but someone else is already waiting for him. He sees the person and the exclamation point above their head, his face twisting into a strange expression. The man acknowledges the bad timing, but explains he traveled a long way just for this conversation, so it would be cruel to send him away. Once again, Kazin is asked about his health, a question everyone seems to be asking today. The man, Mordum, explains he lacks experience and is facing a problem. He wanted to talk sooner, but saw Kazin busy helping others and didn't want to interrupt. The protagonist realizes he's been distracted by minor events, neglecting the 3 most important figures for the mission, Zapiro, Quibble, and Mordum. Mordum says he has delayed as long as possible, but now he's out of time and needs to ask a direct question about Kazin's opinion of Genis. As Mordum speaks, a medium-grade mission activates. He explains that while he follows Genis's orders, he doesn't consider him his lord because his loyalty is to the merchant. Kazin offers his opinion, but Mordum reacts badly, questioning if the protagonist believes loyalty is something to be negotiated. He is completely against this and says Kazin is not acting like the man he's heard about. The protagonist takes a deep breath, composing himself to get back into character as Mordum demands an explanation. Kazin draws his sword. He explains that when he became a knight, he never swore loyalty to Lord Canadium. He had a general, but his heart belonged to someone more honorable, the citizens of Canadium, whom he was sworn to protect. This speech activates the sympathy skill. Despite the powerful words, Mordum just turns away, calling the conversation complicated. He sadly reveals that his father and grandfather were knights, a path he was unable to follow. Kazin tells him that now, he has the chance to fulfill that desire. The mercenary leader clarifies that Genis isn't a bad master, but he wants to serve someone who truly inspires his loyalty. Kazin proposes a solution. Mordum should observe Genis up close. The problem is, Kazin has no idea how to make them interact. Mordum likes the idea, but says it's impossible. He reveals he is leaving the city tomorrow, and he may never come back. Hearing this, the protagonist is completely thrown. Later, as he lies down to sleep, Kazin's mind races, trying to find a way to fix the situation. He considers that Mordum's visit might be a system warning about his critical importance, but Quibble is also crucial, and his caravan needs strong security. According to Burabal, the only truly skilled mercenary available is Mordum. Lost in these thoughts, he drifts off to sleep without even realizing it. He wakes from a strange dream, still thinking, intrigued by a familiar voice. He remembers searching for a solution right before falling asleep. In front of the map, he analyzes the surroundings of the neighboring city until his eyes land on a specific name, the city of Hurdle, just a week's journey away. He then recalls where he heard that name, remembering a teleportation scroll and the conversation they had about the city. With this memory, a brilliant idea forms in his mind. With no time to waste, he realizes he needs the scroll to transport a single person. The plan already formed, Kazin runs to share his idea before the caravan departs. Meanwhile, at the meeting point, Quibble and Mordum are already waiting. They are startled to see Kenshin running desperately toward them, his clothes a mess, as if he was in such a rush he didn't even have time to dress properly. Ignoring all formality, Kenshin gets straight to the point, asking if Quibel knows how to ride a horse. The merchant finds the question foolish, and the ones that follow are just as irritating. However, he realizes Kenshin is completely serious and wants to know what this is all about. Understanding that time is short, Quibel focuses on just answering. Greatly irritated, the merchant confirms that he knows how to ride a horse and how to select trustworthy people. This is a great relief for the protagonist. He immediately tells everyone to stop moving and announces that no one is leaving the city. Mordum is the first to find the situation strange. Quibel, however, cracks a smile, realizing Kenshin has a solution and is willing to bear the responsibility. Seeing that he seems to have it all planned, Quibel decides to leave things in Mordum's care while he is away and asks what brilliant idea Kenshin has this time. The matter is too delicate to discuss in the open, so it isn't long before the two are meeting with Zapiro. They are there to negotiate as the order for the caravan to depart has already been given. Kenshin explains that he remembered the teleportation scroll. Zapiro confirms he has it, but points out its usage limits. It is clarified that only one person will go, and that this person has a large amount of money. Still smiling, Quibel remarks that a merchant with money is like a well-armed mercenary. Kenshin begins writing on a board to explain the plan. The merchant will use the scroll to teleport near the city of Hurdle, arriving in the Great Northern Plains. Zapiro immediately warns that he doesn't want to waste the scroll and asks if this has any real purpose. After all, only a week remains. But Kenshin explains his plan will reduce the caravan's total time to just 3 days, which would be extremely useful. Kenshin continues his explanation. In practice, things could vary, but Hurdle is not a city isolated by monsters. He states they don't need to buy all the food from there, just find good locations for quick deals. Actions like negotiating prices or looking for damaged goods must be skipped. His suggestion to buy large animals and grains, which are more expensive, leaves the other two perplexed. Kenshin knows this is like making a huge bet with a lot of money, and that neither of them is prepared for it. Even so, he tries to explain that profit is not the most important thing for this caravan, time is. He asks the merchant to imagine he holds a contract that only yields profit if completed on time. For this reason, it doesn't matter if they are merchants or mercenaries. They must offer whatever it takes to hire the best candidates. Kenshin adds that they can even offer an advance payment, as he doesn't care about the normal restrictions of a contract. As he listens, Quibel realizes a caravan with a lighter load would indeed be faster. Smiling, he says he can make the plan work, and that it will take a little over 15 days. The time frame isn't bad, but Kenshin believes they can reduce it even further. This statement makes the other two anxious again, one of them asking what kind of magic he intends to use. The explanation follows, revealing that the new problem is transportation and passage through cities. Kenshin explains that it's not a problem of speed, but of processing. The city lords always stop caravans passing through their lands for inspection. They do this to prevent provisions like medicine and food from reaching enemy troops, a point the merchant seems to agree with. With a sharp gaze, Kenshin then points out that the people responsible for this check are usually just a low-ranking knight and a common soldier. After saying this, he pulls something from his pocket that terrifies even the old Zapiro. The situation gets even worse when Kenshin uses what appears to be the seal of the Lord of Canadium. The act drives the other two mad, as it is clearly a crime. Faced with their reaction, the protagonist once again just gives a slight smile. Despite Zapiro's dislike for Kenshin's attitude, it is already too late. The scroll bearing the Lord of Canadium's seal is used. The older man wears a look of clear disapproval, but Kenshin notices his discontent and tells him not to worry, as it is all over. Zapiro makes it clear that a report is necessary. This is an official aid document, a request for food from the Lord. The idea is that by showing the document, the guards will let Quibel's caravan pass without any trouble. The great problem is that the official document, bearing the false signature of Gauss Kenadal, will also be sent through high-ranking routes. The protagonist tries to calm Zapiro, arguing that this is irrelevant as long as they overcome their current difficulty. Smiling, she says he should see this as the best year because he has saved 2,000 people. Zapiro, however, is not sure the merchant will succeed. Knowing more lords in the region, he thinks he should have gone himself. Perceiving Kenshin's disagreement, Zapiro thinks perhaps she doubts his ability. Kenshin clarifies that it is nothing of the sort. The merchant is simply the best person for the job, and the city cannot function without Zapiro. She then changes the subject, claiming to have found a solution for the unemployed. Approaching the window, she asks him to look outside, explaining that when the merchant returns with the caravan, they will have a large farm. The plan is to destroy the deserted houses on the east side and prepare the soil for cultivation. Zapiro, a wise man, observes that if the work were construction, the process would be much faster. completable in 50 days. The protagonist smiles and replies that this way, she can create more jobs whenever she needs to. She asserts that all jobs have a similar value, especially with the city surrounded by monsters. Later, all the people are gathered for a meeting with the leaders, and many begin to beg the commander for any job other than that one. Observing from a distance, the protagonist notes that the general concern is due to the work's proximity to the castle walls. A citizen mentions hearing about a job near the east side of the city. Even when it is explained to be manual labor for less pay, there is still interest. Cassine points to the horizon and explains that they do not need to worry. They should notice the people approaching on horseback. Those riders will alert them if orcs appear, so they can work in peace. Soon after, orders begin to be distributed to all the citizens. Wagons and carts are prepared with tools for the work. Since the merchant is traveling alone, all his horses and carts are available. The people are quickly separated into groups. Some are to dig the soil around the castle walls and remove the earth with wheelbarrows. It is a large-scale construction involving 500 people to dig a moat. Orders are given constantly, and the workers obey without hesitation. Zapiro is impressed. He never imagined there would be jobs, and now they are being created with great ease. He also recognizes the importance of the moat, which makes defense much easier. Since ancient times, moats are as defensive as walls, as the bodies of water prevent enemies from approaching. It is a better strategy than just protecting the walls with soldiers, as it reduces the number of battles they will have to face. Whenever a group encounters difficulties, the problem is reported to the commander, who immediately proposes an alternative. The requests and complaints do not stop, but there is always a next group ready to provide support. They need more tools for the construction. Although there are many unemployed people, it is necessary to deliver tools to all of them for the labor to be effective. Looking at everything from a distance, Cassine is satisfied, as everything is going perfectly well. A 30-minute rest is announced at the exact moment everyone is exhausted. From the workers' expressions, they no longer seem worried about that morning's problems. The same mind that moves the body is also dominated by it, so no matter their worries, no one can think of anything with a body tired from work. The payment for that day is special, as one of the maids brings the same food that is provided to the defensive force. As soon as the workers notice they will eat dried meat, they become euphoric. Some celebrate because after months they can finally eat some meat. Zapiro realizes that everything has worked out. He is satisfied to see them become as meek as lambs just because of the food. For him, after everything they have been through, this proves they have finally found a place where they belong. Zapiro watches the workers eat, noting it's the first time commoners have ever received meat as a special meal. He proudly declares that Genis is the one gifting them this food, telling them to eat and be grateful to the guardian of Canadium. The crowd hangs on his every word, concluding they are safe and well only because of their lord. But to the protagonist, this propaganda feels strangely timed, and he wonders what Zapiro is truly thinking. A notification suddenly arrives. The mission is complete. The number of employed and hopeful citizens increases, and he gains a new skill related to time acceleration, though he must read its description later. The protagonist feels a surge of satisfaction for raising an army and solving the city's unemployment. After all, they never would have survived without the food Genis and the merchants brought just in time. Just then, an exclamation point appears over the head of the person beside him, signaling a new mission. They begin to talk about Genis. Genis appears out of nowhere, startling Cassine. Instinct takes over and his body jerks away. Even with positive thoughts in his mind, his body overreacts to the man's voice. The situation is about to get difficult because Genis wants to speak with the commander. They move to a more private area where Genis acknowledges Cassine's skills but immediately points out a problem. He explains that a talented but untrustworthy person is as dangerous as any enemy. He then turns to the commander, asking if his opinion of Cassine has changed. Genis insists on knowing what Cassine is hiding. The protagonist is terrified, explaining that he wants to tell him but is bound by a restriction. He believes that if he could just reveal everything, he could calm Genis and de-escalate the situation. But the Guardian's eyes are crazed as he demands the whole truth. Cassine tries to remain calm, repeating that he would have already explained everything if not for the restriction. He decides the only thing he can say to earn his trust is to mention the goddess of hell, freedom, and reward. He explains that if he breaks his promise to Hell, or to his contractor, he will lose what is most important to him. Cassine confidently tells Genis to trust him, just as he trusts the 2,000 citizens he values so much. At that moment, his special skill, eloquence, activates, hoping it will work on the man. But something unexpected happens. His ability is instantly nullified by another skill called isolation. The moment it fails, Genis, who is already on the edge, completely snaps. The reason is simple. He was controlled for a long time in the past, and manipulative skills like that no longer work on him. The situation becomes critical. Genis's affection, already minimal, plummets into the negative, turning them into enemies. Before, Genis only wanted to teach Casein a lesson. Now, he has a new purpose: to end the imposter's life. The protagonist tries to defend himself, insisting he cannot speak, but nothing stops Genis, who seems to have some kind of built-in lie detector. The combination of the perceived lie and the failure of eloquence makes it feel like the end is near. Casein is stunned when Genis asks what kind of dragon he is collaborating with. Seeing the protagonist's confusion, Genis reconsiders, thinking it might be a demon instead. Forced to be honest, Casein reveals his contract is with a human named Uribaldo. This only makes things worse, as he just claimed to have a contract with hell. Casein tries to explain it's a different contract, one that has nothing to do with the goddesses. He argues that a person can have multiple valid contracts with different people at the same time. Realizing the situation is spiraling, Casein decides to tell Genis everything he knows, or at least what he can deduce. Based on Genis's personality, he takes a guess. The Guardian was controlled by a dragon in the past. The words drive his opponent into a frenzy, making it clear that nothing good can come from this. Completely unhinged, Genis focuses all his hatred for dragons onto the man standing before him. It turns out Genis was once a dragon's guardian himself, only to be betrayed, eliminated, and have his gold stolen by the one he trusted most. Casein speculates that such a horrific experience must have radically changed his personality, or perhaps the dragon forced him to kill people. Genis is at his breaking point and demands Casein's silence, but the protagonist persists. He argues that if Genis suspects him just for having a secret, it implies Genis himself has none. He shouts the question, isn't being forced to reveal secrets the exact same thing the dragon he hates so much did to him? Absolutely deranged, the man screams for him to shut up as he prepares an attack. This time, it will not be a warning. It will be final. An intense fireball erupts, and looking down, Casein sees a gaping, ruined hole in his abdomen. His body slams into the ground once more. He feels his life draining away in his final moments, believing it's not supposed to end like this. But then, a green flash appears, and he starts to feel a little better. Even with his eyes closed, he hears Genis arguing with a blonde woman. As the healing magic knits him back together on the ground, his mind remains sharp. He realizes the woman must have been watching the entire time, meaning she commands not only healing magic, but stealth as well. His mind is suddenly transported to another place, where a familiar voice urges him to be bold. Uribaldo appears, admitting he felt a flicker of fear. The protagonist struggles with the idea that even the bravest knight was afraid of Genis's power. Uribaldo explains that the pressure was so intense, he found himself unconsciously backing away. Hearing that Uribaldo felt weak, the protagonist realizes his presence was more of a hindrance than a help. He now understands that Genis possesses an isolation power that cancels eloquence, the real reason his words failed to connect. The one moment Genis seemed moved was only because of a perfect storm: Casein's coercion, Cheol Hokang's eloquence, and Uribaldo's confidence, all firing at once. This forced combination left the protagonist fighting without his usual conviction, relying solely on his own eloquence and coercion. He understands that Uribaldo took a severe punishment from Genis in his place, and that the situation was impossible for anyone to overcome. He accepts his failure calmly, blaming no one, and comes to the painful conclusion that his special words are not always absolute. Uribaldo notes this lack of blame is part of his character, but insists that he has not failed, nor has he been eliminated from the mission. The statement is so shocking that the protagonist's eyes snap open. He is lying down and realizes the fatal wound that destroyed his internal organs is completely gone. There isn't even a scar. A sweet voice asks if he is awake. It's the blonde elf, standing before him, the same one he remembers seeing just before he blacked out. He immediately thanks her for the healing and apologizes for the trouble he caused. The woman looks at him with admiration, explaining that the fault was, in a way, her own. As he listens, he notes that even an arrogant man like Genis argues with this elf as an equal. She tells him she found something interesting about him. He asks if she means the way a human acts so rudely toward a dragon slayer. The elf smiles, admitting she was just casting a line for him to bite. He counters, asking if the priestess has figured everything out. His words have an immediate effect, and he realizes she is referring to the question of whether or not he serves a god. The elf assumes he is about to apologize and ask Genis to explain everything. But while still sitting, the protagonist confirms her suspicions are correct. He does possess similar powers, and she shouldn't be so quick to judge. He points out that she initially wanted to intervene, but decided it was too problematic and chose to observe instead. He explains that he left her several clues. Realizing she's fallen into his trap, the elf demands he prove his claims. This is the perfect opportunity to prove the truth. He gets to his feet, declaring that if she wants proof, he will give it to her, and clenches his fist. With a valid reason to use his power, he connects to his source. He clenches his fist again, releasing a small portion of energy. He calls on Strobon, borrowing a piece of his dark and negative power. Fragments of that power begin to manifest, swirling in the air around him, as even the color of his eyes begins to shift. The concentration of power is immense, and the elf feels it, but the energy isn't fully released as Casein imagines. Still, it's enough for her to identify the power as pure darkness. something she has never witnessed before. The skill doesn't activate as planned, but Cassine is satisfied as he avoids spending the thousands of dollars the full ability would cost. Realizing her mistake, the elf apologizes for the trouble she caused, but then shifts the blame, claiming things only escalated because he mentioned the dragon. Cassine recognizes the apology for what it is, an accusation. The elf explains that he eliminated someone important, the woman Janice loved. This was all the result of mental manipulation and brainwashing, which created a deep-seated grudge and explains Janice's twisted heart and his need for control. She reveals the dragon's name is Duenas, but eliminating a dragon is not like killing a person. Dragons can revive as long as a single part of them remains intact. If it revives, the dragon will seek revenge, which is why Janice frantically hunts for any remaining trace of it. As they speak of him, Janice himself enters the room. He states that suspicion is a poison that controls the mind more than any other affliction. The protagonist repeats that restrictions prevent him from revealing everything, but he will share what he can. Janice tells him it's unnecessary, but Cassine insists. He reveals his past as a mercenary and a knight, explaining that his family was slaughtered by a guild master he trusted like a father, a noble lord who eliminated them without mercy. Hearing this, Janice concludes Cassine is a reincarnator. Cassine continues, stating he understands betrayal intimately, and they should speak no more of past grievances. The idea sticks in Janice's mind, but Cassine cannot confirm it due to his restrictions. To the elf, the theory makes perfect sense, as the goddess operates in mysterious ways. At this moment, the player's special eloquence skill and his character's trust skill are both fully active. He never expected this outcome, but after great difficulty, he is finally beginning to earn Janice's trust. Janice acknowledges the effort Cassine makes to be honest, despite the danger to himself, and it gives him pause. He decides to open up as well, revealing the dragon was a tyrant, one of the worst in history. While under its control, Janice lived a terrible life, continuously trained to be a disciplined killer. For that reason, he will hunt the dragon down and reduce it to nothing every single time it dares to reincarnate. With their issues resolved, a large meal is served. A huge plate of meat is set before the elf, who has already eaten so much that a pile of bones is forming behind her. Cassine is shocked to see a carnivorous elf, and everything he knows about fantasy shatters. Janice sees his confusion and explains she is no common elf, but one of the shadows. He warns Cassine not to be deceived by her appearance, as she is not a nature-loving elf. This becomes undeniable when she, while chewing her meat, claims she does love nature, just in a different way. Just then, a servant bursts in, screaming for his master and gasping for breath. The protagonist notes this servant is always overly desperate. Perhaps that is his only purpose. This time, the problem is massive. Orcs are attacking. The news makes the protagonist's heart pound, and his eyes go wide. The elf looks to Janice, asking if she should bring the trio's newest member. Janice orders her to take him with her, as fast as she can. The moment the words leave his mouth, Janice is gone, moving so fast the servant barely sees him leave. The elf then tells Cassine to give her his hand so they can perform a jump. She grips his hand and starts to run. To the servant, it's as if they simply vanish. The skill is shadow jump, and the servant is stunned by their impossible speed. The jump is extraordinary, and in an instant, they land on a rooftop. From there, Cassine sees the castle wall, realizing they are over a kilometer from the house. The elf tells him not to be too impressed. This is merely the power of her race. All of that is forgotten when Janice's voice echoes from the distance. Cassine forces his gaze toward the source of the screams. Panic erupts at the imminent orc attack, leaving the workers digging around the castle completely defenseless. Running through the crowd is a dangerous struggle, and anyone who falls risks being trampled. One worker collapses to the ground, trembling in fear, and can only cover his eyes and ears. From above, the protagonist watches the total panic of the escape. Knowing what is about to happen, the elf tells the young men to prepare themselves, explaining that their friend is about to go berserk again. Moments later, a thunderous scream rips through the air, catching the protagonist by surprise and forcing him to clamp his hands over his ears. He recognizes the terrifying energy Janice emanates when possessed, an overwhelming power that dragons use for defense. The scream is brief, but the pain in his ears makes it feel much longer. Looking down, he sees the action had a positive result. The workers are now contained. The elf explains that the power of a dragon's protector is immense, and that the dragon also wields great power over its ward. This same dragon once ruled an entire village and made everyone perish, forcing parents and children to fight each other for its amusement. In the end, only one was meant to survive, and surprisingly, it was a young girl. Despite her weakness, the girl survived, and the dragon made Janice care for her, hoping he would grow fond of the young woman. As expected, Janice, who was alone in the world, and the girl who had lost her entire family, began to care for one another. As soon as that happened, the dragon ordered its subordinate to eliminate the girl, and Janice tried to resist the mental control with all his might. At that point in the story, Cassine says he understands and tells the elf she does not need to finish. He now comprehends the man's pain. Janice has money, strength, youth, and authority, but none of it brings him happiness. If he continues like this, he will be just like Straybomb, never finding happiness. After that pause and the imposing scream, the people are more easily controlled. The evacuation begins, and despite some initial turmoil, a few knights manage to maintain order. Cassine notes that thanks to the quick thinking of Mordum and Burabal, the citizens are being evacuated successfully. Unable to see the orcs, he asks the elf if she can spot them. She not only confirms, but points to a distant dust cloud, estimating there are about 300 of them, and guessing that Tarok is plotting something. As the dust cloud rapidly approaches, it becomes clear it is not just orcs, but also desperate people running for their lives. The protagonist is terrified to see humans among them. At that moment, a guard arrives, nearly out of breath. Cassine tells him to calm down and report what the scouts saw. The guard reports that people are fleeing from orcs, and among them are wolf knights. In the shadows, they look like bestial beings, orcs mounted on creatures even more savage than themselves. Cassine realizes that if what Emiel said is true, they are not just 300 riders, but 300 wolf knights, and each one is equivalent to 5 common orcs. This means the enemy force is equivalent to an army of 1,500 orcs, which worries the soldiers. To make matters worse, one of them has a red face and looks like a beastly apparition, even more terrifying than the others. That being is the Orc Lord. With the Lord's presence, the total force jumps to the equivalent of 4,500 orcs, against Canadium's army of just 500. Despite the numbers, Cassine tries to think as positively as possible. His concentration is broken by the appearance of Genis, who materializes face to face with the Orc Lord at an incredible speed. The Lord seems to know the young men well, even greeting them. The two face off, their immense power and hidden intentions radiating from them. Tarok, the Orc Lord, calls Genis a dog that bit its master's hand. Genis retorts that Tarok himself already holds that position, the true lapdog captivated by Duenas. The Lord still refers to Genis as an old friend, asking if he missed him, or if he is enjoying the present. Genis just continues to watch in silence. Meanwhile, a crowd pounds on the castle gate, begging for their lives. It's a mass of women, children, the elderly, and the wounded. Mordum warns the protagonist they cannot open it, suspecting it's a trap. He believes the orcs herded the people here for a reason. Another soldier agrees, arguing that pity will lead to the city's complete ruin. Deep down, the protagonist knows they are right. To make matters worse, wild orcs and wolves the size of bulls close in. The sight of a mother in the crowd, holding up her baby and begging for its life, tempts anyone with a heart. Many soldiers shed tears at the scene. One of them even tries to open the gate, but his friend quickly stops him. After striking his comrade, the soldier declares they cannot yield to petty emotions. Baring his teeth, he admits he felt pity too, but the city's own citizens come first. He roars that they guaranteed protection to their people and will now eliminate anyone who tries to open the gate. With visceral hatred, he screams that if anyone wants to help the refugees, they can just jump down and join them.